He was once the pinnacle of magic itself, Oscar Sage, master of the White Tower and savior of humanity. But every legend has an end. Now, 20 years later, he awakens in the body of a pathetic apprentice who can hardly conjure a spark. The tower he once commanded is now a crumbling ruin, mocked as the weakest of the four. Yet behind those feeble hands burns the soul of the man who once touched the heavens. He saved the world once. This time, he's here to save magic itself. So, what happens when the weakest mage has the mind of a god? Let's dive in. Somewhere under a starry expanse, on a battlefield drenched in crimson and surrounded by his fallen comrades, sat Oscar Sage. But even he was at his absolute limit, thanks to the sword buried in his chest. He reached out with his magic, desperately calling to the others, asking for a sign if anyone had survived. He pleaded that if they couldn't speak, to just move or make a sound. His words echoed out, but across the sea of red, only silence answered. Not a single soul. Was he truly the last one standing? He glanced at the severed head of his enemy, the one who ran him through, the one who first united the demon hordes, the high priest who had brought humanity to the brink of annihilation. The demons were utterly merciless, sowing chaos and reveling in the slaughter. But when the mages arrived, Oscar, the leader of the Mage Tower, immediately began to turn the tide on the battlefield in the war against the demons from another realm. He and his followers, the mages of the White Tower, put everything on the line for humanity's future. They fought with incredible courage, taking down the enemy leader, but they fell in battle themselves. That's when Edna Sol Laplace, the world's last dragon and the chronicler of history, appeared. She recorded that on this day, April 28th, at 3:12 in the morning, the death of the high priest was officially confirmed. He looked up at her, and she told him she had good news and bad news. He asked her to start with the bad news, and she informed him that, just as he'd feared, a demon army had overrun the White Tower. As a result, most of the mages had perished, and the tower itself was left in ruins. All those mages and priceless research materials were nearly turned to ash. The good news was, the Empire's forces arrived earlier than expected, so they actually managed to rescue some survivors, including his own students. He managed to say he was glad to hear that before a cough racked his body, his hand coming up to his mouth. She then asked if he had any regrets about his choices that day. He told her he didn't. He had handpicked every single one of them personally. Even if he were standing before them, he wouldn't say he regretted a thing. When she asked if he had anything else to add, he just stared thoughtfully at his blood-stained palm. He asked her to watch over his students from time to time. They were still just kids, he said, so he was sure they'd be terrified. She bowed her head to him, a profound sign of respect, and gave him her word. Her gesture actually made him chuckle, and he asked, "A dragon? Bowing its head to a pathetic human?" She replied that he had more than earned that right. Neither the continent, nor she herself would ever forget the sacrifices made by the heroes of the White Tower. He smiled and closed his eyes, saying to let it be. But in truth, he was lying. He did have regrets. He may have been the greatest mage, but he felt he was a terrible leader. If he ever got another shot, he would live only for his people, even if that meant being branded a villain. He took one last look at the sky, thinking that was the life he truly wanted, and then his hand fell limp. Edna gently closed his eyes. On April 28th, at 3:47 in the morning, the death of Oscar Sage, head of the White Magic Tower, was confirmed, a casualty of the Demon War. 132 6th-level mages of the White Tower, 19 7th-level mages, 2 8th-level mages, and the 9th-level archmage, Oscar Sage, were all lost. These historical records were passed down through the decades, and somehow, the White Magic Tower still stood. In one of its rooms, a young man was fast asleep. A single leaf drifted down onto his palm, and he shot awake, jumping up so fast he slammed right into the kid who'd come to check on him. The other boy was so startled that the bowl of water in his hands went flying, after which he complained that he was totally soaked. "I was just trying to change your compress," he whined. "You act so creepy even in your sleep, and you're not even grateful for me taking care of you." Our guy was completely bewildered, wondering if he was still dreaming. In a daze, he placed a hand on his chest, and feeling his own heartbeat, thought, "But, I should be dead." Our MC had woken up in this kid's body, though he hadn't pieced it together yet, and feeling that steady rhythm, he was in total shock. He vividly remembered the high priest running him through with a sword. He tried to ask what was going on, but Maxim crashed into the room, blowing the door clean off its hinges, absolutely furious to find out he was awake. Frank immediately scrambled to calm him down and explained that it had been less than 5 minutes since he'd opened his eyes. Maxim barked at him to get out of the way, saying he'd already let this slide a couple of times, but this time, he was going to beat some sense into the idiot. Frank protested, arguing that he was still recovering, while our MC was just completely baffled. He asked them how he even survived, and they just stared at him in shock. This only pissed Maxim off more, who sneered if he was surprised to be alive too. Our MC noticed that, judging by the man's cape, he was a mage from the White Tower. He demanded an explanation for what was going on and why he was being spoken to with such disrespect. Frank started freaking out, as the MC's words only enraged Maxim further. Maxim yelled, "Do I really need to spell it out for you? You seriously don't get anything? Show some respect and beg for your life." As Maxim swung to strike him, our MC thought, "Is this the assassin the demons mentioned?" He quickly cast a windshield, thinking that if it instantly blocked his hand, the impact would snap his wrist like a twig. He's just a low-level punk, who doesn't think before he acts. But the moment Maxim's hand touched the shield, it vanished, catching our MC completely off guard. Shocked by how weak his magic was, he stared down at his hands, in total confusion. Maxim, on the other hand, actually calmed down after seeing the spell. He praised him, saying it seemed he hadn't been slacking off after all. He then left the room, adding as a parting shot that he'd hold off on the punishment for embezzling research funds for now. He told him to just focus on getting better. Frank said, "Goodbye," then turned to our MC and asked, "Are you completely out of your mind?" He was in shock. "How long was I asleep? If that windshield fizzled out the second he cast it." Frank paced to the other side of the room, saying he knew Maxim was a piece of work, but that he'd gone way too far this time. Our MC wasn't even listening, clenching his fists and realizing his mana circles, capacity, and purity were all at rock bottom. "Is this really my body? What happened to me?" he demanded, asking what day it was. Frank, startled by the sudden urgency, told him it was September 21st and that he'd been out cold. The MC asked, "So, I've been asleep for 5 months." The guy shut the window, telling him it had been a day, tops. And Frank, realizing he wasn't going to get a straight answer out of him, was told to go get Lloyd, and if he wasn't around, to find Juliet or Shasha. Let them tell me what happened. Frank was stunned and thought, is he faking this? Did he really lose his memory? He told our MC to forget about those traitors, and then asked, "Why are you calling the Tower Master by her first name?" Our MC had no idea what traitors he was talking about. Frank asked, "You forgot about that, too? Is this some kind of side effect?" He explained that Lloyd Schultz had abandoned the White Tower and joined the Red Tower, and that Gilead Dominic stole a high-level magic tome and skipped town. Our MC was furious, demanding in a low voice, "How dare you spout such nonsense?" Frank just stared at him, completely floored. He thought in amazement, not a single muscle on his face moved, so he wasn't lying. The MC then asked, "So, Shasha is the master of the magic tower?" Frank added that she was a prodigy, which made our MC wonder how a 5-year-old could possibly be in charge. Frank wearily ran a hand through his hair and asked, "You've lost 20 years, too?" Our MC let out a heavy sigh, thinking the kid had a wild imagination, but decided not to get mad at him, even if he was selling this crazy story so convincingly. Our MC moved away from the window, but when he caught his reflection, he froze. "That's not me." At first, he thought it was just someone else in the room. He reached up and touched his face, and when the reflection did the same, he screamed in his mind, "Who is this?" Some time passed, and he managed to compose himself a little. Now, looking out at the city streets, he couldn't believe what he was seeing, even though it was right there in front of him. It turns out that 20 years have actually passed since his death. Everything had changed so drastically. Are those glowing things called lamps? And are those horseless carriages? It was all thanks to the magical engineering revolution. He smiled, thinking to himself that his old friends would have loved this. When the world fell apart, the only ones left were those who had given up everything. He decided to shake off the nostalgia, and turning the window into a mirror, started to piece together everything he'd learned about this body's original owner. Oscar Crushen was admitted to the White Tower when he was just 10 years old. He's now 20, a first-level mage from a fallen noble house, but in reality, he's just a sorry excuse for a mage. Stuck at level 1 even at 20, he apparently tried to take a shortcut by pocketing research funds to buy a forbidden elixir, only to lose consciousness right after taking it. Had it worked, his mana would have multiplied several times over, but if it failed, he was gambling with his life, which is exactly why the potion was outlawed. Frank said he was out cold for a whole day, but honestly, the original guy actually died from the mana overload. Suddenly, he felt a surge in his chest. It was mana, all right, but way too much for a level 1, which caught him off guard. Most mana in its natural state is pure and hasn't been refined, which meant the elixir did have some effect. He then noticed a black liquid materializing in the core of his mana. It flowed through the pathways in his hand right to the tip of his finger and emerged. The single black drop fell to the floor, burning a hole straight through it, and he instantly realized it was poison. He stared at his hand and began to wonder why this body was full of poison, and then a smirk spread across his lips. He started to piece together what had really happened. First off, the elixir wasn't a fake, it was the genuine article, and something like that is normally impossible to obtain, even for a fortune. The problem was, the original Oscar Crushen had no clue it was laced with poison, and considering how much of the stuff still in his system and the amount of time he was unconscious, it's clear the cause of death wasn't a mana overload, but the poison itself. The class of this poison is far too advanced to be wasted on a mere level 1 mage. If anyone but him had investigated, they would have had a hell of a time finding any evidence. He clenched his fist and stared thoughtfully into the distance, then stood up from his chair. He had no clue who decided to play games with his soul, but ultimately, they had given him the exact second chance he was contemplating just before his death. Picking up the empty elixir vial, he figured that living a selfish life this time, all for the sake of his people, was a damn good way to start. He glanced at his reflection in the glass with a grin, and told Oscar's spirit he'd get him his revenge as a thank you for the body. Sometime later, on the outskirts of Siren, a goon rushed up to his boss and said, "Hey, there's news from the shop." The man ordered him to call him boss. How many times did he have to repeat himself? The goon nervously apologized and got down to business. The shop had been completely wrecked on the inside. Some magician was responsible. Enraged, his boss slammed a bottle of booze on the table, roaring, "Who the hell dared to do this?" The lackey answered that he wasn't sure. The boss demanded, "Who sold him the elixir? It couldn't have been Oscar Crushen, could it?" His underling insisted it was impossible. Oscar was a mage in name only. Besides, how could someone on the brink of death take down their guys? The subordinate got nervous, wondering if the White Tower had finally decided to investigate the whole affair. The boss shot back, asking if he'd forgotten who exactly paid them to handle Oscar. The client was wearing a white tower ring, meaning one of the local mages wanted him taken out. Suddenly, a voice cut in, saying, "That's not a given. After all, what kind of idiot wouldn't bother to hide their affiliation?" They both immediately spun around in fear at the unfamiliar voice. It was Oscar. He had snuck onto the balcony, drawn in by the faint scent coming from the vial. After casing the joint, he realized this conspiracy involved more people than he first assumed. The boss stared at him in disbelief, asking if he was the one who trashed the shop. Oscar casually walked into the room and confirmed it, then told them to please continue their conversation, saying he was all ears. The boss just laughed and said he was planning to let him go, as long as he acted like he hadn't heard a thing. Then, he ordered his subordinate to finish him. The goon immediately unsheathed his sword and charged in, full of confidence. Oscar simply said that since they were playing these kinds of games, he wasn't going to hold back anymore. With a simple wave of his hand, he unleashed a wind cutter spell, and a torrent of air instantly enveloped the goon's body. The wind coiled around his neck, squeezing tight as blood gushed from the wound. He dispatched the guy in a flash and clicked his tongue in annoyance. Thinking he could hardly believe the guy's head came off so easily, it reminded him of what happened to the high priest. The boss leaped up in terror, calling him a scumbag, then whipped out a revolver and fired several shots right at him, trying to get revenge for his man. Oscar just smiled as the bullets flew toward him and remarked that things were getting interesting. In the blink of an eye, he put up a shield, and after examining one of the frozen bullets up close, he noted that he couldn't sense any mana. So what was radiating all this power? The man gasped, stunned that Oscar had managed to stop the bullets. And in that moment, Oscar understood its true name. With a dismissive flick of his hand, he sent the bullets flying right back at the gunman, piercing him in the shoulder, side, and leg. The shock and pain from the wounds sent him crashing to the floor. Oscar strolled over to him, calmly informing him that his backup wasn't coming anytime soon. He had already sealed the room, blocking all sound from escaping. The man sputtered in disbelief, calling it impossible. How could a pathetic first-level mage possibly cast a first-level silence spell? Unfazed, Oscar settled onto a nearby couch, propping his feet up on the injured man, and corrected him, saying that wasn't quite right. He'd used sound capture, a spell that merely prevents sound from leaving the room. Now, it was time to hear some answers. "Who sent you after me?" he asked. The man spat defiantly that he wouldn't say a thing, only to get a boot to the face for his trouble. With an icy look, Oscar asked, "Is your pride really more important than your life? I'm almost impressed." He pressed his boot down harder on the man's face and cast a spell, instantly causing him to convulse and scream in agony. He explained that he was channeling wind into the man's body, which should feel like 1,000 needles stabbing him from the inside out. He added that he wasn't a fan of these kinds of methods because they were too noisy, and then ordered him to talk. Gasping and sobbing in pain, the man grabbed at Oscar's boot, begging for mercy and promising that he would tell him everything. Oscar instantly canceled the spell and demanded to know everything about his client. The man caught his breath and confessed that his client had provided the elixir and the money. Their instructions were to sell it to Oscar for cheap, and refusing wasn't an option. Oscar then asked for a description of the client. The man said his face was hidden by a hood, but he was definitely wearing a white tower ring. Oscar sighed, figuring that the ring was probably a red herring meant to mislead him, and prompted the man to continue. The man suddenly remembered something else, an unusual smell. He said the client smelled of something, fresh and distinctly minty. That was all the information he had. Oscar filed that detail away, and then asked how they were planning to cover up his murder. The man answered that the White Tower was busy dealing with the fallout from the 4 magic towers, so he doubted anyone would have launched a real investigation. Oscar was confused by this, and asked him to explain what he meant. The man seemed surprised, asking, "You don't know?" Oscar replied that he'd lost his memory after drinking the elixir. The man let out a heavy sigh and offered to show him the documents. He crawled over to a nearby dresser, rummaging inside for a few seconds before pulling out 3 folders. Oscar decided to start with the White Tower's file and read through everything inside. April 28th was known as the White Night, the day the High Priest had died. The Emperor had commemorated Oscar Sage's sacrifice by granting the tower enormous benefits, including a 30-year exemption from taxes. And yet, despite all this, the White Tower had the worst performance of all the towers over the past year. It seemed the White Tower, which had lost everything 20 years ago, had never truly recovered. During this year's White Night Festival, the Imperial family made a major announcement. Experts had identified a lack of advanced magic as the tower's biggest problem. He wondered what they meant by the White Tower lacking advanced magic. He distinctly remembered giving Edna documents that should have prevented this very outcome, but it happened anyway. He decided he would have to investigate this matter later. For now, he was focused on the fact that the White Tower had the worst results. He turned back to the man and asked what kind of businesses the 4 main towers were involved in. The man quickly explained everything. The Yellow Tower in the east, which controls lightning, had ushered in a golden age of magical engineering, contributing to revolutionary inventions like street lamps and automobiles. The Blue Tower in the south focused on purified drinking water, agriculture, and potions. The Red Tower, located in the harsh western deserts, had gone the military route, now assisted with monster-slaying missions. When Oscar asked about the White Tower, the man replied that they were in the delivery business. He was so stunned that at first, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He grabbed his head in disbelief and asked for clarification. "The tower is in the delivery business?" The man confirmed it and added that thanks to its post office and wind riders, the White Tower had become incredibly successful at fast and secure item delivery. Oscar was left wondering what on earth a wind rider was. Riders. The mages of the White Tower soar through the skies, masters of the air. It's seen as the ultimate symbol of freedom and bravery, which is why they're often compared to majestic beasts like dragons and eagles. Oscar's expression soured as he angrily demanded to know who was behind this whole ridiculous operation. The guy stammered out a nervous reply, saying that from what he'd heard, it was the current tower master. Oscar went dead silent. He was talking about his own apprentice. Letting out a heavy sigh, he asked, "So, what's the deal with the drinking water and agriculture businesses? Aren't potions supposed to be the Magic Tower's main cash cow? Why is the Blue Tower getting into this stuff?" The man explained that the Blue Tower was a different story. They've pretty much cornered the market on potions, and Oscar recalled that just 20 years ago, the White Tower had been the biggest supplier around. Though, if their potion-making techniques were lost, then it all made sense. The man then explained that the drinking water and agriculture business involves selling purified water at ridiculously high prices to drought-stricken areas. Oscar raised a confused eyebrow, wondering why anyone would need to buy clean water. The guy replied that it had become some kind of trend among the wealthy recently, and Oscar, with a disgusted sigh, called them a bunch of idiots, muttering that they made a little extra cash and were now just wasting it on pointless things. After all, you could just drink water from a well. The man let out a nervous chuckle, and as Oscar turned back to the documents, he realized the White Tower was seriously lagging behind the others in revenue. It was undeniable that the other towers were operating on a whole other level financially. The upcoming White Night Festival next year was their final shot to prove they still had what it takes. The only problem? They only had 7 months to prepare. Just then, the informant started looking really rough and cried out Oscar's name, making him wonder, is he going into shock from the pain? Has he lost too much blood? The intel this guy provided was actually pretty solid. Maybe I should help him out, he thought. But then, he glanced at the ledger and discovered they were involved in some seriously shady business, like setting fires, roughing people up, loan sharking, strong-arming, and even taking contracts to make people permanently disappear. He was floored by the sheer length of their rap sheet and instantly changed his mind about saving the guy. Snatching the documents, Oscar walked over to the balcony, calling him a piece of trash. The man desperately yelled for him to stop, but Oscar paid him no mind and leaped right off the balcony. As a final parting shot, he wished the man better luck at being a good person in his next life. As dawn approached, he made his way back to the White Tower, and upon entering his room, he let out a deep, exhausted sigh. He tossed the documents onto the table and slumped into a chair, thinking to himself that he couldn't believe just a couple of simple spells had wiped him out like this. What in the world was wrong with this body? Could he even use his signature magic in this condition? The very magic that had once made him the greatest mage in all of history. He attempted to tap into his wind reserve, but the power just fizzled out, and he realized with a flash of annoyance that it looked like it was a no-go for the time being. First things first, he had to get a complete picture of his body's condition, so he opted to start with a magical scan. As he cast the spell on himself, he figured the documents would give him more answers about the situation than Frank ever could. Even though Frank had shared some decent intel, his memories were all jumbled up. It was absolutely critical to learn everything he could about Oscar Crushen if he wanted to save this body. He started poring over all the information about Oscar in the documents. Turns out, he was the heir to the Duke of Crushen and the sole survivor of a horrific fire at their mansion. His magical genius was recognized from a young age. The hype around him was so intense that people were practically fighting to claim him as their own. He spent 6 years studying at the Imperial Academy's Faculty of Magic, earning nothing but top marks. His published dissertation cemented his reputation as an undeniable genius. This made our hero wonder why on earth he was stuck at level 1. But then, his eyes landed on the next line. It read, if not for his mana deficiency syndrome, he would have become the Suction was Workin syndrome, greatest mage of his generation. Reading this, he was completely stunned and realized that if it were true, being stuck at level 1 suddenly made perfect sense. The kid understood the theory of magic better than anyone, but he lacked the ability to actually use it. Right then, the magical scan finished, and he turned his attention to the glowing magic orb that had materialized before him. The results were in. The orb shattered, replaced by a screen displaying all the data, but when he saw what was written there, he was shocked. It turned out he didn't have mana deficiency syndrome at all. It was far more likely that someone had intentionally sealed his mana circle. Mana deficiency, my foot, syndrome, just as the name implies, is a condition where mana can't circulate through the body or build up. A mage can establish up to 20 physical circles on top of their own, which determines their level. Even with a lifetime of training, they wouldn't even hit the 3rd level. But with Oscar, it's a whole different story. His physical circles weren't defective from birth. Instead, someone deliberately connected them. If this guy was truly a genius, then he knew he didn't actually have this condition. He walked over to the shelf, grabbed a few books, and thought it was a shame Oscar didn't keep a journal. According to Frank, the guy was just a drunk. But what if he became that way on purpose? He knew someone had blocked his mana and wanted him gone. So, he was putting on an act. If that's the case, then it's now obvious why he resorted to using the elixir. In a situation where he couldn't trust anyone, he had to try and break the chains himself. He placed several books on the table, thinking all he had to do was follow the trail of clues, and he could solve this. That's when he noticed a book filled with bookmarks. It described a totally different interpretation of magic's fundamentals. When he opened the book, he found countless notes scrawled on the pages and was completely blown away. The body's previous owner wrote that the Windcutter's trajectory was too bland and could be expanded upon. The windshield is a defensive type of magic and doesn't have a wide range of uses, but an advanced windshield could be used offensively. Modern weapons are perfect for reinterpreting the White Tower's magic by using the principle of a spiraling bullet. He thought the concept behind the advanced windshield described here was a lot like how he himself used it. It's a world away from the principle of a simple defensive ability. On top of that, he described how to use it in all sorts of situations, and there were also a few basic spells he had cooked up himself. Oscar couldn't use magic, but he ran all these experiments in his head. Now, it was crystal clear why he was called a genius. They were on the same wavelength when it came to theory. Plus, just from this book alone, he could tell that Oscar hadn't given up on magic. He worked harder than anybody else. His passion for magic practically screamed off the pages. On the first page of the book, Oscar left a message, hoping this book would direct even the faintest wind toward the White Tower, from a mage about to take on his greatest challenge. After reading the signature, our MC realized that Oscar knew everything but had been forced to act alone. Oscar Crushen, a young mage made to be weak, not by some cruel twist of fate, but by design, walked his path completely alone. He put the book down and sank onto the sofa, swearing on his name, the 17th head of the magic tower, that he would unravel the knot that bound him. He would also make those who clipped his wings pay. After a moment, he opened his eyes and realized he was in a greenhouse. He remembered passing out from exhaustion while trying to untie the knot on his physical circle. Suddenly, he heard the voices of his former students, and he saw a vision of himself and the kids gathered nearby in the past. Oscar was telling them to have a seat and get ready for today's lesson. Our MC immediately understood why he was seeing all this. It was because of that damn dream. The Lord of Nightmares from the demon world had hit him with a curse. Now, every single time he falls asleep, he's forced to relive the past. Honestly, he expected the curse to be lifted since he'd moved to a new body. But it seemed to be connected to the soul, not the physical one. But he got lucky. There was nothing to taint the dream about his students. Everything with them was peaceful. Oscar asked the children what he'd said they were going to study today. Lloyd, a 9-year-old boy, reminded him that he was supposed to explain the magic system to them. Knights and mages divide it into 4 categories known as the 4 types of magic. Oscar confirmed that, adding that while magic might look the same, it's actually broken down into 4 types: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special. He asked if the White Tower adheres to balance, and Oscar confirmed it, saying that wind magic is the best fit for balance. Shasha, a 5-year-old girl, asked if each tower has its own favorite type of magic. Oscar confirmed this, explaining that different types of magic have different properties. The Yellow Tower believes speed is everything, so it uses acceleration magic, while the Red Tower worships fire, so it sticks to enhancement. The Blue and White Towers are all about balance. Juliet, his 7-year-old apprentice, happily raised his hand, saying he wanted to master acceleration-type magic because the regular kind was just too slow for him. Oscar just smiled and explained that, unfortunately, you don't get to pick, it's all decided the moment you're born. Shasha then asked how they could figure out what type they had, and Oscar, sketching a symbol in the grass, told her it was simpler than it looked. Just point your index finger and try casting this spell. She stared at the magic formula, confused, and said she'd never seen anything like it before, so she probably couldn't do it on the first try. He just told her to take her time, so she decided to give it a shot. A flow of magic started to gather at the tip of her finger, and she got excited that it was actually working. He explained that her magic wasn't fast or destructive, but harmonious, which meant she was a balanced type. She asked if that was the same kind he had. He nodded, and she beamed, saying she really liked that. Then, Juliet decided it was her turn. Just as he'd hoped, he turned out to be an acceleration type, which made him ecstatic. Finally, it was Lloyd's turn. A beautiful flower bloomed from the tip of his finger, revealing he possessed a special type of magic, but the kid didn't look too thrilled about it. He asked if there was any way to change it, but his teacher explained that special types of magic are incredibly rare, showing up in only about 2% of all mages. Why would you want to change it, even though you can't? Lloyd answered, all bummed out, that he really liked the balance type, which made Oscar laugh and ask, so what were they supposed to do now? He joked that he was planning on giving him private lessons, but now he'd have to figure out how to change his magic type instead. Lloyd was thrilled to hear he'd be getting private lessons from his teacher, though he tried his best not to show it. Oscar smiled, adding that it's tough for mages with a special type to get better without the right kind of training. The boy quickly changed his tune, saying he decided a special magic type wasn't so bad after all, but only if Oscar promised to give him as many private lessons as possible. Oscar linked pinkies with him, making the promise. Meanwhile, the MC thought with a smile that the kid was such a little brat. They even called him the Promise, and no matter how grown up he tried to act, at the end of the day, he was still just a kid. He started to wake up, and the memories began to fade away as he slowly opened his eyes. An announcement crackled over the loudspeaker, telling Mage Oscar Crushian to report to office 420. He got to his feet, wondering just how long he'd been out, then headed for the office, grabbing all his documents on the way. Stepping out of the elevator, he mentally noted that he had 8 physical rings left to go. He'd already unlocked 12 out of a total of 20. In that time, he'd also reached the second circle of mana, bringing him up to level 2. He knocked on the office door, and after getting the okay, he stepped inside, thinking to himself that he never thought he'd see the day he'd be happy about being a measly level 2. Sitting inside the office was Maxim Bisk, an elder of the tower. Maxim asked him how he was feeling, and Oscar replied that his memories were starting to come back. He walked closer to the desk and told him that it was true, then took a good look at the elder's face. Maxim used to be younger than him. Now the man was 45 years old. He'd arrived at the tower long after Oscar, and yet now, he was the younger of the two. Maxim was an honest, hard-working guy. Oscar knew a bright future was in store for him. The man used to follow him around everywhere, calling him elder, and later, the head of the magic tower, which had always touched him. Now Maxim was over 40. He'd clearly worked hard, and his magic was so immense it was slowing his aging. These thoughts brought a smile to his face, prompting Maxim to ask with an annoyed look, "What's so funny?" He then informed Oscar that the head of the Gordon family had been taken out. "Do you know anything about this?" The MC's expression immediately turned serious as he told him he didn't know a thing. However, he was positive that it wasn't just a random occurrence. "After all," he said, "that was the guy who tried to have me eliminated." His statement clearly shocked the elder. Oscar then handed him the documents and a bag of coins, explaining that the elixir he'd been given was poisoned. "And this," he added, "is the reward money and the entry for the contract on my head in his ledger." Maxim asked, "So you ended up in the infirmary because someone almost took you out?" Oscar confirmed it, adding that he'd gone to confront the man, only for them to try and finish the job. As Maxim looked through the ledger, his expression grew more and more shocked. He then glanced at the bag of money and said that since the payment was still here, the story must be true. Oscar pointed out that the book detailed a contract, killing, and Maxim put all the pieces together. He said he would close the case, ruling it as self-defense on Oscar's part, and the MC told him he'd be grateful for that. "And could I ask for a personal favor? I'd like to arrange a meeting with the Tower Master." Maxim looked a bit surprised, as that clearly wasn't the favor he'd been expecting, and mentioned it wasn't a big deal, considering they often discussed magic, but he was told he'd have to wait for 6 months, which took him by surprise. He questioned the delay, pointing out that the White Night Festival would be underway by then. Maxim explained that she was away on a business trip, handling an important assignment, prompting him to excitedly ask why the Tower Master would handle such a trivial matter herself. But he quickly realized the reason. It was all because the Supreme Mage was absent. This mission was so critical that the Tower Master had to step in herself. He quickly apologized for his rudeness and asked what level she had reached. Maxim informed him that she was a 7th level Supreme Mage. This made him uneasy. He remembered being a 9th level mage at her age. Shasha was definitely talented. She should be at level 8 by now. Maxim then noted that the report mentioned the transverse incision he'd made was flawless, and asked if he had practiced magical strikes before. He replied that all of his training had been done in his mind, and since the elder had no more questions, he was dismissed. As he was leaving the office, he found the vice chief in the doorway and, surprised, asked what brought him there. Hamel Grimwis smiled and said he'd come to ask him not to be too hard on the boy, though it seemed he was already too late. Maxim replied that if he caused any trouble, he'd have to be disciplined, and Hamel noted that he was right, and since he was the one who brought Oscar in, he should be the one to worry. Maxim then recalled Oscar creating a windshield, thinking that while it was just basic magic, it was impossible to master so perfectly with just 1 or 2 days of hard training. He felt certain the boy had been practicing hard in secret. Maxim smiled and said that this Oscar kid seemed to have trained far more than he initially thought. Hamel was glad to hear it and invited him to the elders' meeting, mentioning that Fidelina was already waiting for them. In the meantime, the MC made his way to the 10th floor, where the greenhouse was. He dreamt of his students there and felt compelled to visit, but he found the place much more deserted than he remembered. A man working in the greenhouse spotted him, came over, and asked if he was young Master Oscar. Oscar asked who he was, and the old man introduced himself as Welter, the caretaker for the rooms in the magic tower. He remarked that it seemed the rumors about Oscar losing his memory were true, given that they used to talk from time to time. The MC, surprised, wondered aloud how far that rumor had spread. The old man just laughed and asked why he'd called him young master, and Oscar explained that Welter had served under the former head of the magic tower, who also happened to be named Oscar. Hearing this, our MC was a bit surprised and said with a smile that it was a good way to distinguish between the two of them and that he would remember it. He then asked if they could continue to be conversation partners. Welter smiled and thanked him for the offer, but said it wouldn't be easy since he was planning to leave the tower soon. A bit disappointed, the MC asked where he was going, and Welter explained that he had been working there for 40 years. In that time, he'd outlasted 3 different heads of the tower. His colleagues were always in flux, and eventually, he was the only one left in this department. He explained that the reason he'd stayed for so long was something the former head, Oscar Sage, said during his appointment ceremony, that they needed everyone who lived in the tower, and that each of them should be proud to be a part of it. Hearing his own words from the past made the MC feel a little awkward, and he coughed into his fist as the old man said with a smile that it probably sounded funny, but from that moment on, he'd worked with the belief that he was truly a part of the White Tower. Oscar told him there was nothing funny about it at all, and Welter, after thanking him, said that belief was the very reason he was leaving now. The MC was confused, not understanding what he meant, and Welter explained that, as far as he knew, the White Tower was going through some tough financial times, especially with the cost of renovations. Funding had dried up compared to before. He added that next month would mark 40 years of his employment there. The MC asked regretfully, "This is about the Long Service Award, isn't it? All members of the White Tower, except for the mages, receive Long Service medals on their 20th and 40th anniversaries. Employees who reach 40 years of service are awarded 200,000 bells, a sum large enough to buy a house in even the largest cities." Welter confirmed that the White Tower currently lacked the funds to make such a large payment. To pay him, many other people would have to go without, which would only create new debts for the tower. He couldn't, in good conscience, agree to that. He explained that no matter what, this place was his second home. Oscar grew anxious. He had no idea things were this bad. It sounded to him like the Blue Tower was resorting to some shady tactics for funding. But in his current position, what could he possibly do? Pass judgment on what they did? The Blue Tower struck it rich, and is now hailed as the greatest in history, while all he has are empty titles. He balled his fists so tight, they started to bleed, thinking war hero, savior of humanity, noble titles. All of it means absolutely nothing if he can't even pay the people who dedicated decades of their lives to this tower. The old man's concerned voice snapped him out of it. He grabbed his hand, his eyes wide with worry at the sight of the blood, and asked why on earth he was squeezing his fists so hard. The MC asked when he was planning to leave, and Walter, after wrapping his palm, replied that he'd be gone in 2 weeks. After that, the MC urged him to head to the infirmary for some medicine, while Walter said with a somber look that he hoped they could still talk from time to time. Walter started to remind him that he was leaving, but the MC cut him off, saying he didn't need to. He met Walter's gaze with pure confidence and declared that he would absolutely handle it. There had to be a way out. He was going to make a boatload of money, so a situation like this would never, ever happen again. With that, he headed to his room and, replaying his own bold words, wondered how in the world he was going to pull it off. Right now, the only options that came to mind were publishing research, giving lectures, and taking on odd jobs. The big problem was the payout wouldn't be immediate, and on top of that, he was only a level 2 mage. He needed a business venture that would rake in some serious cash, fast. Potions seemed like the only realistic option. He decided to scan the newspaper, and as his eyes landed on a particular headline, he shot forward in his seat, completely stunned. Meanwhile, over in the vice head's office, Fidelina was absolutely livid. She shouted that she refused to stay quiet this time because the man was a common thief. Maxim tried to interject, saying that wasn't quite right, but she cut him off, angrily demanding what he meant by, but, since she was the one in charge of the finances, and she was beyond furious. Maxim suggested that the culprit would reflect on his actions, prompting her to yell, "You're just going to let him go? Stealing is a habit, and it's only going to get worse." Maxim just sighed and told her not to sweat it, pointing out there was nothing left to steal in their tower anyway. His comment only made her even angrier. She stormed right up to him and said that he shot down her every suggestion, demanding, then just put him in isolation. He refused, exclaiming, what good would sending a first-level mage to solitary training even do? The vice head, all the while, calmly sipped his tea, thinking to himself, is this really a conversation between two elders who, combined, are nearly 100 years old? He then spoke up, agreeing that Elder Maxim had a point about the training. Solitary confinement would be pointless for him. It would just be torture. Fidelina looked ready to argue, so he added that it would be better to make him repay 3 times the amount he stole. She scoffed at the idea, insisting it wasn't nearly enough, so the vice head suggested they change the subject. She let out a heavy sigh and said that they were desperately short on funds, and she believed they had to make a tough decision soon. Sinking back onto the sofa, she pointed out that the tower was full and of rooms just sitting empty. If they sold off the potion-making equipment, the money they'd get would keep them afloat for 3 months. Otherwise, they'd have no choice but to shut down. Hamel declared that he could never approve of such a thing. This is a magic tower, he argued. A place where mages hone their craft and share knowledge. You can't get fresh air in a sealed room. We can't just sell our future to solve today's hunger. She shot back bitterly. What future? We've already been waiting for 20 years. Maxim said her name in a warning tone, but Fidelina ignored him, telling the vice head that he needed to face reality. Even if some genius, capable of saving their tower showed up, they wouldn't come to a place like this. Mel stared into his own reflection in his teacup. He was just about to speak when a knock came from the door. Fidelina whipped around, annoyed, and demanded to know who it was, reminding them they were in the middle of a meeting. The vice head, however, permitted the person to come in, and Oscar himself appeared in the doorway. He greeted them with a smile, stepped inside, and informed the vice head that he had a business proposal. He was formally requesting permission to start a business. At this, Fidelina exploded, exclaiming that he had some nerve. Had he already forgotten that just a few days ago, he made off with a research grant, and now he wanted to open a business? She kept ranting, but Oscar completely ignored her and spoke directly to Hamel, explaining that while looking through old newspapers, he stumbled upon an article about the Vince estate being forced to shut down because of a nasty flu outbreak. Hamel took the newspaper from him. He mentioned that he'd read about it as well. They were calling it the Kadana flu, and if that was true, it was a total disaster. There was no known cure. Now, way back when, the White Tower had developed a vaccine that wiped it out, but the formula was lost 20 years ago. Our hero added that even the Blue Tower, which specializes in potion making, couldn't crack it, and that was exactly what he intended to fix. The old man looked a little taken aback, declaring that Oscar wanted to sell a vaccine for the Kadana flu. That was the very thing the White Tower used to have a monopoly on, and he planned on reclaiming that glory. They were a bit stunned by his audacity, and Fidelina let out an irritated sigh, saying there wasn't any point in even listening to him. She argued that magic towers and pharmaceutical labs had poured tons of money and effort into this, and for 20 years, they couldn't replicate the vaccine. And here he was, some 20-year-old kid, thinking he could do it. Oscar turned to her and pointed out that she was right, they hadn't managed to do it. And he was, in fact, 20 years old. But, he declared, he was a genius. The smug look on his face pushed her over the edge, and she screamed, "Are you kidding me?" She ranted that he'd already burned through 723,000 bells from the last 17 research payments, and then pocketed another 25,000 for some shady miracle elixir. Does he even get that a simple farmer makes 20,000 a year after taxes, and he has the nerve to call himself a genius? He has no clue how money works because he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Hamel cut her off, stating that Oscar was there to officially present an investment opportunity as a magician of the White Tower. He acknowledged that she was in charge of the finances, but insisted there was no need to be rude. She immediately backed down, lowering her gaze and apologizing, which made our hero realize that he'd been wondering this whole time why she disliked him so much. Now it all clicked into place. He hadn't produced a single valuable thing in the past 2 years. However, he was a completely different person from the body's previous owner. He turned back to the vice chief and stated with conviction that he was confident in his idea. So, he asked that it be given serious consideration. The old man asked if he had a specific reason for his confidence, and Oscar simply told him to look at the second page of the newspaper. The Archbishop of the El Terrara order had suddenly altered his pilgrimage plans. He was now going to stop in Siren for a whole month to pray for a blessing. Oscar pointed out how strange that was. Until now, they only made month-long stops in major cities. The El Terrara order worships the Mother of Earth, Terrara, and there are 7 archbishops in the order. You'd expect them to be assertive and worthy leaders, but in reality, they're far from it. To become a cardinal, the second most powerful man in the order, you need a boatload of money for your election campaign. You're allowed to stay in an estate for a month during the pilgrimage, but that's really just a front to meet with aristocrats and merchants to collect donations. As for Siren, it used to be a great city, but now it's just getting smaller and smaller. Maxim admitted he had a point, saying he just thought it was about praying for a blessing. Oscar replied that this only made it weirder. What kind of blessing would you even pray for over barren land? He spun a globe on the desk, explaining that as far as they knew, the route for the order's pilgrimage was set in advance. Siren, Mosque, Melbourne, and Greenwale. He stopped the globe and pointed at Vince, saying that they were supposed to head there next. The Archbishop had already spent a full month in Knox before arriving in Siren. And if he wasn't mistaken, he would also stay for a month in Mosque, just like in the other cities. Isn't it obvious he's trying to delay the trip to Vince? Once he laid it all out, the pieces started clicking into place for them. If an accident were to happen during the pilgrimage, the order would claim the Archbishop had angered the goddess of the earth. That's basically a political death sentence for a man trying to become a cardinal. Maxim finally got it, asking, so Archbishop Baldwin knows the Cadana flu is in Vince and is just waiting for the outbreak to die down? Our hero confirmed his theory, and Fidelina begrudgingly noted that he analyzed the situation well, which was to be expected from a theoretical mage. And yet, she added, this is all just an assumption. The vice chief said he understood what Oscar was getting at, and our hero was ecstatic. But then the old man delivered the bad news. They still wouldn't be able to officially sponsor him. Oscar's face fell as Hamel opened a desk drawer, explaining that if they did that, they simply wouldn't have the funds to finance other mages. He was about to object, but at that moment Hamel pulled an envelope from his desk and said with a smile that he could, however, invest his own personal money in the project business. Fidelina was furious when she heard this, but he just told her everything was under control. He only had 30,000. Was that going to be enough? Oscar thought about it for a second, and when the reality hit that it wasn't even close, he started to sweat. This amount was a drop in the bucket. After that, he made his way to the potion room, where he wearily clutched his head. Shaking it off, he started inspecting the equipment, realizing he'd have to cook up a different plan. With the cash he had on hand, his best bet was to create a vaccine sample and get paid by the Archbishop, who was in a serious bind because of the flu. He glanced over at Frank, who was lugging boxes of ingredients, and saw the kid was really hustling. After that, he put on his protective goggles, thinking that the most profitable move was to squeeze money out of someone who was truly desperate. Amped up, he dove into preparing the potion, and in the end, he pulled it off. He stared, completely mesmerized by the boiling red liquid in the flask, before killing the flame and pouring the potion into a separate container. He then took off his protective goggles and looked at the final product with a smirk, noting that it turned out pretty well. His skills hadn't gotten rusty at all. He just whipped up an energy drink, just as a warm-up, and here he was worrying for nothing. Just then, Frank stumbled into the room, dragging 3 heavy bags of ingredients and complaining that his back was about to snap. Our MC gave him a nod, saying he'd worked hard, and asked if he'd gotten all the missing herbs. Frank plopped down, totally wiped, and handed him the receipt, telling him to see for himself. By the way, did he have anything to drink? Otherwise, he was going to die. Oscar told him he had a full recovery potion, which made Frank's jaw drop. He knew that stuff was super expensive. Of course, he wasn't about to say no, so as Oscar took the receipt, he handed over the elixir. Frank thanked him and chugged it down, then remarked with a smile that it was tasty and warm. He asked if Oscar made it himself. Oscar confirmed it and, while checking the herbs, noted that everything was in perfect shape. Frank boasted with a proud grin that he'd picked out the absolute best, which had made the seller pretty mad. Our MC smiled and said that with an eye that sharp, he should have been a merchant, not a mage. Frank replied, that was actually his dream, he said, when the tower collapsed, but Oscar cut him off with a quick flick to the forehead. Frank cried out, asking what that was for. Oscar apologized, saying he couldn't help it since Frank had just spoken ill of the tower. Frank then asked what he needed him to do. Apparently, Elder Fidelina had told him to help Oscar out, saying it'd be too hard for him alone. Oscar smiled, thinking that she seemed like a villain, on the surface, but deep down, she was actually a kind person. He asked Frank to start by moving some of the ingredients. After which, Oscar easily picked up 2 sacks himself, thinking he didn't really need an assistant. Although, Oscar Jr. had mentioned that the White Tower was now filled with problem children who, despite having incredible talent, all had some kind of shortcoming. If they could just learn to work together, they could make a huge contribution to the tower's strength. Could Frank Sirius really be one of these kids? There was a good reason to think so, since a very promising person had praised him highly. Oscar was interested in him too. Now was the perfect time to test him. They put the bags of herbs on the table, and Frank remarked that while he was buying them, he realized they were all toxic. Black gorge lilies, red, camellias, ghost mushrooms, and merva leaves. Our MC replied that just because they're poisonous doesn't mean they can't be used in medicine. He asked if Frank knew how to process them before use. Frank answered that you're supposed to put poisonous herbs in water and boil them for 12 hours to draw out all the toxins. Our MC confirmed that was correct, but said that method has a big downside: the nutrients get released too. He asked Frank if he knew about a dish called Yan Dynasty dumplings. Frank confirmed he did, and had even eaten them. Frank asked why he brought that up. Oscar explained that a steamer is used to make those dumplings. If you use that same steaming method to detoxify the herbs, most of the good stuff stays put. This way, you can extract 98% of the benefits from these plants. The kid's mind was blown, and he asked, "So, you're saying a monopoly on the potion market is possible?" Oscar confirmed it, adding that's exactly how it was before. As steam began to billow out of the steamer, Frank asked if the detoxification process was done. Oscar replied that they had only softened the plants, which would make the real detoxification, the part that was about to start, much simpler. Opening the steamer, he cast a drainage spell, gathering all the steam into a thick purple cloud that formed right in front of them. He told Frank to watch very carefully. Now, they could pull the poison right out of the steam. He then isolated the steam from the toxic cloud, declaring it was now completely free of any toxins. All that was left was to mix everything in the correct proportions. He expertly separated 23% of the red camellia and 47% of the merva leaves from the steam, and just like that, the flu remedy was complete. He held up the finished elixir, asking with a smirk if it seemed that difficult. He then encouraged Frank to give it a try, who just stared at the vial in astonishment, his mind racing. It was easier said than done. Frank didn't know how to cast multiple spells at once yet, but he wasn't about to admit that. He asked if he should start with the drainage spell first. Frank cast the spell, and Oscar noted that his mana control was a bit shaky, but not terrible. He was actually doing better than expected. However, that was as far as he got. He was stuck on the poison cloud, completely unable to perform the next step. The MC asked what the holdup was, and Frank shot back, asking if he was messing with him. He explained that he couldn't cast spells simultaneously. You'd have to be a level 4 or 5 mage to pull that off, and he was only a level 3. The MC casually offered to teach him how. Frank was shocked, asking if he would really share such a secret technique. The MC explained that it's actually simple once you understand the principle. He told him to just imagine creating separate compartments in his mind. The left side of his brain would handle spell A, while the right side would focus on spell B. Frank concentrated on forming these mental sections, and soon after, the purple steam cleared. Oscar applauded, congratulating him on his success. He had just mastered simultaneous spellcasting. Frank was completely stunned and asked, "Is it really that simple? Why would they hide this technique for so long?" He'd always thought it was some incredibly difficult skill. The MC replied that it was all because of their greed. Watching Frank continue to work on the potion, Oscar reflected that the old guard never wanted to teach a technique they'd worked hard on for free. It eventually became a twisted tradition, but on a bloody battlefield, a tradition like that is just a liability. To survive, you have to share techniques and strategies every single day. Right now, what the White Tower really needed was interactive training and a free exchange of knowledge. He glanced over at Frank, who was beaming with pride over his success, and smiled. He praised him, admitting he was quite talented. To be honest, he hadn't expected him to get it on the very first try. Frank replied that it was only because he had explained everything so clearly, adding that he'd previously thought Oscar was mad at him. The MC didn't deny it, just clearing his throat awkwardly before, leaning over the bag of herbs. He noted they still had plenty of ingredients left and offered to take care of them. The MC just grinned, saying he had a much bigger steamer, so they could process everything in one go. Several hours flew by. 514 bottles of the potion were now ready, but just then, Maxim burst into the room, announcing they had a huge problem. He showed the MC a letter. It stated that the Blue Towers pharmaceutical company, Nuek, had arrived in Siren about an hour ago. Their supposed reason for visiting was a meeting with Archbishop Baldwin. Maxim said it looked like they were too late, and Oscar, after reading the letter, realized the competition had no intention of just sitting around. The elder began to worry, knowing that if a contract was signed with them, their own flu cure would be completely useless. Frank was devastated after all the hard work they'd put in, but Maxim tried to console him, saying that setbacks happen in life. But the MC cut in, saying it wasn't over yet. If his memory served him right, the Kadana flu was classified as a Class B disease, which meant there was still something they could do. Maxim whipped around to him excitedly, asking, "Is that really true?" The MC confirmed it, then asked with a smirk, "Can you fly faster than a train?" Meanwhile, the Archbishop's eagerly awaited guests had finally arrived. Baldwin granted them entry, and in walked a 5th-level mage named Moira and the managing director of the Nuek Pharmaceutical Company, Neil Bion. They entered the room and bowed their heads respectfully, offering the special greeting of their order, Elia. The Archbishop invited them to sit, and after they thanked him, he immediately inquired about their progress on the flu cure. The mage replied that everything was going smoothly, and the Archbishop rejoiced, saying that this was to be expected from the prestigious Blue Tower. He then asked when they would be finished. Moira replied that all that was left was to conduct the clinical trials. Neil quickly added that if the results were positive, they would then receive official permission from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration. The mage seemed a bit hesitant, explaining that, however, as she was sure he knew, clinical trials take more than just a day or two. Baldwin, growing very impatient, cut to the chase and demanded to know when they would launch production, medicine, promising they'd have it done in 6 months. This infuriated the Archbishop, who shot back that he was supposed to be in Vince in just 4 months. As the mage tried to explain their timeline, a sharp knock interrupted them, prompting the Archbishop to yell, "Who is it now?" After being told another mage had arrived, he ordered them to be let in, then let out a tired sigh, asked why he wasn't warned about another guest. Moira, looking confused, insisted that it was just the two of them, leaving everyone staring at the door, wondering who it could be. Just then, Oscar walked in, coolly stating that the proper greeting, if he recalled correctly, was Elchia. He then greeted the Archbishop with respect and introduced himself, announcing he was there to make an offer. The Blue Tower representatives just stared at him, completely stunned, and Baldwin demanded to know why a mage from the White Tower was there. Oscar replied that he was there to discuss selling the Cadena flu cure, noting that he'd arrived just in the nick of time. It turned out the two parties were there for the same reason. Oscar mused. So, was I late? The Archbishop sighed, admitting that wasn't true at all. They simply weren't ready. Glad to hear it, Oscar said smoothly. Then I can start negotiations with the White Tower right away. Moira, outraged, pointed a finger at him and shouted that it was all a bluff. He claimed the White Tower lacked both the funds and the technology to create a cure. Baldwin, siding with him, asked Oscar if they actually had it ready. Oscar placed a box on the table and asked if he looked like someone who would dare lie to the Archbishop of the Altarara Order. As he opened it, Baldwin saw the sample with a potion inside and was ecstatic. Are the negotiations a success? He asked. How much can you make, and when? Moira yelled out, to the Archbishop, who shot back irritably. Why are you yelling at me? It's your own fault for not being prepared. Moira then nervously stated that they didn't have approval from the Food and Drug Administration yet, but then he had a realization. The White Tower couldn't have gotten it either. He quickly turned to Oscar and demanded, "Do you have the permit?" Oscar admitted they had nothing, which made Moira grin triumphantly. I knew it, he gloated, turning to the Archbishop to point out that the White Tower was in the exact same boat. He promised they could start mass production in factories all over the continent as soon as they got the permit. And don't forget, he added, we're the Blue Tower. Considering our long and storied history, I can assure you that the cure we're developing with a top-tier pharmaceutical company is far more effective. Oscar's expression tightened at his words. Fair enough, he said. But it's quite interesting that you'd bring up the Blue Tower's long history in front of a mage from the White Tower. Moira's face twisted in fury as he unleashed a menacing aura and demanded he take that back. Oscar casually brushed the aura aside. Did I say something wrong? He asked innocently. According to the continent's history, which tower was built first? Moira scoffed. Are you really going to be that petty over a mere 5-year difference? Oscar replied that the leaders of the Blue Tower have always been desperate to close that 5-year gap. A gap that can never be closed, not in 1,000 years, not in 10,000. That's just how history works. You must have forgotten the monopoly the White Tower held on the potion market 20 years ago. Moira waved his hand dismissively, saying, that's ancient history. Nobody remembers that. He trailed off mid-sentence, choked by a terrifying aura. Oscar's voice was cold. Nobody remembers? Is that how you see it? The other mage looked at, in shock, wondering what that pressure was. There was no way a second-level mage could possess an aura that powerful. Oscar was just about to remind them of what had happened back then when the Archbishop's assistant suddenly burst into the room, apologizing for the interruption, but explaining that he had an urgent message from Lord Vince. The Lord was calling to express his immense gratitude for the Archbishop's incredible kindness in sending him the Cadena flu cure. Baldwin was completely baffled, since he hadn't sent a thing. The Lord continued, explaining that an elder from the White Tower told him it was sent secretly on his behalf, and that he was the one to thank. Every sick person who took the cure recovered within a couple of hours. It's a miracle. A true blessing from the goddess. Oscar smirked as the Archbishop let out a hearty laugh, saying he was delighted to hear it. Any side effects? He asked. The Lord replied that so far, and there were 0 side effects. It's just incredible. He then asked when the second batch would be ready, mentioning he'd already inquired with the White Tower's elder, who said he should direct all questions to the Archbishop. Of course, he insisted he wasn't trying to rush him. Baldwin assured him they'd send the second batch the moment it was prepared. It wouldn't be much longer. Lord Vince expressed his thanks and departed. After he left, the Archbishop turned to Oscar with a smile and asked, so, was this all you're doing? Oscar confirmed it was, noting that everything seemed to have gone off without a hitch, which is when Moira indignantly slammed his palm on the table, shouting that this was a violation of administrative laws and that Oscar needed to be punished. Oscar calmly replied that wasn't the case at all, suggesting Moira had a poor grasp of the legal system. He then asked if Moira knew anything about military law. The mage told him not to change the subject, yelling, what's the point of all this? Oscar sighed and thought to himself that the last 20 years of peace must have made everyone forget. He reminded them that 20 years ago, the weapon that took the most lives during the war against the demons was a pandemic. Even though mages were rapidly developing treatments, the administration was too slow to approve them, and people simply died before they could see a cure. Because of that, His Majesty supplemented Article 42, Paragraph 8. Any treatment intended for those harmed during wartime is considered a special case and is not subject to the laws of the imperial administration. Moira shot back, exclaiming that there was no war happening now. Oscar explained that war legally covers 3 types of situations. First, military action between nations. Second, a revolution. And last, a threat rated above Class B. At that moment, the mage finally understood. The Kadana flu is the only active Class B threat, so there was no need to adhere to the standard laws. Moira was at a loss for words, and Neil excitedly turned to the Archbishop, saying that if the White Tower could handle it, then so could they. He declared they would immediately send their own developed treatment to Vince's estate. Baldwin, looking displeased, noted that it seemed they still hadn't grasped the situation. The urgency ended the moment the White Tower's treatments reached Vince. Besides, the local lord believes he's cooperating with the White Tower. He can't just flip the script now and say it was the Blue Tower. Neil was speechless with shock. In a desperate move, he promised to lower their price. That's when the Archbishop, utterly enraged, slammed his fist on the armrest and roared. "How dare you say such a thing? Are you trying to buy my image with money?" Neil stammered that he didn't mean it like that at all, but the Archbishop ordered them to leave, saying he didn't want to hear another word. Moira immediately jumped up from the sofa and headed for the door, telling Oscar that he would pay for this. Oscar wondered if every idiot had memorized a collection of cheesy villain one-liners or something. Nothing had changed in 20 years. Before Moira could leave, Oscar decided to mock him, adding with a smirk that he had already registered the patent for both the treatment and the vaccine at the palace. Moira spun around in surprise. Oscar continued, saying that if they wanted to sell their treatment, they would have to pay the White Tower a tax. Otherwise, they could just throw it away. The mage's face turned beet red with rage before he quickly stormed out of the room, while Neil respectfully said goodbye to the Archbishop. As he passed Oscar, a specific scent caught his attention, making him turn in surprise. He remembered that the man had once told him that he smelled unusual, like a fresh and clean, minty aroma. Oscar stared in shock at the departing man, and only snapped out of it when the door closed. The Archbishop laughed and told him to have a seat, saying they could finally talk. Oscar thanked him and sat down, and Baldwin said it was best to agree, but on a price first. He mentioned the Blue Tower and Neil were asking for 2 million bells. Oscar just smiled and said if they wanted 2, he would ask for 5 million. This made the Archbishop laugh nervously, but he didn't object. A few hours later, Oscar returned to the tower with a check for 10 million bells, leaving Fidelina in a state of complete shock. Oscar just smiled and shrugged, and she immediately rushed to hug him, exclaiming that she knew he could pull it off. Maxim patted him on the shoulder and said he believed in him, and when the check got to Hamill, he asked what on earth had happened, saying the Archbishop would never have paid that much. Oscar replied that it included some additional fees. The vice priest asked what the money was for, and Oscar simply said it was for advertising. The tower's official story has to be that Archbishop Baldwin had a divine vision about the flu outbreak, which gave them just enough time to whip up a vaccine. He's gunning to become a cardinal next term, and claiming a revelation from Mother Earth will make him look way better than the other archbishops. He must have loved the idea, because he dropped a cool 10 million bells on the contract, way more than they were even asking for. In return, he made them promise that they would crank out the vaccines within a single week. Hamill was floored, calling it absolutely incredible. The disciplinary action only required paying back 3 times the embezzled funds, and Oscar had just smashed that by 400 times over. At that point, they were calling his punishment complete. Any objections? Fidelina cheerfully chimed in that she was totally fine with it, and Hamill told Oscar that if he needed backup, to let him know, since the schedule was going to be brutal. Oscar said they needed to round up every mage level 4 or higher they could find, as many as possible. The vice chief promised to get it done and said that he'd leave the final selection of volunteers up to Oscar. He then turned to Elder Fidelina and asked her to make a tower-wide announcement, and she happily asked what she should say. He grinned and told her the potion lab was hiring mages, level 4 and up. Anyone who signed on would get paid and would be eating meat at every meal. A few hours later, a massive crowd of mages had swarmed the lab, all hyped for the meat, and debating if it would be pork or chicken. Frank walked into the lab, shocked, and muttered that he never would have expected such a turnout. Oscar clapped his hands to get their attention and asked them to listen up, but not a single person even glanced his way. They just kept on talking about the reward. Fed up, he snapped his fingers and cast a sound trap spell, unleashing a high-pitched squeal that made everyone immediately cover their ears. Oscar once again asked for their attention, announcing that they were all there to produce a vaccine for the Kadana flu. He told them flat out, "I need your help." The mages just looked at each other and started mocking him. He called times us, times here. Why would our little prodigy suddenly decide he needs our help? And how's he gonna make all this? Is this just another one of his scams? Oscar was genuinely shocked by their reaction and asked his friend if they really disliked him that much. Frank confirmed it and told him to think about how he'd been acting. He was rude to everybody. He blew through the tower's funding. He had 0 scientific results. And on top of all that, he was constantly boozing. Oscar gave a nervous smile and wondered, was I really that much of a jerk? He thought he had at least tried. That's when Lena White approached him and asked if she could ask a couple of questions. The White Tower's potion-making secrets had been lost a long time ago, so how were they supposed to create a medicine? He simply told her that he had restored them, which made one of the mages gasp. For real? His friend just grumbled for him to think about all the cash he'd wasted on drinks. Lena, meanwhile, pressed him, Asking if its effectiveness was proven, he confirmed it was, and added that they had already signed a contract with the order. She replied that in that case, its value must be unbelievable. If the formula gets out, the promise of meat would mean absolutely nothing. Why would he trust them, but enough to share such valuable information? He pulled out a list and said he'd be straight with them. He doesn't understand why they're still hanging around the White Tower. Lena frowned, annoyed, and shot back. Is this how someone asking for a favor is supposed to act? I've clearly just wasted my time here. She started for the exit, saying she didn't know what their great genius was trying to pull, but no one there had to listen to his insults. But then Oscar said that he knows exactly what each of them gave up for the White Tower. His words stopped her in her tracks. She turned back in shock as he said that she's a 5th-level mage, 25 years old, chasing her talent with caution. 7 organizations, including the Red Tower, tried to poach her, but she turned down every single offer. He then looked at Harak Dryan and said he was 26 years old and a 5th-level mage. The royal palace recognized his combat magic skills and offered him a job as a royal mage, but he refused. Beckhart Rain, a 5th-level mage, 26 years old. The Imperial Academy offered him an instructor position 4 times, but he said no every time. Sia Rose, a 4th-level mage, 23 years old. The Golden Tower tried to recruit her for her creative take on alchemy, but she also refused, shot them all down. And everyone else he couldn't even name got the same kind of offers. If he'd been offered a similar deal, he wasn't sure if he could have refused, but not a single one of them abandoned their post. Lena then asked, so, the elders knew about their secret meetings? He confirmed it, saying that they really had no choice but to play dumb, since they wanted to avoid getting dragged into it. The White Tower is currently weathering the harshest winter of its existence. And in this situation, even though any one of them could have escaped to a warmer place, they all chose to stay right here in the freezing cold. If he can't put his faith in people like that, then who can he possibly trust? He wiped away the tears welling up in his eyes, which earned him a strange look from Frank, who said that if those guys don't want to help, then there's nothing to be done. The low-level mages will just have to work themselves to the bone. His friend asked indignantly, you weren't just talking about him, were you? Oscar ignored the question, and just told him to get a move on. Since it was just the 2 of them, they needed to get to work right away. He put on his protective goggles with a sad, disappointed expression, and Lena watched him thoughtfully before coughing awkwardly into her fist and walking over, asking if they just needed to get all this gear on. Herrick also came up to them, asking why he assumed they'd have to handle everything alone. Where should I start? Sophia asked, as she rallied the others. A surprised Frank told Oscar he'd actually won someone over with his speech. Maybe he was dreaming. Oscar noted that it was definitely a good dream, and before they started, he warned them that when he said meat, he didn't mean pork. A collective sigh of disappointment went through the lab. They figured they were getting stuck with some cheap meat, but when they heard it was going to be beef, everyone cheered up immediately. In the end, the vaccine production was a huge success, hitting 140% of the original target. A week later, Oscar went to the greenhouse for his usual routine of reading the paper and relaxing. He spotted petals arranged in the shape of a heart on the lawn and wondered, was this that old man's doing? Apparently, he was back. Oscar was sure the vice chief had found him and dragged him back by the scruff of his neck. He'd have to go see him. Taking a seat, he opened the newspaper and scanned the headlines. The Vince territory declared the pandemic over just 2 days after the Kadana flu vaccine was distributed. Could this be the shining beacon that signaled the beginning of the White Tower's rebirth? A single stone tossed into the potion market had created a tidal wave. Oscar Crucian had been nominated for this year's Peace Prize. The White Tower's official comment was, it was all thanks to the goddess's grace. Archbishop Baldwin's popularity among the people skyrocketed. Oscar was delighted that everything was going according to his plan, just as Frank ran up to him to share the great news. Orders for the vaccine were pouring in from every direction. He started jumping up and down with pure joy, asking, have you seen the list? The Northern Territories, the Knightly Orders, even the Imperial family have put in massive orders. That 10 million bells is nothing compared to this. Oscar calmly replied that if you want to live, you're naturally going to buy the vaccine. The most pressing problems had been solved for now. Frank looked disappointed and asked, the demand is going to drop off after a while, though, right? Oscar faked his surprise and exclaimed that he was smarter than he looked. He had realized the demand wouldn't last forever. The guy gave him a dirty look and asked if he thought he was an idiot. Once everyone is fully vaccinated, who's going to need this vaccine? The next major flu outbreak won't happen for at least several decades. Oscar told him that they didn't need to worry about money. He had already developed a potion that would always be in demand. Frank was ecstatic, exclaiming, so you restored more than just that one formula. You had a plan for this all along. His eyes sparkled with excitement. He asked if it could possibly be Star Tier, the potion of legends. Oscar told him that the potions they'll be selling are going to be low and medium rank. The time for Star Tier wasn't right yet. Star Tier is the most legendary restoration potion of White Tower. Rumor has it that its miraculous properties can even bring the dead back to life. Releasing Star Tier would cause an incredible commotion throughout society, once it's out. The development of that potion would attract every hyena trying to steal the production methods. This time, however, he was safe since he'd managed to use the Archbishop as his cover. They needed to raise the White Tower's status first. He told the guy that since he brought it up, he could be the one to go and collect the ingredients they needed. He instantly regretted it, saying he should have kept his mouth shut. Oscar then asked him to gather some lantus leaves, pison stems, and Frank cut him off, shocked, asking, you need more? Just getting the first 2 is going to be a nightmare. He had no idea what Oscar was even talking about. since those are Siren's signature products. Oscar explained that was ancient history. All the fields where they grew had been totally destroyed. Our main character was completely floored by this news. With that, they set off. By late evening, they finally reached the flower fields, and Frank, exhausted and trudging behind, couldn't help but complain. But Oscar had totally lost it. Did we really have to come all this way just because you didn't believe me? Did we seriously have to hike to a place that even a carriage can't get to? Oscar just told him to hang in there a little longer, saying they'd already covered 10 miles and were almost there. Frank gave him a bewildered look and asked why on earth he was using units of measurement that went obsolete 18 years ago. Hearing this, our main character was totally taken aback. His friend exclaimed, "What's gotten into you lately? We've been measuring distance in meters since the last war, and pounds were switched out for grams. Have you been digging through ancient books for potion recipes or something?" Our MC was in total shock, thinking, so they got rid of pounds, too. Sure, the math is harder with pounds, but that was half the fun of doing the calculations. He took a moment to mentally pour one out for the old units of measurement, just as Frank spotted a house up ahead. He went up and knocked loudly on the door, calling out to see if anyone was home, and it slowly creaked open. An old man appeared in the doorway and asked if they had really traveled all this way. Frank confirmed it, adding that the carriage could only take them to the entrance of the path. Just then, Oscar spotted some cars tearing down the road and asked who they were, noticing they weren't showing any respect for the flower fields. The cars pulled up right near the house, and some rich-looking guy got out, turned to the old man, and asked if he was finally ready to sell his land today. The old man opened his door wider and stepped outside, and the rich guy asked if he was done putting up a fight. "We're offering 10 times what anyone else would pay." But the old man refused, saying he wouldn't sell even if they offered to build a castle out of pure mithril. The rich man just sneered, saying he could keep joking for now. "What do we care if you're just gonna die here anyway?" This businessman's name was Deor Pawal, and his target was the herbalist, Ivan. The old man told him to mind his own business, but Deor insisted he was just trying to look out for him. "Just sell us the land, and you can live out your last days comfortably. The second a factory opens up nearby, this land is going to be worthless anyway." Ivan shot him a dirty look and told him not to mess with him. "As long as I'm around, nobody is getting approval to build a factory here." Deor realized he wasn't going to get through to the old man, so he told his guys to pack it up. Before getting in the car, he looked around and noticed they'd messed up several flower beds on their way in. "Consider this payment for the damages," he sneered. He threw a stack of bills on the ground and then peeled out, wrecking a few more flower beds on his way out. Once they were a safe distance away, he turned to his men and asked, "Those kids standing with the old man, they were wearing white tower robes, right? What the hell are those beggars doing out here?" One of his lackeys suggested they were probably there for herbs, adding, "Not long ago, those same beggars made a fortune off that vaccine." Deor scoffed, doubting they could have actually created anything worthwhile. But his subordinate handed him a newspaper and said that the figures in it were the real deal. "Take a look for yourself." Deor scanned the paper for a few minutes, then rolled it up and smacked his subordinate on the head with it, shouting, in frustration, "Why are you just telling me about this now?" He started to bite his nails, his mind racing. What if the old man gets the White Tower to back him up? With their support, he could afford to hold out on selling for years. "I can't let that happen. I'm already barely making the interest payments on my loan." He barked at his subordinate. "Hey, you remember those mercenaries that contacted us a while back? We're hiring them. Immediately." His subordinate asked what specific job he wanted them for, and Deor snapped back. "Isn't it obvious?" The man then pointed out. "But that guy is officially appointed by the state." His boss whacked him over the head again and said, "So we'll just take care of him and make it look like he went missing. As soon as the owner vanishes, the land will be up for auction, where they'd swoop in and buy it." He cooled his head, admitting it was a shady deal, but hey, he had powerful backers. The guy then asked, "But what if the White Tower mages are still there for the night?" To which he shot back, "Then we'll just take them out if they interfere." This made his underling nervous, because that would mean real trouble. The 4 great towers would start snooping around their business. And on top of that, there was that old man, Ivan. The boss just scoffed, asking, "What's the worst that could possibly happen?" He claimed the 4 towers' influence was a story from a bygone era, and the White Tower was basically a wreck anyway. As night settled in, the 2 mages stepped out into the field. Frank, gazing up at the stars, remarked that the old herbalist seemed like a genuinely good person. After all, when evening arrived, he let them stay the night and even gave them a meal. Oscar smiled, agreeing with him, and thought back to what happened earlier. When they first met the herbalist, he had offered to put them up until morning, warning them it was too dangerous to travel back in the dark. Frank, feeling a bit awkward, had asked if he was absolutely sure it was okay. The old man replied that he had his obligations to the White Tower, which piqued Oscar's interest, while Frank asked about the guy in the car. Ivan then explained that the lunatic's name was Devour Paw. He's the kind of guy who makes people vanish, willing to get his hands dirty just to get what he wants. 3 years back, he went on a crazy spree, trying to buy up all the surrounding land, but Ivan wouldn't sell. A lot of herbalists either fled Siren or just disappeared without a trace, gone for good. A shocked Frank asked why the guy was going to such extremes, and Ivan explained that he wanted to transform the entire area into the continent's biggest industrial zone. Our MC then asked how he'd managed to hold on for so long. The old man replied that Devour couldn't lay a finger on him because it would only backfire. Turns out, he's a state-recognized master of herbal cultivation. Frank realized with a jolt that this meant he had protection from the imperial family. Oscar pointed out that if Ivan sold the land, he'd be incredibly rich, so why was he still hanging around? Ivan told him he was asking the obvious. The simple truth was, he loves this land. This is his home. He was born here, and he plans to die here. Recalling that conversation, our MC told Frank that Ivan was a truly good man. He even added that the flustered way the old man ran back inside was actually kind of cute. Frank then commented, "By the way, the stars are so bright out here," admitting he was a little envious. The MC asked, "What's there to be envious of?" Frank just smiled and told him that he was just curious what it's like to live such a full, vibrant life. He added, "Not that a genius like you would get it." Oscar gave him a quizzical look and said that Frank himself was pretty amazing. Frank, brushing it off as a joke, just thanked him. But our MC insisted they weren't just empty words, stating that he only ever says what he truly thinks. Frank got all flustered and quickly changed the subject back to the stars, making our MC wonder why his father, Oscar Jr., ever called this guy a problem child. He glanced up at the sky and mentioned that a long time ago, you could see the stars this clearly even from the heart of Sarin. He thought to himself that now the night is lit up by so many lanterns that the stars are totally washed out. What used to be an inconvenience back then now feels almost romantic. Frank remarked that it was such a long time ago, pointing out that Oscar was younger than him. Anyway, he asked, the herbalism tradition of Siren, can it really be brought back? Our MC replied that he didn't think it was impossible. He'd just need to chat with old man Ivan in the morning to be certain. But suddenly, he sensed something, stopping mid-sentence and whipping his head around. Frank got nervous and asked why he was so tense all of a sudden. "What is it? You see a ghost or something?" Oscar replied that it wasn't a ghost, but people, 4 of them, to be exact. Frank stood up and said cautiously that he couldn't sense anyone at all. And Oscar knew that Frank's mana sense was pretty sharp, yet even he hadn't picked up on it. This meant they were clearly not here to make friends. Oscar told him to get ready. "Looks like we've got company." Meanwhile, the mercenaries from the Jack gang were making their way towards the herbalist's house. One of the mercs, Max, asked his buddies what their deal was. He reminded them that the last time he brought up an offer to take out the old man, they'd turned him down flat. Devourpaw was just that scared of the fallout. His senior colleague shot back. "Does it really matter? He was just following the employer's orders." Max reminded him that they had a bounty on their heads up north. "Don't you think you're being a little too passive?" he sneered. Just then, they reached the house, and their sharpshooter told them to cut the chatter. "We need to stay sharp," he warned. "We were told there might be mages here." The senior merc clarified, "Not might be, they are." "From the White Tower, you say? Well, that's good news. It would have been a real headache dealing with any of the other great towers." Max smirked, saying he sure hoped they were in there. He'd been itching for a fight with a mage for a long time. Jingling his lockpicks, he turned to his boss and asked if he should head in. The boss gave a nod, and as Max slid the lockpick into the keyhole, he thought about how dead quiet the house was. The old man must be completely knocked out. He slipped inside and spotted someone sleeping under the blanket, then pulled out his dagger, thinking this was way too simple, almost disappointingly boring. And with no mages around, it was a total letdown. But when he got a closer look at the blanket, his eyes went wide. He immediately scrambled for the exit, cursing his lungs out, as our MC coolly pulled his hand out from under the covers, thinking the guy was a little too clever for his own good. Extending his index finger, he fired a wind bullet that pierced straight through the man's head, then crawled out from under the blanket. Looking at the body, he thought to himself that it wasn't half bad. The wind bullet is one of the spells detailed in a new interpretation of Magic's Basics by Oscar Jr. himself. It's a combat spell based on re-engineering the White Tower's wind magic to function like a gun, and it was even faster than he'd expected. So, that just leaves 3 of them. He stepped outside, only to be slightly surprised when he saw only 2 men waiting. The shooter asked him what happened to Max, and he answered, with a grin, "He's taking a nap in there. A really long one, in fact. Might even be a permanent one." The old man muttered that Max was a complete idiot. After all, he'd warned him not to let his guard down. The shooter then asked Oscar to just tell him where the herbalist was. If he did, they wouldn't hold a grudge over what happened to Max. Our MC mentally noted that taunts didn't work on these guys. They avoided useless fights. Such professionalism. So he suggested that maybe they should hold on to a little bit of a grudge, prompting the shooter to order the old man. "He's asking for it. Kill him." The old man immediately sprang into action, charging toward Oscar and striking, but Oscar threw up a wind barrier just in the nick of time, deflecting the weapon before dashing right past him. The old man watched him go and chuckled, remarking that it wasn't bad, and Oscar just smiled back. The old man then raised his weapon, exclaiming that he didn't know about its unique ability. What a shame. But while he was busy talking, our MC was already prepping his magic. The old man's weapon split in 2 as he lunged, shouting that Oscar was finished. But Oscar instantly created another wind bullet and said, "This is even cooler than I expected." It shot toward both of his blades at once, and as the old man tried to fight back against the bullets, he nervously thought that this was impossible. It had caught him completely off guard, but he kept his composure and launched a sophisticated counter. His blades couldn't withstand the onslaught of the bullets. Oscar smirked and said, "That's complete garbage, not a unique weapon. There's nothing new about it at all." He stopped mid-sentence, sensing something, and quickly jumped to the side as the old man yelled, "What? You're retreating right when you have the upper hand? Are you making fun of me?" A second later, a gunshot rang out. The bullet tore through the old man's body and continued straight for Oscar. Even though he put up 3 wind barriers in front of him, it still got through and sliced his cheek. Without a second thought for his own comrade, the shooter had intended to finish him off, but it didn't work. Oscar noted that if he had been any less vigilant, he would have been a dead man for sure. Our MC looked at the dead old man and asked, "Wasn't he your colleague?" The shooter replied, "To be precise, He was a subordinate, an easily replaceable one. MC frowned, thinking that these criminals were absolutely disgusting, and asked, "So what kind of toy are you holding there?" The man reloaded his pistol and said it would be a shame to hear him call it a toy. "Let's just say it's incredibly expensive." Oscar noted that the gun was enchanted with 3 spells: acceleration, amplification, and penetration. "I'm right, aren't I?" The man froze at his words, then looked up at him and asked how he knew that. Oscar touched the cut on his face and told him, "I couldn't block your bullet completely," and the man thoughtfully remarked, "You're arrogant, but with your kind of talent, I guess it's to be expected. How about coming to work for me? I pay my subordinates very well." Our MC refused. Just the thought of it made his skin crawl. The shooter chuckled and noted that was fair. After which he said, "I guess this means there's no more point in talking." Then, several shots rang out. Some time passed. Oscar, having given the gunman the slip, he was now hiding out in the tall grass, wondering how the former leader of the magic tower had ever gotten himself into this mess. Since his own wind bullets were faster, a head-on fight was a losing battle. He only had half his mana left. He couldn't run forever, and this idiot had one crucial weakness: the time it took him to reload. After firing 2 shots, he was defenseless while reloading his pistol, which took 1.4 seconds. He glanced over at the shooter, who was now stalking through the flower beds looking for him, and figured there was 1 shot left, which meant he had to end this in 1.24 seconds. He activated his acceleration magic and bolted toward his opponent. The gunman, hearing the sounds, immediately spun around to face him. He leveled his pistol at him and let out a loud laugh, commenting on how fast he was, but that a mere human could never defeat Trinity. He aimed, fired, and in a split second, the bullet shot across several meters and slammed into the barrier. He smirked, already believing victory was his, but to his complete shock, the bullet just slid right along the barrier's surface. The MC prepared a spell and started moving toward him. In the meantime, the gunman began frantically reloading his pistol, thinking, how did that happen? With acceleration alone, there's no way to dodge that bullet. But he didn't dodge. So, could it have been his shield? By the time he finished reloading and looked up, it was already too late. Oscar had a wind bullet aimed right at him. He stammered in fear, asking how a low-level mage could possibly do that. The MC fired, saying he wouldn't have understood anything even if he had explained it. After finishing the job, he breathed a sigh of relief, then picked up the gun, thinking it was a real pain. It's called Trinity. Acceleration, amplification, and penetration, that's what he calls it. It's a seriously impressive weapon. Even he has a tough time handling it. He had reduced the friction on the surface of his windshield while increasing the strength of the inner coating, which made the outer layer more flexible and the inner one much stronger. That's why the bullet couldn't pierce the barrier and just slid around its perimeter. If that plan hadn't worked, he would be the one lying on the ground right now. Once he gets back to the White Tower, he's going to need to learn some magical methods to counter modern weapons. He'd already tested his limits after just a few spells with this incomplete body. Naturally, his first priority was to successfully rescue Frank and Ivan. He had initially sensed 4 people, and since he'd already dealt with 3 of them, the last one was now hunting them down. Meanwhile, a gang member had cornered them in the forest, and Frank was telling the old man to run on ahead. Ivan was worried about him, but Frank told him that he'd be perfectly fine. He was plenty strong, but he wouldn't be able to fight properly as long as Ivan was there. He promised he would catch up with him soon. He squeezed his shoulder and told him to be careful before leaving. The mercenary remarked that their goodbye was so touching. Did he just say his farewells? Frank asked why he wasn't running after him. Did you come after me? The man laughed and asked, who the hell do you think you are? Did you seriously believe I would chase after the old man and let you get away by yourself? Frank frowned and didn't say a word, and the man continued that the old man was, of course, his target, but he was always curious what was so special about them that made everyone fear the mages of the 4 great towers. He drew his sword and gave it a swing, then lunged at him, screaming that he would finish him off first. Frank immediately cast a windcutter spell at him, but as the man landed on the ground, he shattered it and yelled that it was way too simple. Let's see you whip up something more interesting. He quickly closed the distance and plunged the sword into him. After that, he laughed hysterically and shouted, is this all the great White Tower has got? But something felt wrong, namely the sound the blade made as it entered his body and the fact that he didn't even have to put any effort into it. He tried to jump back, realizing something was off, but Frank grabbed hold of his sword and sliced a cutting spell across his neck, making him immediately drop to his knees and choke on his own blood. The mage said he had a somewhat special constitution, and the hole in his chest rapidly began to close up with the help of the wind. His opponent collapsed to the ground, and he took a step back in disgust, just to avoid getting any blood on himself. Meanwhile, Oscar was hiding behind a nearby tree, watching and ready the entire time. He figured out that Frank was a special kind of mage, and also possessed the spirit of the wind. It never would have occurred to him that Frank had access to magic that allowed that, to phase part of his body into pure air. Since physical attacks were useless against him, you'd need magic or a sword aura to even touch him. Even he, the master of the magic tower, had only ever encountered this rare magic in ancient texts, and those records only tied it to the 7th tower master. It was an innate magical ability. He never imagined Frank had inherited this wind spirit. Stepping out from the shadows, he called Frank's name, making the kid jump in surprise. Frank yelped that he'd scared him half to death and asked when he got there. Oscar replied that he'd just arrived, admitting he was worried, but it looked like Frank handled things perfectly fine on his own. Frank shot him a smug grin, so Oscar asked why he was celebrating so soon and where he'd left Ivan. The mention of the old man got Frank all worked up, and he started shouting for him. And our MC realized that with the right training, This kid's potential could easily outstrip a dozen high-ranking mages. He then pointed off to the side, saying that they needed to head that way, as he could sense Ivan's energy. By morning, they were all back at the herbalist's house, where Ivan grabbed Frank in a tight hug, thanking him profusely. He declared that if it wasn't for Frank, he wouldn't have survived to see the sunrise. Frank just smiled awkwardly, insisting that Oscar was the one who helped, but Ivan wasn't having it. Oscar chimed in, saying Ivan forgot about one swordsman, and that without Frank, they would have been in serious trouble. Stunned, Frank asked him to repeat that. Oscar clarified that if it hadn't been for him, the whole situation could have ended horribly. And Frank, turning beet red with embarrassment, finally agreed, before waving his hands around excitedly and asking, "So, it's over, right?" Ivan replied thoughtfully that it wasn't quite that simple. A scoundrel like that won't give up so easily. If the first attempt on his life failed, he'll just find another way. As they sat around the table, Frank asked why this guy was so obsessed with the land. Ivan explained that it was the largest stretch of fertile land right in the heart of Cyrene. He added that the soil's fertility had plummeted over the last 8 years, all thanks to the tech factory in the western region, which dumps its waste into the Wolf River every single day. And if that man starts building factories even closer, a day will come when living here becomes completely pointless. If Cyrene's soil isn't given time to heal, they'll lose the ability to grow herbs here forever. Oscar thought for a moment, then told the old man he had a question. The day before, Ivan had mentioned a debt to the White Tower. He asked if he could possibly be referring to the promise of the fourth master, Ronaldo's. At the mention of the name, Ivan's eyes lit up, and he asked with a smile if Oscar knew the story. Frank, however, had no idea what they were talking about, so Ivan began to explain the history of his people. A long, long time ago, he said, people saw herbalists in a very different light. Back then, they were often accused of witchcraft, hunted down by mobs with pitchforks and torches. They'd be boiling strange herbs with unknown properties in the backspy.r, their cauldrons, and trying to sell them. Because of this, they were forced to live as nomads, far away from civilization. But then, a savior appeared and took them under his wing. This man was known for his incredible foresight, and his name was Ronaldus. He was the fourth master of the White Tower. He told them to make their way to Cyrene, saying it would become their home, for them and their descendants for centuries to come. There, no one would ever look down on them again. At this, our MC quoted Ronaldus's exact words, leaving the old man pleasantly shocked, remarking how touching it was, as he'd never heard the precise wording before. Oscar simply said he'd read it in a storybook, though he knew it was actually from an ancient tome passed down from one tower master to the next. Ivan smiled, explaining that after Ronaldus's promise, herbalists from all over the continent flocked to Cyrene, and for the very first time in their lives, these wanderers finally found a place to call home. Frank was amazed, and the old man continued, saying the White Tower gave his ancestors both a home and their pride back. So how, he asked, could he ever turn his back on it now? Oscar was deeply moved by his words. He stood up and bowed, thanking Ivan for his dedication. From this day forward, he declared, the White Tower would stand with him. The old man immediately asked what their plan was, and Frank chimed in that the imperial family would surely spring into action the moment they learned someone had attacked a national cultural treasure. Our MC gave them a look of disappointment. He'd just made a moving speech, and they didn't even react. Ivan voiced his doubts, saying he wasn't sure they'd be in time. He couldn't just abandon his lands. The imperial family is incredibly thorough, he explained, but because of that, they move very slowly. And if Dev launches a full-scale assault in the meantime, it would be a disaster. But Oscar just smiled and told him not to worry, saying the imperial family will be here any minute, since today's the day they signed the contract to produce a cure for the Kata flu. Later, over at De Powell's office, it was in total chaos. His people were packing in a panic when De turned to his subordinates, snapping in frustration. How did he manage to screw this up so badly that, it's come to this, the moment we leave this place, we're finished. Just then, a loud crash startled them all, and members of the National Security Bureau burst through the door and rushed in, ordering everyone not to move. Senior Inspector Walker from the Imperial Ministry of the Interior's National Security Bureau approached the quaking businessman, showed him a warrant, and announced his arrest for attempted murder, blackmail, illegal acquisition of property, and destruction of national cultural heritage. Deor got extremely agitated, yelling that they had the wrong man and that he was an honest businessman. Walker retorted that they would be the judge of that, telling him to shut up before ordering his assistant to make the arrest. The assistant pulled out a pair of cuffs, and D looked down nervously, thinking he couldn't handle this on his own. He just had to figure out a way to contact Timesam Asterisk, and he'd somehow get out of this mess. He pulled out a cigar and, with a shaky grin, said he'd go with them, but asked if he could at least have one last smoke. Walker didn't even blink. He simply ordered his men to cuff him and haul him away, while the businessman shouted that he was making a huge mistake, and asked if Walker even knew who he was dealing with. Walker calmly replied that he had no idea, but that His Majesty the Emperor was backing him, and asked if D knew anyone more important than the Emperor. Deor went pale as he was handcuffed, and Walker coolly took the cigar from his hand, watching as he was led away. The inspector noted that criminals always have the most valuable things. His assistant, Doran, then spoke up, saying he had one question. What kind of person were they dealing with that they had to move in on the very same day? He couldn't recall this ever happening before. Walker simply told him it was an order from the top, adding that His Majesty is quite fond of the White Tower. Doran clearly didn't understand what he was talking about, so Walker just told him it was adult business. He then walked to the window and lit a cigarette, thinking that he honestly didn't understand the big deal. So what if they were heroes in the past? That was 20 years ago. He mused that even if you launch a bird with broken wings from up high, the only difference is how fast it falls. In his opinion, the White Tower of today deserved exactly that kind of treatment. He then called out to his assistant, asking him how old he was this year. Doran said he was 23, and Walker noted that this meant 20 years ago, his assistant was just 3 years old, while he himself was 12. He remembered the very day humanity won the war against the demons and finally achieved true freedom. What kind of power did the White Tower wield back then that the people in charge still clung so tightly to its memory? Snuffing out his cigarette, he told Doran they had to get going, as there was one more place they needed to visit. Doran looked surprised, thinking their work was done for the day, but Walker informed him that unfortunately, this was not the case. He headed for the door, telling the rest of the team to finish up and go home. Doran followed close behind, asking where they were going now. Walker told him they were going west to issue an order for the factories to stop illegally dumping waste into the Wolf River. He then admitted that he himself had added it to the schedule. He wasn't entirely sold on the White Tower itself, but those two guys, Oscar Crushen and Frank Sirius, had gotten rid of Gunner Jack's gang, and so this was his way of repaying the favor. Doran suggested they grab something to eat on the way, but Walker shot down the idea, saying they would eat only after their work was finished. Evening fell soon after, and the boys arrived back at the tower. Frank stretched and said they were finally home, then offered Oscar a drink, but Oscar turned him down, saying he had to report to the vice chief. He asked if Frank wanted to join, but Frank hesitated, and when Hamill came around the corner, he got super antsy and quickly excused himself, saying he had urgent business. Hamill approached Oscar and commented that he thought he'd just seen Frank, asking if he was mistaken. Oscar told him that he was right, but that Frank had dashed off like he was on an urgent mission. The old man laughed, remarking that it must be something important, while Oscar thought to himself that it was hilarious. Hamill noted that Oscar had once again solved a serious problem, even though he'd only sent them out for a stroll. He then said he would listen to the report in his office. He confirmed that's exactly where he was headed, gesturing for him to come along. As they rode the elevator up to his office, MC couldn't help but notice the old man's odd frown. The old man then asked if Frank had mentioned anything unusual to him. Oscar assured him everything was fine, but pressed, did something actually happen? The old man revealed he'd received a letter from the Sirius family, stating they wanted to take Frank back home. Oscar immediately asked if he had agreed to it. The old man admitted he wasn't sure, explaining that they'd already spoken with Frank, but he didn't know the specifics. This news unsettled Oscar, and right after his report, he rushed to Frank's room. He knocked, and from inside, Frank, who was packing a suitcase, called out, "Is that you, Granz? Come on in." But it was Oscar who burst in, demanding to know who Granz was. Frank explained he's from the Empire's biggest trading company. Right. When Frank saw it was him, he called him a scoundrel, figuring he'd already heard the news. Oscar shut the door behind him and got straight to the point, asking, "You're leaving the White Tower?" Frank apologized, saying he couldn't bring himself to tell him beforehand while sober, and then offered him a drink. He explained he had to go back to help with a family business and, on top of that, he had to get married. Oscar asked when he'd managed to find someone, but Frank admitted he was just told that she was a nice girl from a wealthy family, which meant it was a good deal for his family too. Oscar pointed out it was just a marriage of convenience, and Frank didn't even seem to mind. Frank just smiled and said she's pretty, kind, and her family's loaded, so why would he be against it? But Oscar clarified he wasn't talking about the wedding, he was talking about his magic. The moment he brought it up, Frank's mood soured, and he insisted there was nothing he could do. This was simply the limit of his talent. He confessed that, honestly, he'd always thought he was special, and figured that by joining the most looked down upon magic tower, he could at least be a big fish in a small pond. He quickly apologized for saying that, claiming he loved the White Tower, but continued, explaining that after he got here, he realized things were completely different. He just hadn't faced reality. He admitted he couldn't even earn enough to support himself, so he understood his family's decision to call him back home. But Oscar cut him off, sternly saying his full name, which made Frank look up and ask why he was being so formal all of a sudden. "Is it because I called the White Tower worthless?" Oscar looked him dead in the eye and said, "You are talented." Those words hit Frank hard. Frank turned away, embarrassed, and thanked him, saying that at least he got to hear that from a genius before he left. Unimpressed, Oscar crossed his arms and told him he was being completely serious. "Maybe you want to find out what it's really like to be the head of a snake." Just then, their conversation was cut short by Frank's older brother, Franz. He strolled into the room, glanced at Oscar, and asked if he was a colleague. Then, he turned to his brother, pointed at his watch, and said he'd give him 5 more minutes, so he needed to wrap it up and come downstairs. As he started to leave, he told Frank to finish up his goodbyes, but Oscar stopped him, asking how much longer he needed Frank for. Granz turned back, annoyed, asking who he thought he was to butt in. Oscar introduced himself and said that he was Frank's friend. Granz recognized the name, asking if he was the magician behind the new vaccine. He then introduced himself as Granz Sirius, this idiot's older brother, and the deputy head of the trading company. Oscar boldly offered him a deal, which made Frank panic, while his brother just scoffed at his audacity. "I heard you were a genius. Is that really true?" Pretty bold for a kid to be proposing a deal to the Sirius family. But Oscar calmly stated that in his deal, neither side would lose a thing. "In 2 years, I will make Frank the top mage in the White Tower." A stunned Frank pointed at himself, asking, "Are you serious?" Oscar insisted that this would bring their family immense profit in the long run. Granz, intrigued, asked what would happen if he failed. Oscar replied that in that case, he would transfer the rights to all profits from the sale of the Kadana flu vaccine for the next 50 years, directly to the Sirius Trading Company. Frank was outraged by the offer, but he was completely ignored, and Granz questioned if Oscar even had the authority to make such a promise. Oscar assured him that the tower's deputy head would act as a notary, to which Granz replied that he had something else on his mind. Are you willing to go this far, because this guy actually deserves it, or is it just because he's your friend? Frank could only watch, looking down, bracing himself for Oscar's reply. But when Oscar said it was because he deserved it, Frank's eyes lit up. His friend then revealed his plan to restore the White Tower's reputation to its former glory within 5 years. The new medicines and vaccines were just the opening shot, a signal to the world that their comeback was starting. He grabbed his friend, pulling him in close, and declaring that to achieve this, he needed Frank for real. Frank was the exact person the White Tower of his vision required. Frank stared in shock, but his older brother Granz cut in, remarking on how young Oscar was. As a merchant, however, he wasn't about to give up a valuable asset just because the guy he was dealing with seemed a bit naive. Instead, he was adding one condition. Oscar shot back that he thought his offer was already more than fair, pointing out that Granz had forgotten one crucial thing. The only thing more important than money is trust, and Oscar didn't make deals with just anyone. So, Oscar had to prove he could hold up his end of the bargain. Granz gestured to his 5th-rank knight bodyguard, proposing a duel for noon the next day. Once Oscar's abilities were proven, he'd agreed to the deal. Oscar asked incredulously, "You're adding this condition knowing I'm a 2nd-rank mage?" Hearing this, Granz just waved his hand dismissively, and said that in that case, they'd make a rule that the knight wouldn't use his sword aura. Oscar realized this was Granz's way of saying he had no intention of handing Frank over. Apparently, this arranged marriage was with an incredibly difficult family. Granz left, tossing over his shoulder that he'd see them at noon. "If you don't show," he added, "I'll consider the matter dropped." Oscar knew that even he would struggle against a 5th-rank knight, and Frank asked anxiously what he was going to do. He offered to call the whole thing off right then and there. Frank even offered to go plead with his brother, insisting Granz was just trying to teach Oscar a lesson and was really starting to get on his nerves. "Even if it's embarrassing, I'll go with you." But Oscar just looked at him and said he thought they could handle it, prompting Frank to exclaim, "How can you, a 2nd-tier mage, possibly compete against a 5th-tier knight?" Oscar replied with a question. "A 4th-tier mage could probably hold his own, right?" Frank asked how on earth he planned to reach the 4th tier in less than a day. Oscar replied that while he times couldn't do it, he could take a mage who was stuck at the 3rd tier and push him to the 4th. He gripped Frank's shoulders, pointing out that Granz never said Oscar himself had to defeat the knight. He only said he had to prove his abilities, so all they needed to do was put on a good show. Frank looked at him, completely lost, not understanding what he was getting at. Oscar then confidently declared that he would make Frank a 4th-tier mage, and Frank would fight in his place. After that, they headed to the tower's training hall on the 40th floor. Frank was still doubtful, saying he didn't think they could pull off anything in just one day. After all, he hadn't been able to do it for the past few years. Oscar assured him it was possible, but Frank had to trust him completely. Frank agreed that he trusted him, and Oscar instructed him to stand in a relaxed pose, close his eyes, and begin circulating his mana. Frank did exactly as he was told, and Oscar, carefully watching the mana fluctuations, approached and poked several spots on his body, explaining that these were points where he was losing energy during his mana circulation. Because of these leaks, the efficiency of his magic was terrible. Frank asked in amazement, "Can all geniuses see this kind of thing?" Oscar replied that only he could. He then added with a touch of irritation that Frank could jump an entire rank just by fixing this simple problem. Frank asked, "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. It's something 99.9% of mages never even think about. However, that remaining 0.1%, the ones they call archmages, every single one of them has mastered this. From now on, you'll practice what I'm about to teach you every morning." He then circled Frank several times, pointing to different spots. "In these sections of your mana circuit," he explained, "there are sharp turns, and you're forcing your mana through them too quickly, which causes it to slam into the walls. The amount of mana you're losing is enormous. You have to be mindful of the speed. Here, you're moving it too slowly, so you'll need to speed it up. And in this other circuit, there are 6 input channels, so your mana has to be split into 6 streams. This is the only way to minimize waste and maximize the output." Frank's head was spinning from all this information, and he asked if he really had to think about all that every time he used magic. It just seemed like way too much. Oscar explained that the more he paid attention to it, the more second nature the process would become, just like breathing. Frank stared thoughtfully at his palm and asked, "So, is that all I have to do?" Oscar told him it wasn't nearly that simple, and asked him to demonstrate the magic he'd used in the fields. Hearing this, Frank flinched and, after a brief pause, asked if Oscar had seen everything. Oscar confirmed he had, prompting Frank to apologize and say he couldn't do it. Oscar pointed out that Frank had just claimed to trust him, but Frank clarified that wasn't the issue. He was just terrified because he'd nearly died the first time he used that magic. It was a known fact that if his magical abilities didn't awaken, his family would cast him out. Because of that, he grew more and more desperate with each passing year. While trying to discover a magic that no one else could replicate, a reckless idea came to him. What if it wasn't just a part of his body, but what if he could transform his entire body into wind? He thought he would become unbelievably powerful. At first, he actually believed he had succeeded, but as the wind continued to consume his body, he realized he couldn't stop it and became horrified. It was a complete disaster. After half of his body had turned to wind, his mana went completely haywire. He screamed for help, utterly terrified as the wind reached his head. If the Tower Master hadn't happened to pass by, he wouldn't be here today. To be more precise, he would have been completely wiped from existence. At that point, he was helpless. He grabbed his own shoulders with trembling hands and said that he never wanted to experience that feeling again, his very soul shattering into hundreds of thousands of fragments before disappearing. The MC noted that he had used the magic perfectly out there, but Frank replied that it only activates automatically in life or death situations. He looked down, dejected, and asked, "Isn't that just pathetic?" Oscar immediately insisted that it wasn't true at all, and told him to never feel sorry for himself. Plenty of mages run into problems like this. Is that really true? Frank asked in surprise. Oscar confirmed it, adding that the solution was actually quite simple, as he picked up a piece of chalk. In Frank's case, the problem was his inability to manage his mana, so they just needed to bridge that gap. Frank retorted that it was easy for him to say. Mana control is all about raw talent, so how was he supposed to improve it? Oscar began drawing a magic circle on the floor, explaining that, normally, that would be a huge problem. However, there was a method to artificially boost that ability. Frank asked what he was doing, and when Oscar said he was drawing a summoning circle, he asked worriedly, "You're not going to make me sign a contract with a demon, are you?" The MC shot back that demons wouldn't come even if he begged them. After finishing, he dusted the chalk from his hands and turned to Frank with a smile, saying he was summoning a wind spirit to implant inside his body. Following that, Frank chanted the spirit summoning spell, but absolutely nothing happened. After a few seconds of silence, Oscar bluntly stated that his affinity with spirits was atrocious. Frank claimed he felt a slight wind, but Oscar replied that it was just him letting out a heavy sigh. The guy was clearly crushed, but Oscar told him not to sweat it. After all, an extremely small number of people actually have an affinity for spirits. Frank asked, "So, am I just doomed from the start? If he couldn't even summon a spirit, how was he supposed to get control of his mana?" Oscar answered that there was another way, recalling a visit to the Elven Kingdom in his past life. There, he had learned about the spirit summoning ceremony. The elves had him try it out of curiosity, and he actually succeeded. There was no way something that worked once wouldn't work again. They did, however, mention that he was the first human summoner in 118 years. Frank asked, "So what now? Do I just say the chant again?" Oscar told him to step aside so he could give it a shot, and as he stood in the circle's center, he thought that the Spirit King would surely remember him. He closed his eyes and focused. He recalled that the first time wasn't in some rundown training hall like this, but in front of a massive world tree. He called out to the wind spirit, asking it to come to him. Instantly, powerful gusts of wind swirled around him, forcing Frank to shield his face and exclaim. He did it on his first try. In the next moment, the wind spirit materialized before Oscar. He recognized it immediately and muttered to himself, "Is that the one? Who called to me?" The spirit drew closer. Its first time doing so in 27 years, recognizing him from their past encounter and stating its desire to form a contract. He asked if anything special was required. So the spirit crouched down to his level, explaining that nothing so formal was necessary. It said the most important thing was the connection between their hearts, then asked if he was ready to forge a bond of friendship with a spirit of the highest rank. Celestine? To the spirit's utter shock, he refused. He then realized he should have explained everything from the start, and pointed to the young man behind him, saying with a smile that he had performed the summons for his friend's sake. The following day, they went to the dueling grounds to meet Granz and his knight. Granz turned to the deputy head, asking if he slept well, and noting that his presence must mean he agreed to the terms of their deal. The old man confirmed it, admitting that while he had many reservations, he decided to agree since the developer of the flu potion was just too persistent. Granz said that in that case, he would gladly accept his part of the bargain, after which he introduced them to the knight fighting that day, Lasley Morgan, a 5th-level knight. Lasley shook Oscar's hand to introduce himself as Granz began explaining the duel's rules. A simple variation where the first person to remove the necklace from their opponent wins. If there was no victor after 5 minutes, it would be considered their loss. MC noted that these terms were quite favorable and suggested they begin. An official handed him the necklace and added that the duel could be stopped at any time by raising a hand. He was asked if he was sure about fighting in such an uncomfortable-looking suit. Oscar just said it was fine, since he wasn't the one fighting anyway. After he said that, Frank stepped into the arena, which completely surprised his older brother, who demanded to know what was going on. Oscar replied that he wanted Frank to prove his own abilities, not for him to fight personally, adding that he had taught him a few things the day before. Granz was clearly annoyed but admitted it was his fault for not specifying that Oscar himself had to and be the one to fight. But he warned that if Oscar thought they would go easy on Frank, he was dead wrong. Oscar simply replied that wasn't it at all. He just figured a 4th-level mage had a better chance of winning than a 2nd-level one. The man had no idea what he was talking about, since his younger brother had only been a 3rd-rank mage just yesterday. MC slung an arm around his friend with a grin, saying that to make Frank the best mage in 2 years, he had to show at least this much potential. A scowling Granz ordered Lasley not to hold back, and the knight stepped forward. Meanwhile, Oscar gave his friend a hard slap on the back with all his might, telling him everything would be fine and not to be scared. He promised that if Frank did exactly as he was instructed yesterday, he would absolutely win. Frank gave a slight smile and a nod, then walked towards the knight, confidently telling his friend he would be back soon. Lasley bowed, noting that it had been a long time since they'd last seen each other. After that, Granz waved his hand, signaling the start of the fight. Frank immediately increased the distance between them, thinking to himself that 20 meters was the perfect range. But the pressure he felt next made him nervous. His opponent was radiating immense power. Even without a sword aura and from this far away, the threat he posed was intense. This was definitely a rank 5 knight. He was terrified. Because of this, he wanted to forfeit and even started to raise his hand. But when he noticed Oscar watching him, he froze. He remembered everything Oscar had said about him before, and a new confidence ignited within him. He clenched his hand into a fist and swung it, launching a wind cutter at his opponent, thinking that for the first time in his life, someone had said they needed him, and there was no way he could let them down. The knight easily blocked the attack, but several more followed, and he thought to himself that the kid had definitely improved, casting 2 spells at once, and even withstanding his pressure, he wondered if it was similar to the sword control techniques used in the East. Blocking the next attack, the knight decided he'd seen enough. He deflected the wind cutters back at Frank before breaking into a full-on charge. The speed made Frank nervous, and to block the charge, he threw up a wind palm in front of himself as a shield, while the knight tried to break through. To him, Grands demanded to know how Frank had gotten so much stronger in just half a day. He accused them of using some forbidden technique. MC just told him not to worry about it, had gone with a sensible, safe approach. The man just clicked his tongue, annoyed, muttering that he wasn't worried. As he kept watching, he thought, sure, he's grown a bit, but that was as far as it went. Just then, his knight broke through the wind palm and lunged at him, making Grands think that the life of a battle mage just wasn't for Frank. Since he was so much weaker than everyone else, this kind of growth would only end up hurting him. Maybe one day, getting injured would actually be a blessing. He'd be much better off working a desk job at the company. That way, he wouldn't have to go through all this suffering and make his family worry. He'd never be overwhelmed by his own magic again. Frank threw his arms up, in a desperate attempt to defend himself as the knight's hand was about to snatch his necklace. Oscar casually remarked that this was the end, and Grands glanced over at him, but when he saw the protagonist smiling, he was completely stunned. The previous night, after their training session, the MC had mentioned that the spirit transmigration was a success. It was just a shame Frank was such a low rank. So, how's that wind god technique feeling? It's working out pretty well after our session, right? Frank collapsed onto the floor, exhausted, and thanked him, explaining that after getting beat on for a while, the spirit finally came out on its own. The protagonist noted that he still hadn't mastered the ability to completely turn into wind. After all, they hadn't fully healed his old injury. Frank asked anxiously, does that mean I have no shot at winning tomorrow? The protagonist told him that wasn't true at all. Anything was possible, as long as he could use the wind god technique to 100% of its potential. Frank was confused and asked if he seriously thought that just turning his body into air was the whole trick. The protagonist explained that there was still the most interesting part of the wind god. What truly makes it invincible is unification, the power to turn absolutely everything that touches your body into air, whether it's an object or even your own clothes. This is the most ridiculously overpowered part of the wind god technique. In any fight, it's absolutely crucial to keep an ace up your sleeve until the very last moment. Winning a battle of wits is way more thrilling. And Frank used this advice perfectly, because at that very instant, his opponent's hand grasped nothing but air as Frank zipped right past him. A gust of wind shot past a bewildered Lasley, coming to a halt right behind him. Frank then snatched his necklace, stunning everyone in the crowd. His opponent yelled out, "Impossible." Frank stared at the pendant in his hand, then threw his arms in the air and shouted with pure joy, "I did it." Gran stared ahead, thinking in total disbelief. The wind god. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Every healer, even the magical ones, had said Frank would never be able to use that power again. Just then, the deputy tower head chuckled and announced, "Well, it looks like our match is over. Do you both accept the result?" The protagonist gave a casual wave. Grands shot him a look, thinking, did he really say he taught him that in just 24 hours? He then turned to his brother, who was shaking his opponent's hand and admitting his defeat. A moment later, Hemmel extended his hand and remarked, "You've come such a long and difficult way to get here. It's a shame you'll be leaving so soon." Grands bowed his head and replied, "Not at all." He then asked them to please continue looking after his little brother from now on. He then glanced at Frank and saw how much he had matured. Frank, catching his look, apologized and asked, "What is it?" Grands just turned away and said, "It's nothing." The MC, watching them, thought, "What a weirdo," and acted like he hadn't heard a thing. The very next day, a confused Frank stared ahead and asked, is this the entrance?" The protagonist nodded, pointing toward a set of doors that were leaking a terrifying aura. Frank yelled, "Why in the world would you think this door leads to a training hall? This is obviously the entrance to some underground prison." The protagonist replied, "Well, you're not entirely wrong. These rooms were used for that hundreds of years ago." Frank shouted, outraged. "Besides, I haven't done anything wrong, so why am I being sent to do solitary training?" The protagonist explained that it was a personal order directly from the deputy tower leader, which means he has especially high hopes for you. Frank grabbed his head in his hands, threw it back, and screamed, "So, if he has such high hopes, why the hell am I training all alone?" He'd barely gotten a single day to rest. The MC told him to look on the bright side, since he still needed time to get accustomed to the spirit. Plus, he needed to internalize everything he'd learned while pushing toward level 4. With that, the protagonist gave him a shove forward. Frank desperately stammered, "Well, yeah, but..." The protagonist told him not to be such a baby, saying, "You're not going to die in there." Then, with tears welling up in his eyes, Frank cracked open the door and whimpered, "Really?" The protagonist confirmed it, said his goodbyes, then slammed the door shut and thought to himself, "Sorry, man." He mused. "Honestly, I just wanted to ship him off to training." That evening, after the duel, Mel looked at our protagonist and asked if he really wanted Frank to spend the next 30 days in isolation training. Even though Frank won, Hemmel confirmed it, stating flatly, "He needs it." The deputy tower leader promised they would to cook up a nice surprise for him in a month. Our hero thanked him, and Hamel added, "Oh, by the way, I've got some good news. The Sirius Trading Company has offered us free use of their entire supply chain." Our protagonist was taken aback. For free? But his mind was already running the numbers, thinking, of course they did. It was a classic, calculated move for a trading company. The potential upside for Sirius, with the revival of the White Tower and Frank becoming one of the top mages, was practically infinite. Their intentions were obvious, but it was a win-win. With that, he looked back at the deputy tower leader and said, "That's truly great news." Hamel then moved on to the next topic, saying he had a request. He wanted to know if our hero would be willing to give a lecture. This caught the protagonist by surprise. A lecture? It wasn't that he couldn't, but as he took a sip of his drink, he thought that maybe he should be focusing on potion making at this point. Placing his cup down, he asked, "Is there a specific reason why the mages of the White Tower need to get significantly stronger in such a short amount of time?" Hamel grinned, remarking that he was a sharp one, this Oscar. He brought up the Night of Magic, which our hero confirmed he'd heard of, a day when mages from all towers gather in one place. This event was originally meant to showcase each tower's performance and the skills of their mages. The Emperor's goal was to foster unity between the mage towers, but, as expected, it never worked out that way. Every gathering just devolved into a cutthroat competition. In fact, the Night of Magic was scheduled to be shut down in a couple of years, so why mention it now? Our protagonist connected the dots. His Majesty, the Emperor, wants to revive it. Hamel confirmed that was correct, though it wasn't public knowledge yet. The imperial family was planning an official announcement with more details after the new year. He admitted it might just be an old man's paranoia, but he was wary of the Black Tower. That name stuck in our protagonist's mind as Hamel explained that as long as the Black Tower was vying for a spot among the 4 great towers of magic, the White Tower was their most likely target. He said that right now, all his guys were giving it their all, but he still had a bad feeling. Hearing this, our protagonist confidently declared, "I'll take care of it," thumping his chest for emphasis. Mel noted the distinct change in Oscar's expression. Sometime later, on the 36th floor of the Magic Tower campus, our hero walked down the hallway, thinking, so the Black Tower thinks it can make a name for itself? What a joke. The White Tower will be toppled over my dead body. It's a good thing I managed to drag Frank's skills up to the 4th level. The spirit summoning ceremony had been a complete game changer. He was so relieved it had worked. Just imagine, a demigod remembering some pathetic human who couldn't even keep a promise. A few days earlier, during the summoning, the spirit had pointed an accusatory finger at him, shouting, "No way. Who summons a spirit just so someone else can make a contract?" The protagonist tried to calm him down, but the spirit just yelled, "How am I supposed to calm down?" That's when our hero played his trump card, Salafion of Serenity. He needed her to know that White Mage had returned. The spirit scoffed. "You dare speak the name of the Spirit Queen aloud?" But in the next second, its jaw dropped in shock as the Spirit Queen herself asked, "So, who is this mortal?" A command she rarely gave for a mere human. Our hero simply looked at the spirit and said telling him would ruin the surprise, asking, "So, is it a yes or a no?" The spirit reluctantly replied that she had only given permission for an infiltration, not a full-on contract. For our protagonist, that was more than enough. He was grateful. Then the spirit added that she had one more message for him. He must not forget his promise. With those words echoing, our hero approached a door and thought, she doesn't need to worry. I'll definitely keep it this time. I only failed in my past life because I died so suddenly. He had saved so many lives in the White Tower thanks to her, and he intended to repay that debt with interest. It was then that he noticed a flyer on the door, announcement of a special lecture, with its participation criteria listed. The main requirement, be a White Tower mage. The lecture's topic, a different interpretation of the basics of magic. The schedule was set for every Monday and Thursday, from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. The location, the main building, on the 36th floor, in the 4th lecture hall. The protagonist picked up the notice and thought, but first, I need to check on my family a little more. Sometime later, a mage slinging his jacket over his shoulder remarked, "Well, look at this crowd." He figured everyone he knew was long gone, since it had been so long. Amy waved and gave him a friendly greeting. He walked over and asked if this lecture was for those who hadn't managed to reach the 3rd level yet, noting he didn't see anyone ranked higher than that. She figured it was probably because they were just going to cover the fundamentals. After all, the mid-level mages were all incredibly busy. Rena clenched her fists and said, but it looks like the rumors were true that the White Tower got more funding. She'd heard this lecturer was personally invited by the tower's deputy head, and the lecture itself was being held right in the main building. This was the exact same place where the Imperial Seminar on Observation was held. Amy turned to her and said the lecturer must be some kind of big shot. At that very moment, Damon Proud, the sole heir of Proud County, waved his hand dismissively and told them not to get their hopes up. All this fuss over a lecture hall that nobody even uses. Rena shot back, "Damien, don't you think you're being a little too pessimistic about this?" He replied that if this was a serious investment, they would have set up a high-level, invitation-only lecture, just like the other mage towers, not some fluff piece about a different interpretation, the fundamentals. "Isn't it obvious just by looking at who's here?" he scoffed. Every low-level mage but one showed up. If this was such an amazing lecture like they claim, then our so-called geniuses from the 2nd level would be here too. In the next instant, the MC cut in. "That's enough chatter," as he cast a sound-capturing spell. The mages stared at him in utter confusion. One of them, grabbing his throat, thought, "I can't hear a thing." What the hell is going on? Complete silence. The protagonist strode to the front of the hall and said it was a pleasure to meet them. He was the lecturer who would be teaching them a different interpretation of the basics of magic, Oscar Crucian. The students just stared, completely baffled. They all thought, a second-level mage is our lecturer? Then the protagonist added that he was sure. Many of them were disappointed that he was their teacher. The students thought, well, at least he's self-aware. What could a low-level mage possibly teach us anyway? They figured he must be embarrassed. So he used magic to stop them from complaining. Then the MC announced that if they had any objections, they were free to leave from the room. They weren't just students under a teacher's thumb anymore. However, he had one condition. He pulled an hourglass from his inner pocket and explained that they first had to prove with their own skills that they didn't need his lectures. He set the hourglass on the table and said he would give them 10 minutes for the task, during which they simply had to state that they didn't want to be in his class. Simple enough, right? The students scoffed internally. Yeah, right. Does he think we're complete idiots? They realized he'd taken away their ability to speak and was now asking them to refuse out loud. This is a test. He's only second level, so it's definitely not a true silence spell. We don't know what kind of magic this is, but we can definitely break it. Damien gritted his teeth, realizing. So, he means that, if we can't even break this spell to speak our minds, then we really do need this lecture. The protagonist sat down, and watching the students struggle, thought that this would be a good test of their abilities. He had intentionally left a few weaknesses in the spell, but that didn't mean it would be a walk in the park. After a while, the sand in the hourglass had almost run out completely. He thought, so, no one. But in the next second, Damien shot to his feet and yelled, it worked. The MC thought, this kid was on the list of entry-level mages. That's right, Damien. Then he snapped his fingers and congratulated him. Damien replied that the spell was suspiciously simple, so he had taken his time to solve it carefully. A moment later, the spell lifted for everyone, and the other students cheered. Hey, I can hear again. I was so close. Then the protagonist picked up the hourglass and announced, quiet, time is up. Damon was the only one who passed the test. He smirked and said, naturally. So that means I don't have to attend these classes, right? The protagonist replied, of course, you're free to do as you please. Damon was stunned, wondering why he was being let off the hook so easily, in some strange way. Honestly, after a start like that, he was actually curious about what the class had to offer, but now it would be awkward to admit he genuinely wanted to learn. Our protagonist stood up, figuring it must be because he was still a kid, but all of the students' thoughts were written all over his face. He announced that as a reward for being the only one to complete the task, he would personally teach him one spell, telling him to come up to the podium. Once the student was there, our hero asked which basic spell he favored the most. The kid answered, Wind Cutter, so the MC told him to show him what he could do. The student focused mana into his palm and with a rush of power, he unleashed a wind cutter that flew around him, asking, is this enough? Our protagonist watched him for a moment before saying, not bad. Today, I'm going to teach you a real times wind cutter. The student shot back indignantly, are you blind to what's flying around me? The MC calmly extended his hand forward, remarking that by his standards, this wasn't a wind cutter at best, it was a crude version of one. He then reached out and grabbed the spell, right out of the air, explaining that there were two fundamental problems with it. The kid yelled in shock, what do you think you're doing? The MC replied, first, this spell isn't, but actually made from wind. Damien, what do you think wind is? Damien answered, surprised. Wind is the movement of air. Our protagonist then began his lesson. Water remains water, even when it's collected in a jar. Fire is still fire, no matter what shape it takes. However, wind is only truly wind, as long as it's constantly moving and flowing. The MC looked at Damien and added that this meant he hadn't created a wind cutter, but rather an air cutter. Just as stagnant water rots, magic made from non-flowing air is fundamentally unable to maintain its shape. You have to remember that the White Tower works with wind, which means your magic must flow without interruption. If that doesn't happen, it will constantly break apart, just as you've demonstrated. Damien then asked, so what's the second problem? Our hero replied that the spell casting itself wastes way too much mana, and that even just cutting down the cost would be a massive improvement. Damien asked, stunned, how he figured all that out from just one glance. The MC explained that after achieving a certain level of mastery, you can learn a great deal from the way an opponent casts their spells, things like their personality, their habits, and even, if you'll allow me to be tactless, for a moment, I can infer a little about your background. You come from House Proud, a family that has produced numerous high-ranking mages for the White Tower. So, I can assume that as a child, you were constantly watching your family perform magic. Naturally, you tried to imitate them, and Wind Cutter was likely one of the first spells as you attempted to copy, and if this was before you received any formal training, imitating it must have been extremely difficult, seeing as it's one of the most challenging basic spells. As you kept trying, you eventually managed to brute force it by using far more mana than required, and that bad habit has stuck with you ever since. I suppose overwhelming it with mana is ×1 way to do it. Damien's jaw dropped in absolute shock. The MC just looked at him, putting a hand to his chin, and added that now that they'd identified the problems, mastering a perfect wind cutter was just a matter of practice. It's a real shame, of course, that such a promising student has no interest in my lectures. Damien whipped around and blurted out, who said I wouldn't be attending? After that, he marched back to his seat. 3 weeks later, the school was buzzing with chatter among the students. Have you heard the rumors? One guy asked. What kind? That Professor Oscar is an absolutely amazing lecturer. His buddy at the next table over leaned in and asked. So, best case scenario, his lectures only really help the newbies who are stuck at the most basic level, right? The first guy shrugged. Who knows? Several of our friends, the level 4 and 5 mages, are still attending. Another friend then asked, should we go too? The first student slapped his hand on the table and said, frankly, I was just waiting for one of you to say that. We should head over right now. Someone else pointed out. But it's only 7 o'clock, right? Doesn't the lecture start at 9 o'clock? The first guy replied that they needed to get in line ahead of time. Otherwise, if they showed up late, they might not even get a seat. With that, he shot to his feet, and in the next second, it seemed like the entire cafeteria stood up with him. A short while later, Rena turned around in her seat and asked why there were so many people today. She could see quite a few 4th and 5th level upperclassmen in the crowd. Her deskmate also looked back and noted that this was supposed to be a basic magic lesson. Wait, is that Elder Maxim over there? Has this thing turned into a full-blown Magic Academy seminar? And just at that moment, our protagonist entered the room and wished everyone in attendance a good morning, explaining that the spell they'd be working with today was incredibly important and he was glad they came. The students clenched their fists in excitement and started to cheer. The MC then announced, the one spell that every single one of you must consider the most vital in a mage's life is breeze. In an instant, the students' expressions soured. One of them thought, that's the most basic spell in the entire book. Is he really going to lecture us on a spell so simple that even commoners use it outside the White Tower? Maxim raised his hand, explaining that while he only intended to observe, he was now too curious to stay silent. He had to ask, Oscar, are you really planning to teach this entire crowd just the breeze spell? The protagonist confirmed that was exactly his plan, so Maxim asked if he could have the elder demonstrate it for them. Caught off guard, the elder replied, all right. He extended his hand and cast breeze, sending powerful streams of wind spreading throughout the entire room. The students murmured in awe, is that really breeze? Not gust or wind pressure? Wow, that's the power of an elder for you. Maxim then asked, is that sufficient? The protagonist confirmed it was and thanked him, before calling on Amy Lavin. Startled, she yelped, yes sir. He then instructed her to show the class her version of breeze. She panicked internally. Why me? There are so many mages here who are better than I am. Hesitantly, she raised her hand and cast the spell. The student smiled, pleasantly surprised. What's this? It feels so nice and warm. The protagonist then asked if anyone could point out the difference between the two spells. One student spoke up, the power and range, the temperature, too. Another student chimed in, the whole feeling is different. Then Veronica, casually resting her head on her hand, stated, the nature of the mana. The MC confirmed, correct, Veronica Fricks. She looked up, surprised, he knew her name. He continued, just as Veronica said, Elder Maxim's spell and Amy's spell differ in the very nature of the mana they're composed of. Isn't that fascinating? Even though the entire process, from spell formation to the final casting, was identical. One felt like a hot desert whirlwind, while the other was as gentle as a spring breeze. With such a massive difference, how can they both be considered the same breeze spell? Alright, let me ask you all one more question. Who here understands the concept of mana character? One of the students raised a hand and asked if he was referring to the 4 classifications of mana: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special. The protagonist replied that those are the 4 systems for categorizing mana, but he was talking about its temperament, which is a slightly different concept. To be more precise, they're conceptually distinct. To understand mana character, you must first consider the very roots of the White Tower. In other words, balance. He then picked up a piece of chalk and, while writing on the board, asked, who can explain why the White and Blue Towers are considered the representatives of balance? One student raised his hand and answered, is it because of the elemental properties they possess? The protagonist affirmed, exactly. The Red and Yellow Towers are faster and stronger, but they're fundamentally unbalanced. That's because there's no such thing as cold fire or cold lightning in this world. However, air and water can be both hot and cold, with no limitations. That's why they represent balance. But there's a clear distinction between the Blue Tower and the White Tower, even though they both embody balance. Take water, for example. The conditions required for it to boil are simple. He concentrated energy in his hand as he added, at standard atmospheric pressure, it just needs to reach a temperature of 100 degrees Celsius and be given a little time. It's that simple. However, creating hot air is even easier than boiling water. Air finds it much easier to assimilate with its surroundings, changing its state like a chameleon. At that very moment, Veronica covered her face with her hand and yelped, it's hot. While the student in front of her shivered from an intense cold, the MC just smiled, explaining that wind has far more freedom than any other element. It can display the mighty force of the Red Tower's flame, be as swift as the Yellow Tower's lightning, and possess the P's form creating freedom of the Blue Tower's water. Furthermore, while the Blue Tower's water won't mix with oil, the wind has no such limitations. It is the only element capable of manifesting any temperament, relying solely on the mage's imagination. Only air can be in harmony with everything in this world. As a result, you, as mages of the White Tower, must constantly monitor how you perceive your wind and what you see within it. You must ask what kind of essence, what do they consider it to be? That's the main point of today's lesson. Just then, a student looked at Maxim in shock and asked the elder, wind? Our protagonist yelled for them to wait. He ran over to the elder as Maxim said, wind for him. The student then extended her hand toward him and asked, elder, is he okay? The protagonist yelled, No, Maxim, however, was certain, saying, absolutely. Our hero then screamed for them not to touch him. He stepped closer and warned everyone to back up and give him space, insisting they couldn't disturb the elder's peace while he was achieving enlightenment. Rena walked over to him and asked, why is this happening all of a sudden? Our MC answered, it's all right, he's undergoing an awakening. The very next moment, Maxim's eyes snapped open. The protagonist asked, how are you, elder? He answered, I didn't quite manage to reach level 8, but even so. He suddenly pulled the protagonist into a hug, thanking him. Then he corrected himself, saying that as the teacher, he was the one who should be grateful. Our hero just smiled, saying he was happy to hear it. Maxim laughed and clapped him on the back. The protagonist closed his eyes and thought, thanks to this, the next classes will be much easier. Now, no one ranked below him will dare to make a peep in his direction, and the biggest bonus ended up being my encounter with Veronica. He'd finally caught the eye of one of the problem children, listed in little Oscar's diary. The next day, as our protagonist walked down the hall, he thought to himself, Veronica said something interesting was happening in this gym. He remembered how yesterday, after class, she'd asked, hey, Oscar, you working out? He'd replied, of course, to which she added, but you don't use the fit gym, it's not part of the ratings. Don't you know about the innovative future training gym? Then she shot him a look of complete disdain. He figured she must have started the conversation off friendly enough because she liked the class, but now he had to figure out why she was looking at him like he was a bug. How could she possibly know that he wasn't using the fit gym? He then approached the door, wondering, so, this is it? He remembered hearing that there were only 3 of these training gyms out of the 300 on campus. Even the door is a different color. Could it really be that special? He placed his hand on it, thinking, if they were going to make it this distinct, why not make the doors magical so they open on their own? He then walked inside, put his hands on his waist, and looked thoughtfully around the room. What's so different here? He wondered. The whole vibe was off. A second later, a voice greeted him. I am Argo, a next-generation training assistant system. The protagonist immediately thought, so this room is a product of magical engineering, which means all the money for it must be flowing right into the hands of those morons from the Yellow Tower. The system then stated that upon registering the user's information, it could generate a personalized training course. Do you wish to register? He answered in the negative. The system continued. Registration denied. Commencing training as an unregistered user. Please select the desired difficulty level. Our MC repeated, difficulty level? The system explained. This program contains 100 levels, and you can train at a level that matches your abilities. The protagonist said to start him off at level 1. Accepted, the system responded. In the next instant, 3 balls appeared in front of him. The system instructed him to pop all 3 of them with either physical or magical attacks, warning that area attacks would result in an early termination of the training. Before the system's voice had even finished its announcement, the system was already congratulating him for passing the first level. Is that right? Not bad, our MC thought. He also liked the rule that area of effect attacks weren't allowed. Since it was that easy, he decided to crank up the difficulty. The system then prompted him to choose a new difficulty level. He answered, 100. The room was immediately flooded with red light as the system issued a warning. Starting at level 80, the size of the balls would decrease, but their speed would increase significantly. They would also begin to act aggressively toward the user. The elderly, children, and pregnant women were advised to discontinue the training due to the risk of death. Our protagonist simply said it was fine and to continue. He stretched his neck, curious to see what all the fuss was about and just how amazing it could be. Instantly, a ball shot past his head. The system informed him that the objective was to destroy 1,000 balls using physical or magical attacks. It reiterated that using area of effect attacks would terminate the training. Furthermore, if he was hit more than 10 times, the session would also end. The very next second, our MC unleashed a wind cutter, aiming it at the orbs, which shot across the room. He figured he just had to pop all of them, right? But a move like that would drain way too much mana. It would be better to use as little force as possible. He launched his attacks over and over, wondering if it'd be more effective to shrink the size of the cutter and make it sharper. He dodged another orb and thought, but seriously, this training is way beyond what a kid should be doing, isn't it? He flipped in mid-air, evading another orb before unleashing a few more attacks. The system congratulated him once again. Our protagonist dropped to one knee, trying to catch his breath, and the system announced that he had cleared level 100. The MC collapsed onto the floor and smirked. Not a bad warm-up, he thought. So, this is how mages of this generation have been training since they were kids. The standards these days are way higher than in the past. I'm going to have to work harder and eat well to build some muscle. He stretched his hands out in front of him, and in the next moment, Veronica walked into the room and asked in surprise, "What are you doing here?" She clearly didn't expect to see him. He noticed she must have been training here since this morning. Veronica put a hand on her bag and asked, "Did you think I just dropped in for a bite to eat?" Normally, he would have just blown her off, but something was different. He smiled and replied that he just decided to stop by. A healthy body means healthy mana. That was his new motto, apparently. She was stunned. Why? That was never his motto. Then, the protagonist wished her luck with her training. She watched him leave, wondering if he ate something weird for breakfast. And why the hell did he suddenly steal a famous quote from the sage Oscar and pass it off as his own? Why? Had the guy who always looked down on her just because he was born into a noble family, even though they were both orphans, suddenly changed so drastically? She'd only been testing the waters when she asked him about this place. After that, she tossed her bag onto the floor, strode forward, and said, Argo, level 50, for a warm-up. The system responded, request, accepted. She asked, any changes to the rankings? Killian is still up there. Before she could finish her thought, the system reported that there was an update. She was taken aback. What? This should show. A system window popped up in front of her that read, First place, AAA, level 100, 9 minutes and 57 seconds. Second place, Killian Lockwood, level 100, 14 minutes and 2 seconds. Third place, Veronica Fricks, level 100, 14 minutes and 55 seconds. She asked, AAA, who the hell is that? The system stated that it could not disclose personal information. Veronica asked, is it an elder or something? No. The rankings only include mages below level 5, and this person shattered the demonic 10-minute barrier. Isn't that a continental record? The system confirmed that it was, in fact, a record. She pressed. So, who is this record holder? The system simply replied that it could not disclose personal information. Veronica pushed again. Is it really Oscar Crushin? Once more, the system stated that it couldn't disclose personal information. She scoffed. Damn it, who cares? The system chimed in. Profanity is not permitted. Meanwhile, the MC was walking down the hall, rolling his sore shoulder muscles and thinking, man, these are gonna hurt tomorrow. Then Maxim called out to him. He was surprised to see an elder. He walked over and wished him a good morning. The elder asked if he'd had breakfast yet, and he replied that he just finished, right on time. Maxim said he wanted to ask him something. Our protagonist asked, what's up? He replied that Fidelina told him the merchants at the market were refusing to buy their potions. The protagonist, shocked, asked, what, why? For real? Maxim replied, yeah, I think they're scared of the blue tower's reaction. Since I'm in charge of potion production, I figured you should know. We're trying to figure out how to handle this. A little while later, the MC, fuming, thought to himself, those pathetic cowards, how can they get away with this? And why is the line in the cafeteria so damn long today? He noticed some postal workers standing nearby. One of them turned to his buddy and asked where he was assigned today. His partner answered, delivering letters to the 1st through the 5th house on Laud Street. The first guy said, to the post office? Lucky you. His buddy laughed and asked, by the way, did you hear? They're raising our salaries, starting today. The protagonist, watching them, thought, are those guys wine writers? I think so, one of them said. Finally, right? Yeah, about time. It looked like they could finally breathe a little easier. But still, his partner added, wouldn't it be smarter to just focus on the territories and shut down the delivery service already? He replied, I know the tower leader is serious about the delivery service. He admitted he didn't quite get why, though. What does she even see in such a tiny market niche? Our protagonist mused that the delivery business really isn't a huge slice of the market. It requires a ton of workers, and the profit margins are razor thin. It has zero political connections, so it's not some backdoor way to gain influence. The only real upside is that regular folks appreciate this service more than anything else the magic towers do. One of the delivery guys grinned at his buddies and said, yeah, but it's hard work. Still, there are plenty of perks to this job. Another chimed in, saying it was true. And besides, the elderly often treat them to a meal when they deliver heavy packages. Our hero looked at them, a little surprised. Then he spoke up. Sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you guys something? Do you interact with people a lot on your delivery routes? They answered, yeah, we have to at least get the recipient's signature to confirm the delivery. The protagonist shook one of their hands, saying, you've been a huge help. Feeling a surge of inspiration, he suddenly turned and bolted in the other direction. A short time later, HL was sitting at his desk, looking at our hero. He asked, so, let me get this straight. You want to use the Wind Riders, our delivery guys, for door-to-door sales? Our protagonist replied, exactly. HL continued, I get it. Since the merchants won't work with us, you want to go straight to the customers. But is that really realistic? Our potions aren't exactly daily necessities. Our protagonist shot back, then I'll just develop new ones. HL raised an eyebrow. Innovation? He replied, you wouldn't even call it innovation. He started scribbling down notes, adding, the White Tower has a mid-grade recovery potion with the highest potency, right? We can just tweak the formula slightly and create 4 different versions, split by age and gender. That'll be our core product line. We could even design it so that they can be taken together. Then we can bundle the elasticity potion with the muscle strengthening one. We just have to adjust the ingredients to make them more affordable, and it'll be a hit. We should probably work on the names, too. The current ones are way too complicated for regular folks. What would be a better name, since it helps with nutrient absorption? A few days later, an old man sat on a bench, sighing to himself about how he'd been feeling more and more drained with age. Just then, a delivery guy jogged up to him, calling out, Mr. Graham. The old man looked up. Oh, you're here already, he said. The young man smiled. Good to see you again, sir. He handed over a letter, saying, got a new one for you today. As the old man took it, he remarked, well, I guess this means my friend's not dead yet. The worker added cheerfully. They say your generation is full of centenarians. No reason he should be kicking the bucket now. Graham was taken aback. A generation of centenarians? Ha! Even me, at 80 years old, I'm starting to feel my head and body just getting heavier with each passing day. The magician asked with concern, are you feeling sick, sir? Graham shook his head. No, just have no energy. The magician reached into his bag. Well, in that case, maybe you should try this? Graham looked curious. What is that? The magician pulled out a small bottle, explaining it was the tower's latest invention. It's a tonic. The bottle was labeled S0. The old man asked again, "What kind of tonic?" The magician explained, "It's a zero-grade tonic designed for the elderly. It boosts your immune system and gives you a boost of energy." Graham was skeptical. "And what difference will it make if an old man like me drinks that?" The magician smiled. "A huge difference. Sir, I sincerely hope to be delivering letters to you for another 50 years. Do you know old Mr. Miller, the man who lives over on 2nd Street? He started drinking this last week, and just today he told me that he's going hiking tomorrow." Graham's eyes widened in disbelief. Miller had knee problems so bad he could barely walk. The magician then leaned in and whispered, "This tonic was developed by Oscar himself, the incredible genius from the White Tower." Graham's brow furrowed. "Oscar? That name sounds familiar." "He's the same magician who developed the cure for the Kadana flu," the delivery guy reminded him. The old man's face lit up in recognition. "Oh, that Oscar." He cleared his throat and asked, "So, how much does it cost? If a genius like that made it, it must be expensive." The magician replied, "It's recommended you take just 1 bottle a week, and it only costs 30 bells." Graham practically yelled, "No way, this isn't the first time someone's tried to rip me off with some snake oil tonic. None of them ever worked. I don't trust you lousy pharmacists anymore." The postal worker asked, "You didn't really think I was just handing over something this expensive, did you?" "Of course not. But I do have a special offer for you." The old man eyed him skeptically and asked, "A special offer?" The worker replied, "You're a registered resident of Siren, aren't you? We have an exclusive deal for locals. If you sign up for a yearly subscription, we'll deliver a bottle of tonic every week for just 799 bells. We even offer a monthly payment plan." Graham figured that if he cut back a little on drinking and smoking, he could easily afford it. Then the worker added that the first bottle was completely free. Graham snatched the tonic from his hand and started chugging it, yelling, "Well, give it here, you scamp. You should have led with that." A little while later, the old man was resting in bed, marveling at how incredibly light his body felt. He'd just eaten breakfast and wondered if it was all because of yesterday's tonic. He hopped on his bike and rode down the street, thinking, all this from just 1 bottle? Soon, he rode up to a fountain, where a table with a chessboard was set up. One of the men, Miller, noticed him and shouted, "Hey, old-timer. I haven't seen you in so long, I thought you'd finally kick the bucket." Graham retorted that he just needed to lie down for a couple of days because his whole body was aching, adding, "Don't you worry, I'm not going anywhere before you. You'll be waiting a long time." He then challenged him to a game. A short time later, Graham confidently placed a chess piece and shouted, "Checkmate." Miller asked in disbelief, "Have you been secretly studying this whole time? What's gotten into you?" Graham replied that he was just able to concentrate better today, feeling as if he were 10 years younger. Another old man in the group pointed at him and said, "Whoa, you must have gotten into something expensive while you were resting, huh? Did your grandkids give you some kind of fancy elixir or something?" Miller added, "Come on, you gotta spill the beans." Graham replied, "Actually, it wasn't an elixir. I just tried a tonic from the White Tower." The men were surprised. "A tonic? You mean that homeopathic junk, right?" Graham insisted that it wasn't, saying this stuff really worked. "You guys gotta listen." Meanwhile, back at the tower, Lena announced they had a problem. The protagonist, busy with paperwork, asked without looking up, "What's wrong? Did a batch of potions go bad or something?" She handed him a newspaper and said, "Yeah, and if this keeps up, we're going to be in deep trouble. The Blue Tower is having a 50% off sale on their potions." The newspaper headline announced the Azure Dragon Winter Warming Sale. Moira claimed she started the sale to help the poor stay healthy during the harsh winter. Our MC told them to just look at that. How precious. Lena was indignant. "You think that's precious? They're obviously trying to run us out of the potion market. With a discount like that, they won't even make a profit. What other reason could there be?" With that, she buried her face in her hands. The protagonist, looking at her, said, "It's no big deal. They can only keep that up for 2 or 3 weeks, tops." She yelled, "What? That's almost a month, and by then we probably won't even be able to set foot in the market. We need to start selling the Kadana flu cures along with the restorative potions." The protagonist replied, "Absolutely not. That's exactly what the Blue Tower wants. If we try to profit from the Kadana flu disaster, the public will be outraged, which gives the Blue Tower the perfect excuse to paint us as the villains, claiming we're holding people's lives for ransom." She asked, "Then what? You want us to just sit back and take the hit?" He asked. "We still have a ton of potions in stock, right?" She confirmed they had so many that they wouldn't even notice if 100 or 2 went missing. He set his scroll aside and remarked that this was perfect. A perplexed Lena shouted, "Perfect?" He explained that he had the recipe for the 0 series of tonics and that they could afford to use all the mid-grade potions in their inventory to refine them into tonics. She asked, shocked, "The entire stock?" He countered, "What's the point of hoarding potions that aren't selling? We'll even throw in some bonuses. Let's say if one family buys 2 bottles of the 0 series, we'll tack on another discount, and then the purchasing power of families with children and the elderly will skyrocket." Lena unrolled the scroll, and after reading the contents, declared that she would never again fall for a simple discount. His business sense was terrifying. He scratched his chin thoughtfully and said, "We also need to pay the information guild too. Spread a little rumor. That's possible, right?" She asked. "What kind of rumor?" He replied with a smirk, M0. "Wouldn't it be hilarious if word got out that it also helps a man with his performance? For a man's vigor asterisk?" She asked, completely stunned. "Is this really going to boost sales?" He just told her she'd have to see it to believe it. All she needed was a little patience. He promised the sales would be massive. Fast forward 3 weeks to the Blue Tower. Moira crossed his arms, thinking smugly. It's over. We absolutely demolished them. He glanced at the graph, sketched on the board, confident that the branch manager was going to love this. Just then, there was a knock on the door. He called out for them to enter, and in walked the department head. The department head called his name, making him jump. Yeah? Moira asked. Did you catch the news? No, not yet, he answered. That's when the head of the Blue Tower's potion department slapped him across the face with a newspaper. Then what the hell are you smiling about? He roared, throwing the paper on the floor and ordering Moira to pick it up and read it. Yes, sir, Moira mumbled. The department head then screamed. Is this seriously the best you could do? He raged that Moira had torched all their profits for these pathetic results. The paper reported a massive victory for the White Tower, who had launched a new line of tonics. A staggering 10 million units were sold in the first month alone, and their Zero series had become the go-to gift for aging parents. On top of that, a product meant to boost a man's vitality, the M0, was discovered to have an unexpected side effect that really supercharged men's health, leading to a complete sellout. The headline read, "The White Tower's unstoppable tonic continues its epic success story." Moira's mind was racing. Tonics, not potions. But this product wasn't on the open market, was it? There's no way I wouldn't have known about it. Then, his eyes caught another article, which highlighted the White Tower's clever door-to-door sales tactics and a subscription service, making it ridiculously easy for people to shop from home. Damn it, Moira thought. Of course, with a strategy like that, the sales numbers on the open market wouldn't show the full picture. The department head snapped, asking if he'd seen the part where the White Tower announced they were making their potion discounts permanent. They claimed they were greatly impressed by the Blue Tower's move. The paper quoted Oscar directly, saying he was deeply touched by the actions of their comrades at the Blue Tower. And now, following their noble example, the White Tower was promising to keep their own potion discounts in place forever. It's a total scam, Moira yelled. They plan to sell at that price all along. The department head took a menacing step forward. And how would the public know that? He snarled. They've never sold these vials before. You were just staring at this graph, thinking you'd won, weren't you? Well, now, no matter how much pressure we apply, the market can't just ignore the White Tower anymore. People are going to specifically demand potions from them now. He grabbed a marker, extended the graph downwards, and said, and when you factor that in, our profits will end up way down here. I hope you're ready to be busy. Are you apologizing? Seriously? The head scoffed. Moira replied that, to make up for the damage he'd caused the Blue Tower, even working for free for the rest of his life wouldn't be enough. Sometime later, on the eastern side of the continent, in the Yan dynasty, a massive monster swung its arm. The warriors below braced themselves for an attack. One of them, hand on his sword, yelled, "We have to stop it." Another warrior chimed in, "It can't be allowed to reach the settlement. We need to form the .ol.any.any.ol. 9 dragons in a wind cloud formation." But, before he could even finish the sentence, a devastating blow from the monster sent him flying backward, crashing hard onto the ground. A warrior at the front stared in despair, wondering what they could possibly do now. He saw a flicker of confusion on the monster's face, and in the next instant, Shasha descended from the sky, coolly stating, "Found you." The warriors could only gawk at her in astonishment. She declared, "You will return to your lands peacefully, unless you'd rather I return you to the dirt." Pointing a hand forward, she unleashed her innate magic, tireless wind. The monster seemed to just disintegrate in a matter of seconds. "This sort of thing has been happening way too often lately," she commented. One of the warriors cautiously asked, "Are you from the White Magic Tower?" She glanced at him. "Are you Zhongchun?" He blurted out. "My apologies for the late introduction." She was correct. He was from the 9 Dragon Sect. Shasha pulled back her hood, revealing her face. "I am Shasha Maest, Master of the White Tower," she announced. "Did you bring what I requested from the 9 Dragon Sect's leaders?" He quickly handed her a newspaper, confirming that he had. "Here, please take it," he said. "You asked for a newspaper from the Empire, correct?" She nodded, confirming it. The man added that lately, the papers from the West were filled with articles all about the White Tower. Shasha looked down at the newspaper in her hands, a surprised expression on her face as she began to think. Was terrified to even look at it. What if their tower went bankrupt in the 2 months she was away? What if they'd been permanently stripped of their status as one of the 4 great towers? If that were to happen, she could never face the master again. But the newspaper claimed the White Tower was continuing to write its own success story. She stared at it, completely bewildered, and started frantically flipping through the pages. She blurted out, "Is this all made up?" Chun asked, "What are you talking about?" She then asked, "Did he just invent all these stories so I wouldn't get upset?" He quickly waved his hands, insisting, "Of course not." She went back to reading and thought, "Okay, I can believe everything else. But how are the deliveries doing so well?" She hadn't even factored in the success of that particular business. At the time, she didn't start it to make a profit. She had other goals in mind. Finally, she folded the newspaper and said, "All right, in that case, I'll be on my way. Please have the payment for the order sent to the Imperial bank account." He bowed and replied, "Understood." The very next second, she shot into the sky, flying forward, at high speed. She wondered, what in the world is happening at the White Tower right now? A little later, Lena crossed her arms and remarked that he was, without a doubt, a wizard. The MC asked, "What's she talking about?" Lena replied, "I was just thinking it all happened as if by actual magic. How could you possibly shake the Blue Tower with a single newspaper article? I still can't believe it. Thanks to you, sales of recovery potions have absolutely skyrocketed." he asked. So the public's reaction is positive? She replied, tons of cities besides Siren are putting in requests to start selling them. He thought to himself that this perpetual discount strategy was working out perfectly. He then remarked, that's wonderful. She added that since things were going so smoothly, she'd also cast a line out to the army, just in case they'd bite, but so far they've been unresponsive. He explained that the Blue Tower had offered them excellent terms for years, so they didn't see any reason to change things right now. And by the way, there weren't any problems with the potions expected anytime soon, right? So, she really didn't need to report all of this to him. And why was she even reporting to him anyway, she wondered? Isn't he the head of the potions department? She then asked. And what about the budget report? He replied, once a month is more than enough. She shot back. So you're just going to leave all the grunt work to me and what? Go have fun? He looked taken aback. Have fun? I'm busy, too. Now that the warehouses are filled to the brim, I need to handle internal affairs, like restoring lost magic textbooks. He figured it shouldn't take long, but no matter how much of a genius young Oscar is, a sudden breakthrough in the form of a top-tier theory would look suspicious to everyone, right? I've already played the unrecognized genius's card too many times. I'd rather present something like this under a pen name, a mage who is well-versed in magical theory and who is also famous, influential, and mature. Ha, as if someone like that would just fall out of the sky. Meanwhile, Xuanko, an elder of the White Tower and a magical theorist, opened the door to his room, stretched, and then looked out, saying it had been a long time since he'd seen the Sunday. A while later, Maxim said in surprise, it's been ages. Fidelina, who was standing nearby, asked, has it really been 3 months? How did the research go? Apparently, not so good, Xuanko confirmed. As they sat at the table, he grabbed his head in frustration and said he couldn't manifest the spell. He absolutely has to present it at this year's White Night Festival, but he still can't find the correct value for finite mana. Maxim told him not to rush things. His research is incredibly complex. Fidelina asked if he'd already spent 7 years on it, and he confirmed that he had. As soon as he found the correct value in the calculations, he'd be set. She remarked that it must be tough for him. After that, Maxim asked what he thought about getting some assistance. For example, there's Oscar. Xuanko looked up at him and asked, what? Then, he crossed his arms over his chest and declared, absolutely not. A first-level mage wouldn't understand the first thing about this kind of scientific work. Fidelina pointed out that he was actually a second-level mage now. He asked, is that right? She added indignantly that Oscar had been working very hard. Maxim then asked if she wasn't the one who used to complain about him, saying he was wasting budget money without getting any results. She just closed her eyes and said that was in the past. Maxim smiled and added that it was probably because Xuanko was too busy with his own scientific work and was out of the loop on the latest happenings at the White Tower. Didn't the whole vibe feel a bit different? He took a look around and confirmed it. The people seemed to be in better spirits, and in a way, you could say they'd all hit the jackpot. Maxim explained it was all thanks to Oscar's potential finally being unleashed. He was floored, and Fidelina added, you really should have seen it. It's a total shame he wasn't here. That's what went down. After a moment, Schwinn said thoughtfully, so, you're telling me the kid turned out to be a natural at alchemy. She added that it was more than just that. It was like he was possessed by the ghost of a legendary merchant. His business sense was just that incredible. Maxim held up his index finger and added, he's also a phenomenal lecturer. You would never have guessed he was only a level 2 wizard. When it comes to theory, he's right up there with high-level wizards, and that's no joke. He held his hands out, in front of him, and said, all right, everyone settle down. He'd meet with the kids since they recommended it, but he wasn't making any promises. He wasn't trying to be a snob. It's just that his work is on another level of complexity. The view from the first-floor windows and the view from the tower's roof are completely different. In other words, even if the kid was a genius, the perspective of a level 2 wizard is inherently limited. Not to mention, he was currently researching the restoration of the personal magic of a genius among geniuses, a wizard's wizard, archmage Oscar Sage. A moment later, the protagonist asked, are we jumping right into the test? He confirmed it. But first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Schwinn, one of the elders of the White Tower, specializing in magical theory and the recovery of lost spells. I'm swamped with a research project, and finishing it alone on schedule seems impossible. The MC thought, a well-known, influential, and seasoned mage who's an expert in magical theory. This is exactly who I need. The perfect person who met every single one of his requirements. Meanwhile, the elder looked at him and said it felt a little awkward to be testing someone he was asking for a favor. Our protagonist just smiled and replied, not at all. When you're looking for a research assistant, a knowledge test seems perfectly logical. He commented on his wonderful attitude. 50 minutes should be more than enough, right? The protagonist sat down, smiled, and said he'd do his absolute best. He figured that with Elder Schwinn in charge, nobody would even notice the work done by some second-rate mage. He thought to himself, jackpot. After a moment, he started flying through the test, thinking it was a complete joke. A 5th or 6th level theoretical mage could have solved this stuff in their sleep. Judging by the level of the questions, he just needed an assistant to catch simple errors, which meant he had to be in the final stages, having nearly found the correct mana values. Schwinn stared at him in disbelief, thinking, a level 2 mage, and he's solving everything this quickly? That's just impossible, unless he thinks like a high-ranking mage and is already familiar with advanced theoretical concepts. Seriously, he's on the last page. Maybe he's just frustrated and stalling. Yes, he must be totally stumped. These problems are on a completely different level of difficulty than anything he's ever seen. At that exact moment, our protagonist thought, this is my spell. Apparently, some of my old books are still floating around. How else could this be here? Then he looked at the elder, handed over the test, and declared that he was done. Schwinn gave him a deadpan look and said, good work. He wondered if the kid had even bothered to answer the last question without attempting the calculations. What a shame. He started flipping through the pages and thought, I wanted to see how he'd tackle the problems waiting in my research, but it looks like he just gave up because the questions got tough. His expectations were definitely high because of Elder Maxon's glowing recommendation. But the very next second, he was shocked to see that so far, everything was perfect. You'd have to be at least an academy professor to pull this off, and he was just a level 2 mage. Just how insane was his magical talent? He frowned, then looking up at the protagonist, he asked if he really thought he'd answered the last question correctly. The MC asked with a surprised look, excuse me? Of course. He asked which of the 4 mana stat spells he had written down. He answered, all of them. Did you use dynamic stats, or was that the wrong approach? Judging by the ROM formula's design, specific mana values were causing computational glitches. So, he cracked the problem by implementing dynamic values that adjust based on the ongoing processes. The elder's hands trembled as he asked, Oscar, can he use these values to run trial tests on the spell right now? A moment later, he cast the spell himself, and exclaimed in astonishment, how? How is this even possible? He grabbed the protagonist's hands and yelled, assistant? Forget that. He declared he would list him as a co-author on this thesis. He was incredibly grateful to him. The protagonist, taken aback, asked, excuse me, what was that? He thought to himself, this definitely wasn't part of the plan, was it? Then he inquired, is this the spell you were researching? The elder replied, precisely. It was the final piece of my research, a spell developed by the previous Tower Master, Oscar Sage, Ouroboros. The MC wondered why anyone would even bother with this. The spell only needed a single injection of mana to create a nearly infinite source of wind, directly defying the law of mana conservation. In theory, it was a perfect perpetual motion machine, which is why it was named Ouroboros, a symbol of eternity and the endless cycle of energy. It might sound grand, but by his standards, the spell was a complete failure. Humanity had already conquered the land and the sea, but had yet to claim the final frontier, the sky. Conquering the skies was the entire purpose of the Blue Heaven project. During the war against the demons, they started developing an airship to gain a strategic advantage, and for this very purpose, he had created the Ouroboros spell to serve as its engine. While the spell was theoretically near perfect, in practice, it just didn't generate enough power to get the airship off the ground. He figured there had to be plenty of other spells that would work better. But if you weren't specifically trying to power an airship, it definitely wasn't worth pouring 7 years of research into. Just then, the elder exclaimed, I have to tell Shasha right away. The foundation for our delivery service is finally in place. She's going to be so happy. The protagonist blurted out an apology in his shock. Wait, what? His little apprentice, the Tower Master, started a delivery service just for this magic? The elder confirmed it. The protagonist thought, that's just like Shasha, so dedicated to her teacher's dream. But still, you can't just make someone work on a project like this without a clear plan for the results. Then Schwinn declared that he and the Tower Master had just fulfilled a long-held dream, that they had finally taken a step onto the path to the heavens, and that this was their first real step forward in 7 years. The protagonist asked if he was trying to resurrect the failed project from the past. Schwinn confirmed it. Ouroboros would be the engine. He pressed, but it's impossible to power an airship using only the wind energy from this spell, right? Schwinn replied, with this spell alone, a standard airship would never get off the ground. The protagonist clarified, so with just this one spell, it's a no-go? Schwinn replied, however, a great deal has changed in the last 23 years. The protagonist asked, changed how? Schwinn replied, because now, we have this. He then revealed a device, and the MC immediately thought, technomagic. That's right, Schwinn confirmed. The Blue Skies project, which created this spell, was originally led by Oscar Sage, but the Yellow Tower was also involved, and they ended up taking some of the research with them, and used it to develop the foundations of technomagic. By capitalizing on that stolen research, the Yellow Tower made a remarkable leap forward in their progress after the war. The protagonist mused that he should have been the one to establish the foundations of technomagic. If he had, the White Tower would have received all that funding. Schwinn went on to explain that their plan was to boost Ouroboros' output using technomagic, and then use that amplified energy to power the airship. That was the main goal of his research. He planned to use a battery as the key component. Imagine, he said, if we fed the battery with Ouroboros' wind currents, and then used that stored power to continuously amplify the mana, it would become the ship's powerful heart, supplying it with a limitless source of energy. The protagonist asked, does the Yellow Tower know about this research? Schwinn replied, of course not. They think the whole idea of an airship is absurd. They're currently focused on a completely different mode of transport, an iron carriage that can travel endlessly on the ground. They're calling this invention a train. The MC thought to himself, a train? Of course, he knew exactly what that was, and he knew for a fact that the head of the Yellow Tower was not the type to cling to a failed project. These trains would undoubtedly usher in a new era for humanity. However, as revolutionary as they weren't about to surprise him, the world as much as the airship. He then commented, so, he started a delivery service, even at a loss, just to monopolize the air routes later on. Schwein replied, exactly. Right now, everything is moved exclusively by carts and ships. People think trains will be the next big thing. But once airships are on the scene, even trains will be instantly outdated. opening up brand new pathways in the sky. To get things started, he and the Tower Masters made it their goal to restore the Oruro spell and unveil it to the world at the White Night Festival. Thanks to the protagonist, they could finally achieve their most cherished dream. Schwein thanked him from the bottom of his heart, and the protagonist lowered his eyes, thinking about the dream he had given up on, believing it was impossible. His students hadn't forgotten it. In that case, it was his duty as their teacher to pave the way for them. He then extended his hand, proposing, "Since you're so determined, why not take it a step further and reveal the actual airship prototype at the White Night Festival?" Schwein stared at him in astonishment as the MC asked, "How about that for a goal?" He turned back, admitting the protagonist had a point. Seeing the real thing would make a much stronger impression than some vague concept, wouldn't it? Schwein agreed, "Of course. That makes perfect sense." He then grabbed some notes, saying, "In that case, let me share these with you." He handed them to the protagonist, telling him to give them a quick look. The protagonist took the papers and asked, "What are these?" As he began reading, he thought to himself that he'd never seen formulas like these before. It was all related to the production of technological batteries. He then turned and asked if he could sit down to examine them more closely. "By all means," Schwein replied. The protagonist dove back into the notes, wondering, were these formulas derived from the Oruro spell? It was incredibly thorough work, accounting for a vast number of conditions. After a while, Schwein asked, "Now that you've had a look, what do you think?" The protagonist smiled. "The calculations are brilliant. We can start development immediately, right?" Schwein said he was glad to hear it, as that was exactly the plan. "But before we start," he added, "there's something I need to tell you." The protagonist asked what it was, assuring him that if it was about confidentiality, his lips were sealed. Schwein clarified that it wasn't about that. He needed to apologize first. The MC was confused, wondering why an apology was needed for simply restoring a lost magic spell. "I need to apologize for dragging you into something extremely dangerous," Schwein said, closing his eyes. He added that as soon as they revealed their work, the Yellow Tower would pull out all the stops to shut them down, even if it meant getting their own hands dirty. The protagonist sighed, thinking he'd expected something far more serious. He said it was nothing to worry about, but Schwein looked at him, saying, "You seem to be taking this too lightly." He spread his arms wide. "Look, during the day, they'll hit us with a ton of bogus lawsuits, and at night, they'll probably send people to try and take us both out." Schwein asked if that bothered him in the slightest. The protagonist said no. If he lived his life in fear of the Yellow Tower, he'd just get tangled up in excuses and never accomplish anything. That was a far more terrifying outcome to him. Hiding in fear meant never escaping their current reality, leaving them as nothing but empty shells. Their White Tower had already lost its power, surrendering the potion market and military contracts to the Red Tower. They even had to walk on eggshells around the Yellow Tower just for researching magical theory. He believed this project would be the very thing that would let them finally get back on their feet. Just thinking about it gave him the confidence to face any threat that came their way. Hearing this, Schwein laughed, admitting he felt a bit awkward. "It's like you stole all my cool lines," he joked. The protagonist shot back that Schwein was cool without even trying. "How did I never realize how interesting you were before?" Schwein asked. He held out his hand and said, "From now on, I'm counting on you." The protagonist smiled and shook his hand. On day 1, Schwein, sitting on the floor while focusing on a spell, asked, "Hey, won't using the Weiler equation ultimately weaken the spell's effectiveness?" The protagonist, sitting beside him, replied thoughtfully, "You're right, but if we take it out, the stability of the technomagic interaction process will take a major hit. Since their goal is to get the airship flying, maybe they should sacrifice a bit of power to prioritize stability." He noted that was a great point, so they'd stick with that plan. Day 4. Schwein, looking over the notes, mentioned that tweaking an already excellent spell is even tougher. One careless adjustment, and errors start showing up everywhere. The MC, sitting beside him, thought Schwein was doing a fantastic job. After a bit, Schwein said it was pretty stable now, but if they wanted to be even more certain, it might be better to move the entire structure over to a parallel one, even though it would be more difficult. The protagonist agreed he was right. Since he'd still need to integrate the new calculations for the mages anyway, there was no point in clinging to the old sequential structure. Schwein replied, "Fine, then let's try that." Then the MC stood up, looked at the elder, and said, "Elder, you've already missed both breakfast and lunch. Should I bring you something to eat?" Schwein looked surprised, then told him to just grab some coffee in that case. The very next second, the lights in the room went out. He turned and asked, "Did the power go out again?" The protagonist added, "The blackouts have been happening a lot lately. We might as well take a break while we have the chance. I'll bring you back some coffee and a triple espresso." Day 6. Schwein walked up to the spell formation, stared at it, and said he'd been thinking about something for the past couple of days. "Would I have been able to finish this research if I hadn't met you?" The protagonist replied, "Of course you would have." Schwein thanked him for saying that. The protagonist thought he really meant it. Then the elder added, "Frankly, I didn't believe we'd progress enough to show off the airship itself, but I hadn't expected us to perfect the spells so quickly, and now it's time to really set our sights on it." He thanked the MC again from the bottom of his heart. The protagonist said, "Elder." The lights went out again the next second, and the MC smiled, adding, "This mana station has no sense of tact at all." The elder smiled and said, "Oh well, but our magic shines even brighter in the dark, so things aren't so bad." At that moment, an announcement came over the broadcast system. "Mage Oscar, please, report to the Deputy Tower Head's office immediately." The MC was surprised. The elder told him to go ahead. Schwein turned around and added, "Now it's my turn to show you something impressive." I will absolutely complete the development of the battery that will interface with Ouroboros, no matter what, so you shouldn't worry. A little later, the deputy tower head looked at the protagonist and said, I'm sure you've noticed that the power outages have been increasing lately, right? The protagonist confirmed it, saying it felt like they were happening every 2 days. The deputy head said the mana supply was being interrupted, so he figured the mana station needed cleaning. The protagonist asked, You mean cleaning out the slime, right? I'll handle it. Hamill smiled and thanked him. We've been short-handed lately, and no one's been able to clean up. There must be quite a bit of slime built up in the station area. The MC said if he cleaned it, the outages should stop, and asked when he should start. Hamill replied, Tomorrow at 9 o'clock. He was told to meet Miss Veronica at the tower entrance. The protagonist asked in surprise, Veronica? He thought to himself that a 4th-level mage seemed like overkill for this job. Hamill laughed and said that newbies are supposed to work with an experienced partner, and besides, Miss Veronica had seemed troubled lately. Wouldn't it be good if you two could somehow inspire each other? After that, the protagonist bowed and said, Understood. The deputy tower chief chuckled and said, In that case, I'll be relying on you. The protagonist thought, so the slime was just an excuse. The deputy head just wanted him to talk to Veronica. He looked so naive, but in reality, he was surprisingly clever. A short while later, Veronica looked away, crossed her arms, and asked what took him so long. The MC replied, Good morning. To you too, Veronica. He walked up to the open carriage door and asked, But I'm 5 minutes early, aren't I? She told him to just shut up and get in already. The carriage started moving. A few moments later, as they were on their way, Veronica said, Hey. The protagonist looked at her, surprised, and she told him to let her warn him that they weren't in the lecture hall today. He replied, Yeah, we're heading to the mana station. She snapped back, No, and then clarified, What I mean is, the leader of this mission. He might know a little more about Monther than she does, but she has way more field experience than him. He asked, So, you're basically telling me to drop the Professor Act when we're not in a classroom? She shot back, Exactly. He nodded thoughtfully, saying that he understood. After an awkward pause, he commented, You look exhausted. Didn't sleep well? She retorted that if he was smart enough to notice, he should be smart enough to shut up. She desperately needed some rest. He pressed, What's wrong? Is something on your mind? She snapped back indignantly that she'd just told him a second ago that this wasn't his lecture hall. He just smiled and said, I'm just curious. Maybe I can help. If you have an opportunity to get something off your chest, it's worth taking. Her gaze shifted toward him. Veronica Fricks, a sorceress with exceptional talent, a fact young Oscar had frequently mentioned in his notes. He'd always been intrigued by this talent that Oscar had stressed over and over. He couldn't just let a golden opportunity like this pass him by, so he smiled and asked, So, what is it? Don't you think you'd feel better if you just talked it out? She stared at him in silence, thinking to herself, Well, funny he should ask, since it's his fault I've been sleeping so poorly. I want to master a wind as forceful as Elder Maxim's, but I can't even come close to imitating it. No wonder I was so frustrated I wouldn't sleep and just kept training instead. So, this isn't me asking for advice, it's me getting fair compensation for the sleep he cost me. She finally asked, What was that you just said? Thinking she'd finally caved, he said thoughtfully, You've been making amazing progress, but you've hit a plateau recently. It's from that last lecture on the nature of mana, isn't it? She admitted, Yeah, I want my wind to be just like Elder Maxim's, but no matter how hard I practice, I can't seem to give it that same forceful quality. He replied, That makes sense. A wind like that just doesn't suit you. She scoffed. You only say that because you don't know me. I've always wanted my wind to be powerful, and I've trained my whole life with that goal in mind. He countered, Maybe so, but sometimes, an outside perspective is more telling. For example, what kind of wind do you think suits me? She answered without hesitation, arrogant, and downright infuriating. He laughed, saying that couldn't be further from the truth. His wind was known for being very cozy and warm. She looked stunned. Known? She'd certainly never heard it described that way. He mused that it was a reputation from a long time ago, then added that he found it strange as well, since he'd never considered himself particularly warm-hearted. Veronica, you want to command a powerful, fierce wind, correct? She confirmed that was right. He continued, Well, the nature of your mana doesn't care about what you want. It's all about discovering what truly suits you. She repeated, What truly suits me? Lowering her gaze, she paused before saying, But by that logic, my wind should be infuriating, not cozy. He just chuckled and replied, Maybe so. A short while later, the coachman announced, We've arrived, mages. At the entrance of the monastery station, Oscar gave his whole body a good stretch, then looked up and his eyes widened. It was obvious why the power kept failing, seeing that the station was completely overrun. Without a moment's hesitation, Veronica started blasting the slimes with a wind press. The protagonist watched in awe, realizing he was starting to see why the younger Oscar held her in such high regard. An acceleration-type mage who could cast spells that rapidly, that combination was truly formidable. While he was lost in thought, she had already unleashed the wind press multiple times. He thought to himself, her activation speed is incredible. Even 5th-level mages need to concentrate for at least 7 seconds. Perhaps she could be molded into a spellcaster on par with Majiro Wilson. After all, Majiro's rapid-fire spell bombardment was famous for keeping even high-level demons at bay. If he could shape Veronica into that kind of talent. Just then, she whirled around and snapped, Hey, am I supposed to do all the work while you just stand there and watch? He stepped forward, saying he got the message. She blasted another slime and pointed out that a whole cluster of those disgusting things was gathered by one entrance, just so he knew. He snapped his fingers, a thoughtful look on his face. Just at the entrance, he took a few steps forward for a better look. Veronica, seeing him move, yelled, "Oscar, forget about what's inside for now. We have to take care of these things out here first." He called back, "Doesn't that seem strange to you?" She yelled, "What?" He simply told her to watch where the slimes were going. Everyone was heading for the exit, clearly trying to get as far away from the heart of the monastery station as they could. "It's talking," she said. "You mean the slime is intelligent? They just ooze wherever they feel like it." He shot back that it was their lack of intelligence that made them rely purely on instinct, and the strongest instinct of all is survival. She put her hand on his waist, asking what was up. He figured some terrifying monster must have moved in. "It's behind this hall," he said. "We'll find out soon enough." He pointed at a slime, blasted it, and told her they needed to pick up the pace. She kept on attacking the slimes. She shot back that this wasn't a lecture, and he shouldn't be bossing her around. After pushing deeper into the station for a while, the mages finally came to a halt. They were standing near a massive cocoon. Veronica asked in shock, "What in the world is that?" The MC answered, "It's a white silkworm cocoon, a special type, also called a celestial silkworm. Unlike normal silkworms that eat mulberry leaves, this kind feeds on mana. That's almost certainly why it showed up here. There's a massive accumulation of mana right here." Veronica questioned, "So it's a butterfly? But the thing hasn't hatched yet, right?" He corrected her, "Not exactly. The truth is, it already has. To be more specific, it's in the middle of its metamorphosis right now." She realized, so this was the cause of the mana outages, not the slimes. "All we have to do is take care of it, and the problem's solved." He replied, "Well, I've got two pieces of news for you, one good, one bad." She demanded, "Good news first." He began, "The good news is, while it's in its chrysalis state, the white silkworm isn't much of a threat. If we call Elder Maxim, this whole thing will be over in 5 seconds. She scoffed, "So it's no big deal then. You just scared me for nothing. So, what's the bad news?" He began shrugging off his cloak as he added, "The bad news is that a newborn white silkworm butterfly is ravenously hungry, and it will devour every living thing in the vicinity." She said, "So what? We just need to call the elder before that happens." He cut her off, "I'm not finished. Yet." Suddenly, Veronica flinched. "Hey, what was that noise?" The protagonist folded his cape neatly and said, "Judging by the way the slime is pouring out, so uncontrollably, the metamorphosis is almost complete. And that sound you heard? That was the sound of the cocoon's threads tearing from the inside. Get ready for a fight." She yelled, completely outraged, "Damn it, what the hell is that huge thing? Silkworms can't fly, can they?" He replied calmly, "Yeah, normally they can't. However, this one flies just fine." Just then, a gigantic butterfly emerged before them. Veronica shrieked in terror. "We have to run," the protagonist simply said. "No." She squeezed her eyes shut and screamed, "What? Why not?" He explained, "If we run, it'll just fly to the nearest town and start devouring everyone there. We have to stop it, right here, right now, to keep that from happening." She glanced at the monster, then at him, and held out a protective hand. "All right, you stay behind me." He gave her a surprised look, wondering if she was actually trying to protect him, a 4th-level mage against that thing. He then crossed his arms in front of his chest, and cast a message spell, aiming it outwards. He thought to himself, "Let's just hope our coachman didn't leave and is still waiting. That way, he'll get my message and call for reinforcements." Just then, Veronica conjured a massive magic circle above her head and yelled, "All right, stop looking down. On me. It's getting on my nerves." She unleashed a wind press, aiming it straight at the insect, followed by a wind palm and a jet accelerator. She screamed, "All right, here I go." The very next second, the MC yanked her back by the hood. She shouted indignantly, "Hey, what gives?" He just pointed forward and cast a simple breeze spell. Then he explained, "The white silkworm hides a transparent pollen that instantly corrodes anything it touches. You almost died just now. It looks like the silkworm intentionally gave you an opening to attack. It's way smarter and more cunning than you think." As the insect flew onward, Veronica asked in disbelief, "How did you even see that pollen? It's literally invisible." He replied that he had focused his mana into his eyes to analyze every single particle floating in the air. She yelled, "What kind of insane nonsense is that?" He turned to her as she asked, "Are you telling me that's actually possible?" He replied simply, "Of course it is. The method is." But before he could finish, the butterfly let out a deafening screech. He immediately said, "I think we'd better put up a windshield first." An instant later, a powerful beam of energy shot towards them. The protagonist threw up a shield just in time and said, "I'll explain later." He got back to his feet, thinking, this is not good. After blocking just one attack, a staggering 70% of his mana had vanished. He couldn't possibly survive another blast with what little he had left. The only silver lining was that the celestial silkworm needed about 5 minutes to recharge for its next attack. He whipped around and said, "Veronica, we have to make a move in the next 5 minutes." She grunted, "My legs won't move." He shot back, "What?" She glanced down at her injured leg and cursed, "Damn it, my legs. I can't move them." He realized, even though I blocked the main blast, it looks like some of the energy slipped through the cracks in my shield. Just go, she yelled at him. Get out of here first. Even injured, she could still buy him some time. I have to get out of here if I don't want to die like a dog. He thought, then immediately corrected himself. Liar. The very air around her was trembling, from her shaking. He gently placed a hand on her head. Startled, She looked up at him and asked, "What are you doing?" He replied calmly, "No need to tremble. I'm not leaving you. Here." "Who said I was scared?" She snapped back indignantly. "It's all right," he said reassuringly. "A mage from the White Tower never abandons a comrade." He then placed his hand on the ground and activated an acceleration spell. Asterisk. "I've got about a third of my mana left." Asterisk, he calculated. Asterisk. "I have to end this in one shot." Asterisk. Then, with a few powerful bounds, he launched himself forward. Veronica reached out, screaming, "No." The creature began to hum ominously again, and Veronica shrieked, "You're insane. What the hell are you thinking? I told you to run. If you die, you'll be the dumbass I have to listen to complain from beyond the grave. I won't let you rest in peace. I'll dig you up, just to bury you again." As she yelled, the protagonist activated his ability, closing the distance to the beast. Asterisk. "Good thing I brought this, just in case." Asterisk, he thought, leveling his weapon at it. He smirked and said, "Feeling relaxed? Say goodnight." With that, he pulled the trigger. The creature let out a piercing shriek as a powerful wave of energy erupted from his weapon. The protagonist grimaced, thinking, asterisk, "Just one shot and my shoulder is already dislocated, and I didn't even hit its head yet." Asterisk. Then, his eyes widened in shock as he looked forward. Asterisk. "Is its beam already recharged?" Asterisk. But in the next instant, the insect fired its beam straight up, blasting a hole clean through the ceiling. The protagonist realized with a shout, that thing was planning to escape from the very beginning. Asterisk. "I can't let it get away now." Asterisk, he thought desperately. But he was too low on mana to give chase. Just then, he spotted a strand of silk trailing behind the fleeing creature. In a split-second decision, he leaped forward and snatched the end of the thread, and the insect began to drag him up and away. He's lost his mind. Why would he grab that? Veronica screamed in horror. The silkworm ascended higher and higher, screeching, pulling the protagonist with it as he swung wildly from side to side. Asterisk. "I think I'm gonna puke." Asterisk, he thought, his stomach churning. Then the monster picked up speed, opening its terrifying maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. "You ugly bastard," he yelled. He aimed his weapon again and shouted, "Hey, Bugface, you know why people have two hands? So that if one isn't enough, they can strike again." He let go of the silk thread, brought his other hand to steady the weapon, and fired, scoring a direct hit right on its head. He declared, "And everyone only gets one of these heads, right? This victory is mine." The very next second, his strength gave out, and he started to plummet, yelling, "Veronica, I'm completely out of mana. You gotta catch me," she screamed back, chanting, "Air cushion, wind palm." Magical sigils formed in her hands as she yelled, "Oscar, the spell is ready." The protagonist landed safely on several large cushions of wind. As he was gently lowered to the ground, Veronica rushed over, shouting, "Hey, are you alive?" She leaned in close, about to say, "Don't tell me he's." Just as the protagonist's eyes snapped open, she shrieked in shock and instinctively slapped him across the face, yelling, "You scared the crap out of me." Just then, Maxim burst into the room, shouting, "Oscar, Veronica." Veronica turned and said, "Elder." The protagonist calmly stated, "Elder, I think I dislocated both my shoulders." Veronica shrieked in disbelief. "Both of them? Dislocated?" He added weakly, earning another smack from Veronica. "What's going on?" Maxim asked, completely lost. She just huffed, "I don't even know anymore." The next day, Veronica stood next to the protagonist's hospital bed and asked, "Did you see this?" She held up a newspaper. "They've already written about us. These reporters work faster than I thought." "So, how does it feel to be a hero?" she teased. He glanced over the article and shrugged. "I'm not sure. I used to like the idea, but not so much anymore." Leaning on her crutch, she asked, "So this wasn't about the money, then? You get what I mean, right?" He replied simply, "I'm just the kind of guy who looks out for his own people first." She smirked. "Well, I guess that means you're not as ambitious as everyone thinks." He shot back, "You can have all that ambition for yourself." Herself. Just then, Frank burst into the room yelling, "Oscar, are you all right?" The protagonist glanced over at him and asked, "Is he finished with his personal training?" Frank answered, "Yeah." The prisoner was released. He booked it over here the second he heard the news. The protagonist commented, "No wonder he looks like such a mess." "What's that supposed to mean?" Frank asked. The MC thought to himself. Frank's gaze had definitely gotten sharper. He figured Frank could now be considered a true fourth-level mage. He asked, "What exactly happened, and what's Veronica doing here?" She shot back indignantly that she'd already told him not to act so familiar with her. He asked, "Why not? We're friends." She yelled furiously, "That's a lie, not even close. Do you have any idea what a living hell you made my life at the academy by telling everyone that we knew each other?" He retorted, "Well, how was I supposed to know? You never said a word to me." She shouted, "Ugh, you're unbelievable." Then she pressed a hand to her forehead and sighed, "Just forget it. There's no point in hashing this out now." "Hey, Oscar," Frank cut in. "Yeah?" Her eyes snapped to him as she asked, "You wouldn't happen to be?" "Huh?" he asked, caught completely off guard. "What does that mean?" She pressed. "You seriously have no idea?" He shook his head no. And she scoffed. "Then never mind." At that moment, Maxim entered the room and said, "Veronica, Frank, so you're both here." Frank turned with a smile and said, "Elder, it's been a while." Maxim informed him that the deputy towerhead was calling for him. "Why's that?" Frank asked. He replied it was surely to see the results of his training, and for Veronica, to reward her for her quick feat. "Good," Frank said. Maxim then walked over to the protagonist and asked how he was feeling. "What happened to your shoulder?" He replied that he was fine. With that, the elder presented him with a box, saying, "In that case, I suppose I can give you this now." The protagonist took the box and asked, "What's this?" Maxim answered, "The core of a celestial silkworm, and by the way, we managed to get the silk from it, too." The MC asked, "Both of them? But the core from a spiritual creature like that, even a tiny one, had to be worth hundreds of thousands." Maxim explained that the deputy chief had insisted he deserved it, and that both he and Fidelina were in agreement. The protagonist asked, "What about Veronica?" Maxim replied that he'd already spoken to her. She said that since she hadn't really participated in the battle, it was only fair to give him the core. He replied, "In that case, I'll gratefully accept it." Maxim then asked if he planned on selling it. The protagonist thought for a second, then said he was going to consume it right now. He'd just undergone a metamorphosis, so there probably wasn't much mana left inside it. Besides, the celestial silkworm core possessed exceptional restorative properties. Maxim said he was eager to see the results. He added that he'd be watching closely. The MC thanked him and promptly popped the core into his mouth. A surge of energy coursed through his entire body. He calmly focused his thoughts. He closed his eyes, concentrating the newfound energy. Maxim, observing him intently, thought that the boy probably hadn't consumed any high-quality items besides that underground elixir, and yet look how smoothly he handled the mana purified from it. Apparently, a true genius really does excel at everything. Impressive. Just then, the protagonist opened his eyes, and Maxim decided to ask if he was back with them. He thanked the elder for waiting so late into the night. Maxim chuckled. "Well, you finally reached level 3. Congratulations." The MC rolled his shoulder and remarked that it felt amazing, even better than before. The elder laughed and said, "That's wonderful news. Now, you should get some rest. I'll be on my way." The protagonist thanked him and wished him a good night. After he left, he gazed out the window, thinking that he didn't feel like sleeping just yet. He thoughtfully reached for his weapon, and as he gripped it, he wondered if he should try to develop a spell that could help reduce its recoil. Meanwhile, over at the mana station, Harak Dryan stepped forward in alarm and demanded, "Who goes there? This area is off limits. We're still sweeping for any threats besides the celestial silkworm." Nebula Grime just chuckled and presented his business card, saying, "It's quite all right. I'm with the Royal Special Investigation Department." Harak took the card and read it, asking, "The Special Investigation Department? What brings a representative from such a high-profile department all the way out here?" Nebula replied that an order had come down to investigate the incident, as finding a celestial silkworm cocoon this close to a populated area is extremely rare. "I trust you'll cooperate?" They shook hands as Harak replied, "Well, yes, since the order came from the top royal family." He offered his thanks, then covered his eyes with one hand, announcing he would now begin to read the mana traces. He focused his mind and declared, "All right, let's see what we've got." Stepping forward, he announced, "1 second-level mage and 1 fourth-level mage." The report stated that 2 White Tower mages took down the monster, correct? He confirmed that was the case. They were originally here to clear out slime, but they stumbled upon this instead. Nebula continued walking and remarked, "Wow, this is impressive." So, this is where the battle went down. Streams of multicolored mana were zipping in every direction. Harak had been telling the truth. The celestial silkworm had actually transformed right here. He thought to himself, "Yep, that massive clump of concentrated mana has to be the celestial silkworm's trail. One of the White Tower mages must have engaged it." The speed was decent, but their nerves were clearly shot. The trace showed she soon came down and was injured. Looks like in the leg. So, who was the one that actually defeated the silkworm? Who the hell was this person? There wasn't even a single trace left, just a blurry trajectory. All that intense action, and they didn't even leave a mark. This was pretty much the cleanest battle scene he'd ever witnessed. Just how skilled was this person? Then, walking a bit further, he spotted a shell, casing on the ground. Picking it up, he wondered if the mage had used a weapon, a firearm, to be specific, and a highly specialized one at that. The mana trail stopped right there. Did they seriously chase the celestial silkworm when it took off into the sky? This 4th-level mage was unbelievably bold and gutsy. After that, Nebula turned and asked for the 4th-level mage's name. Harak answered, "Veronica Fricks." He repeated, "Veronica Fricks. Impressive. To think she was the one who'd taken down the celestial silkworm almost single-handedly. She's got a bright future ahead of her." Harak then corrected him, asking, "My apologies, but what was that?" It turns out Nebula had it wrong. The celestial silkworm was actually defeated by a 2nd-level mage, a guy by the name of Oscar. Nebula stared at him, completely bewildered, and thought, a 2nd-level mage could leave behind so few traces? That's impossible. Oscar. For some reason, that name rings a bell, doesn't it? The vaccine. Then, he asked, "Isn't Oscar the one who developed the cure for the Kadana flu?" Harak replied, "Yes, that's him. He's got a rotten personality, but you can't deny his skills." Nebula glanced at the shell casing in his hand and thought, no wonder this looked familiar. This is from Jack the Gunslinger's personal weapon, Trinity. But for a 2nd-level mage to be using this insane gun, it'd be tough to handle that kind of recoil with just mana. He'd have to be incredibly built. Then he said that he would like to know more about this Oscar, if Harak wouldn't mind sharing. What kind of guy is he? Meanwhile, our MC was reading a book, wondering why the hell all the books were in such awful shape. He was in the White Tower's library, trying to sort through the books on the shelves. He thought, this looks more like some rundown bookstore on the edge of town than a proper archive in a mage's tower. The The White Tower Library was supposed to be a place that preserved hundreds of years of magical history, filled with priceless tomes, every single one, a legend in its own right. At least, that's how it was back in his day. But now, it's more like a middle school library. As the old saying goes, even the most beautiful flower is gone in 10 days. Who could have guessed that the knowledge filling the library would just vanish into thin air one day, especially since he never imagined he himself would be the reason why. But he's sure of one thing. Facing the first priest all those years ago, he'd copied every single book in this library, putting his absolute trust in them. Edna Solace. Where did she go? She promised she'd carry out her duty. Even if he died, she wouldn't just vanish for 20 years, unless something major happened. No, this isn't on her. He just has to find her himself. It's time to bring back the advanced spells that will let their mages break past their limits, and he needs to reinforce his own foundation as quickly as possible. The money problems are mostly sorted out, and the potions department won't be needing him for a while. After that, he spotted the librarian and offered an apology. He asked if she was the librarian in charge here. She placed a book back on the shelf, turned to him, and confirmed that she was. He then asked if she could help him find any texts on dragons from the past 20 years. She replied, "Of course, come right this way, I'll show you everything we have." He thanked her, and as he walked toward her, he thought, that's a good sign. Apparently, even with all the budget problems, the administration still didn't skimp on acquiring new knowledge. Then the librarian began gathering books, announcing, "These 3 should do." Our hero thought, hold on, she just grabbed another one. Why do these all look like kids' fairy tales? With a smile, she showed him one of the covers and said, "This one is particularly fascinating, a real gem, you could say." He thought to himself, "A gem, really?" The librarian elaborated, "It's all about Oscar Sage. After the high priest cast that horrifying spell that sent the dragons running, Oscar was the only one who stood his ground to face him. Since it's based on a true story, it's a lot more compelling than the others." He then asked, "Do you have any books about real dragons, and not just the kind you find in fairy tales?" She shook her head, explaining they didn't carry books like that, and suggested his best bet would be the library in the capital. He thought sarcastically, "Sure, because you can find a book like that on every street corner around here." Then, looking at the book in her hands, she added, "Oh, but I did hear there was a dragon who fought alongside humanity until the very end." The protagonist quickly asked, "You don't mean Edna, do you?" She nodded. "That's the one. She was Oscar's friend, wasn't she? But supposedly, she eventually left to follow her kind, just like the rest." Our hero knew that was a lie. Even if the heavens themselves had split open, she never would have abandoned them. She was the only one in the Chronicles of the Enlightened documented as being disillusioned with her own people. With a sigh, he realized that finding Edna would require a whole new approach. The very next day, a cheerful Fidelina clapped her hands together. She announced they had finally finished distributing the funds for their mages' requests for activities outside the tower. Maxon, sitting nearby, commented, "How wonderful. And to think, just a short while ago, they were discussing selling off equipment just to stay afloat." They exchanged a laugh, but at that moment, the deputy tower leader, sitting opposite them, chimed in that they needed to prepare better, so that issue would never come up again. He then asked, "How are our young mages holding up these days?" Maxim replied that they were still getting poached with outside offers, but everyone was staying loyal. He mentioned wanting to reward the young mages for their commitment to the White Tower, but that this situation would persist until they managed to recover the high-level spells. He sighed, "I really should have studied harder back in my youth." Fidelina reached out a comforting hand, telling him not to be so hard on himself. "Besides," she said, "there's a limit to how many high-level spells one person can learn." Maxim added that only the Tower Master has access to the advanced spells they currently possess. She then said, "The problem is, when Lady Shasha became the Tower Master, we only had 6. At this, the Deputy Tower Master took a sip of his drink and stated that just 20 years ago, they possessed 64 types of high-level magic, with each one considered a perfect masterpiece. He then asked, "Captain Chester has no plans of returning, does he?" Maxim answered definitively, "Not a chance. He says he won't come back until he completes his last mission." Hommel pointed out that if Chester returned, they'd regain access to a vast number of high-level spells. But since they can't fix that problem right now, he proposed they tackle it gradually. "All right, what's next on the agenda?" Fidelina spoke up, mentioning recent talk of a mage killer operating in the northern region. "Perhaps we should impose a curfew after 10 p.m. for a while." Maxim suddenly blurted out, "What?" She looked at him, surprised. "What's wrong?" He replied that Oscar had mentioned he was going to Baron and had already left. She shot up, exclaiming, "What? You need to tell him to come back immediately." He replied that he left first thing this morning, so he was probably already far from Siren. Hamel then yelled for them to contact their branch in Baron at once. They needed to tell them to send Oscar back the second they locate him. No matter how capable he is, he's only reached the 3rd level. He's still a mage that needs to be protected. Meanwhile, our main character stepped out of his transport, looked around at the dazzling cityscape, and said, "Wow, the lights are shining from every direction." He had arrived in the independent city of Baron. As he walked on, he mused that, just 30 years ago, this area was nothing but factory chimneys. Apparently, the casino owners bought up all the land and suddenly turned it into this lavish spectacle. "Okay, am I even going the right way?" he wondered. Just then, Killian called out to him. The protagonist turned around, surprised, as the man said he had been waiting for him. "Oscar?" our protagonist asked in surprise. He confirmed it, adding that someone wanted to see him. Our hero immediately thought, the The blue tower? It figured they were just waiting for an opportunity to get their revenge. He analyzed the man's mana, thinking, huh? He's about a level 4 mage. I've barely left Siren, and they've already sent someone after me, him. He asked what would happen if he refused, and the guy shot back that they'd just have to drag him away by force. The protagonist just sighed and said, so that's how you want to play it? Fine then. It looked like he had no other choice. He spotted Killian rushing in, legs swinging for a powerful kick, and instantly conjured a barrier to block it. Killian was thrown backward, shouting in disbelief. He blocked it? The protagonist retorted that it was his turn to see how he liked getting hit, but in his head, he was thinking, what the hell? His shield, reinforced for durability and impulse absorption, was shattered in one hit, even without any mana behind it. He knew if he lost focus for a second, it was game over. After that, he swung his leg, kicking a metal can right at his opponent's head, but the guy just ducked and sneered. What the hell? A tin can? The very next second, the tin can detonated behind him. The forward-moving blast wave sent Killian flying to the ground. Our hero then grabbed him by the collar, swung him around, and slammed him into the ground. After that, he jumped back, thinking to himself, did I really underestimate him? But just a second later, Killian got back up and said that he was strong. I guess I'll have to take this seriously, too. The protagonist shot back, stopped bluffing, but in the blink of an eye, his opponent was charging at him again. The protagonist thought, accelerate. No, it's a jet boost. When did he even cast that? Alright, I can still keep up with this speed, but at that very moment, Killian got even faster. He drove his leg forward, smashing it into the protagonist's chest and sending him careening into a nearby wall, cracking it on impact. He collapsed to the ground, and his opponent walked over, asking, you're still awake? A hit of that level should have knocked you out. Our hero, pushing himself to his feet, shot back. Yeah, well, it didn't even hurt. Killian thrust his hand forward, declaring his next blow would end it all. The protagonist put his own hand forward and told him to bring it. Even if his eyes couldn't keep up, he knew he'd never miss the movement of mana, a signature he'd already sensed once. He drove his fist forward and unleashed the Oscar style. Oscar style secret martial art, Chapter 1. The sound of waves. As Killian jumped up, he thought in complete surprise, the sound of the waves? And why is he swinging at empty air? Has he given up? Then he noticed the protagonist's fist was aimed right at him and then thought, what a shame. But a second later, he was shocked when a powerful force slammed into his chest, sending him flying backward into a wall, and then landing on a pile of trash cans. He coughed up a storm, and our hero approached, telling him not to move. You've probably ruptured some internal organs. Killian choked out. What kind of technique was that? He answered, resonance. I send a massive wave of air toward the target, matching its own resonance frequency and internal vibrations. Different objects will shake with much greater force when they vibrate at that same frequency. Once inside the body, that wave causes severe internal damage, kind of like hitting a bull through a mountain. Killian looked up at the protagonist and said he didn't understand. When did you get this strong? The protagonist walked closer and said, as if they'd done this before, we've fought several times. Killian asked, where? To which he replied, mostly at the White Tower's combat training ground. Killian asked him why he was suddenly talking about the White Tower. The protagonist thought, wait a second, he'd only said that to make sure about the name of the person looking for him. Killian answered, it's Hamel Grimwiz, the Vice Master of the White Tower. Our hero asked, surprised, the Vice Master of the Tower? Why? He replied that he'd been told a dangerous assassin, a so-called mage hunter, was active in the north, and his orders were for him to return. The protagonist shouted that he should have led with that. Killian just said that he did. Our hero yelled back, and what about how you were going to take me by force if I refused? He replied that the Vice Master's orders were to use force if words failed. Our hero grabbed his head and thought, who even talks like that? This guy seriously lacks even the most basic communication skills. Okay, wait a minute. This infuriating way he talks. Why does it feel so familiar? Then he asked what his name was. He replied, I am Killian Lockwood, a mountain warrior of the forest. The protagonist thought, a warrior of the forest? Lockwood? No way. He then asked if he happened to know a man named Rayan Lockwood. He replied, yeah, that's my proud father. He was an ally of the great sage Oscar, you know. Rayan Lockwood, a level 8 White Tower mage from the Forest Tribe, and a martial artist. Not to mention his closest friend and comrade, the man known as the White Lion. Back when he first joined the White Tower, his social skills were practically non-existent, a lot like Killian is now. So, long story short, he just laid out his best friend's son. A little while later, our protagonist hauled Killian out of a pile of garbage, propped him against a wall, and casually commented, this looks bad. The protagonist agreed, stating that he was aware it was a huge problem. Killian groaned, asking if his organs were ruptured, to which the MC dryly replied, yeah, for a reason. So, what's the issue? Does it hurt? That much? Killian admitted it hurt, but claimed for a warrior of the forest, it was nothing. The real issue, he explained, was that he'd accepted a job he could no longer finish in his current condition. The MC offered an apology, but Killian waved it off, saying he wasn't looking for pity. Instead, he insisted, you're going to have to do it for me. Our protagonist just stared at him, asking if Killian wasn't the one who needed an escort right now. Killian explained that the penalty for canceling the contract was astronomical. If he backed out, he would become completely broke. A wave of guilt washed over the protagonist, who muttered, "Right. Can't have you ending up on the streets." Then he asked, "So what's the job?" Killian just pointed ahead, telling him to look. It was for the voice of heaven. He'd taken a job as her bodyguard. Later on, at the Grand Baron Hotel, the MC knocked on a suite door. A woman's voice asked who was there. The protagonist announced, "Killian Lockwood, from the White Tower." The door opened to reveal a woman who said, "Welcome. I'm Evelyn, Miss Marin's manager." Our protagonist returned the pleasantry, saying it was a pleasure to meet her. She then observed that he was a bit different in person than the rumors suggested. He replied, "It's probably the suit." As they stepped inside, another woman, Marin, called out, "Evelyn, who's the repairman?" Evelyn walked over to her and explained that this was the man who accepted the request. The woman turned, a polite smile on her face, and said, "Oh, hello. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Marin Maria." In return, the MC introduced himself under the assumed identity. A fourth-level mage from the White Tower, Killian Lockwood. Evelyn then came over, asking if she could offer them some tea. The protagonist declined, but Marin requested a glass of water. The singer then turned her attention to the MC, thanking him for taking the job on such short notice. She mentioned hearing that his mission success rate was over 80%, which made her think he'd be more selective with his clients. He just replied that he wasn't especially picky about his work. Internally, he recalled Killian's file on her, Marin Maria, a singer who had skyrocketed to stardom 3 years ago, all thanks to a unique vocal tone that supposedly puts listeners at ease. She's earned the titles Voice of, The Heavens and the Singing Saint. Marin then put a hand to her chest, saying she hoped she wasn't overstepping. The MC thought to himself, those were some pretty fancy nicknames to get in just 3 years, though he had to admit her voice was pleasant. She then asked him if he was a responsible person. He replied, "Of course." His mind quickly rationalized the answer. Well, he's supposed to be Raiden's son and a member of the Forest Warrior tribe. They're known for being fiercely loyal, so he must be. She beamed at his answer, saying, "That's wonderful. I think responsibility is the most attractive quality in a person." He simply said, "I see," while wondering, why is she asking these kinds of questions? Just then, Evelyn placed a tray on the table and said, "Marin, your water." Marin replied, "Ah, thank you." She then took a seat on the sofa next to the MC, and announced it was time to explain the mission details. Getting straight to the point, she said, "I need you to protect Marin from an assassination attempt." He calmly asked, "An assassination attempt?" Evelyn slid a letter across the table, explaining that they'd been receiving constant threats demanding the cancellation of her concert at the Baron Stadium. When they ignored the demands, the messages escalated to death threats. They believe an assassin has been hired. The protagonist placed his hand on the letter and asked, "Do you have any idea who's sending these?" She confirmed they did. Arao, a rival singer who debuted 2 years before Marin. Her picture is attached. The protagonist scanned the letter's contents before asking, "If the person blackmailing you is this well known, why can't you just take this to the press?" Evelyn sighed, saying it would be nice if the problem were that simple. She then asked if he'd heard about the mayor of Baron dying in his own home a few months back. The MC confirmed he'd seen it in the papers. Evelyn then revealed, Arao is the only daughter of a powerful candidate for that now vacant position. New mayor. The protagonist questioned, "What's that supposed to mean?" She let out a sigh and explained, "It probably means all the news outlets have been bought off, because they're completely ignoring all our inquiries, and because of their silence, we can't get the full story out there, which is the same reason we can't get any protection from the city government." The protagonist agreed. Yeah, that tracks. He figured a family with that much power and reach in a major city wouldn't be handling this kind of stuff personally. But what could someone that powerful possibly want that would make them stoop to this level? He then turned to Marin and asked what Ara stood to gain by getting her concert cancelled. If that's their play, wouldn't she be the perfect scapegoat? She answered, "That's exactly it, and it's all because her concert is supposed to be held at Baron Stadium." The protagonist repeated, "Baron Stadium?" She nodded in confirmation. He then asked, "Is performing there really that big of a deal?" She shot back, "Of course, it is. We're talking about a crowd of 100,000 people." Evelyn chimed in, adding that anyone who plays at Baron Stadium earns the honor of performing for the Emperor himself during the New Year's festival. And to even get the chance to perform at the stadium, artists have to pass a grueling series of evaluations first. Every year, only a handful of artists are chosen to step onto that prestigious stage. It's the biggest break a singer from Baron can get, and this concert is the most important turning point in Marin's entire life. With everything clicking into place, our hero asked, "So, how many other people did you hire for this job?" Marin looked apologetic and asked, "What do you mean?" He clarified that he needed to know to formulate a strategy. She answered, "It's just you, Killian." He gave her a confused look, and she went on. She tried to contact the mercenary guild, but nobody was brave enough to take the job. The protagonist took a sip of water, thinking, someone with this much influence would hire at least a level 4 assassin, and there's no telling how many of them there are. I'd have to protect not just the client, but an audience of 100,000 people, and I'm supposed to handle a job of this magnitude all by myself? He set his mug down and asked what the penalty was for backing out of the contract. Marin echoed, "A penalty?" He simply replied, "Yes." He was basically telling them to forget the request was ever made. He thought to himself that even for him, these terms were insane. It would be better to just cancel the concert, for the client's own safety and peace of mind. But in the next instant, Marin suddenly snapped, "Listen here, you idiot." It was like a switch flipped. He was telling her to cancel the concert, the one thing she had been working toward for 3 entire years. The protagonist called her name, stunned, but she just screamed, "You came here because you wanted $1 million." You thought this job was worth that much, and now you're backing out? No wonder you said you were going broke. She grabbed her hair in frustration and yelled. She fumed, thinking he'd claimed to be a professional. He tried to calm her, Marin, but she was beyond reason. She ripped off her wig and screamed at him to get lost. And honestly, who could blame her for being upset? He stared in shock as he thought, wait a minute, is she a mermaid? Like, the mythical race from old fairy tales? They were known for a few key traits. They're beautiful, have enchanting voices, and, instead of legs, they have fishtails. But unlike the stories, real mermaids can actually transform their tails into legs at will. Of course, the transformation has a time limit, and they need a recovery period back in their natural form. Marin slammed her hand on the sofa right next to his head and yelled, so what if I'm a mermaid? Is this the first time you've ever seen one? He calmly replied that it wasn't. He thought, this is definitely my first time meeting one this far inland though. Suddenly, the random bathtub in the middle of the room made perfect sense. He then commented, I was under the impression that mermaids risk dying from homesickness if they spend too long away from the ocean. Evelyn explained that Marin is only half mermaid, which is why she can hold her human form for longer and doesn't suffer from the same longing for the sea. The protagonist asked if by half, she meant half human. She confirmed his suspicion. Apparently, mermaids are so beautiful that they often end up in arranged marriages with other races. The big problem is that living so far from the ocean after getting married causes many to suffer from a literal, fatal homesickness, which leads to long-term illness and eventually death. After that, their mixed-blood children are often left to fend for themselves. After all, half-breeds aren't truly welcome on land or in the sea. The reason Marin started her singing career at such a young age was probably because, just then, she screamed, damn it, what are you staring at? My parents married for love, and they're both alive. He shut his eyes, thinking, all right, that's a relief. He then said, fine, whatever. A no is a no. Even if I took the job, there was a high probability she'd be taken out, and her audience could get caught in the crossfire. She insisted there was no need to worry about the audience, as the seats were outfitted with a protective artifact, and even with her life on the line, she would never back down from the concert. She was prepared for the worst. Evelyn cried out her name in protest, and Marin spun around and shouted back. She explained this was the one goal she'd been working toward for the past 3 years. Even when she faced discrimination and had no one in her corner, she just gritted her teeth, played the fool, and laughed it all off. The protagonist looked at her, asking why she was getting so worked up. Her eyes fell as she explained that 4 years ago, her father was diagnosed with ocean nostalgia. The doctors gave him 5 years to live, and now he only had 1 year left. Although everyone knew the disease was incurable, a legendary elixir was rumored to be the only cure, and she had to get her hands on it this year. That was why she couldn't back out of the Barron Stadium performance. Evelyn chimed in, adding that a killer performance at this concert would land her a gig singing for the Emperor, where she could be gifted a single drop of the elixir. The protagonist simply replied, I get it now. The elixir was the key to curing her father's ocean nostalgia. This had been her plan for 4 years. Clenching her fist, she added that singing was the only thing she was good at, making this her one and only shot. The protagonist thought, so this is how much parents can mean to someone. Having never had parents, he wasn't one to judge. How could a street rat like him possibly understand? But then he lowered his gaze and considered, if her father was like my own mentor, then the desperate need to do everything possible to save him. That's a feeling I understand better than anyone. With that, he got to his feet and asked if they could head to the stadium right away. Evelyn confirmed they could, her interest piqued. The protagonist added, in that case, let's get a move on. We've got a few things to run through there, Marin. He also needed to personally verify the security of the venue. If the safety measures were up to his standards, she could perform without a problem, even with her life on the line. Marin asked, surprised, what do you mean? He told her he was giving her a trial run and that they should head to the rehearsal. Meanwhile, over at Era's place, she was holding a glass of wine, wondering aloud if Marin had cancelled the concert yet. She knew the girl was headstrong, but she never imagined she'd be times stubborn. Her manager, sitting on the couch behind her, folded her arms and added, tell me about it. Does she honestly think she won't get taken out? Ara replied that, wasn't it? She was just choosing to perform knowing full well she could die. How bold. Ara then mentioned she'd heard an interesting rumor that Marin was spotted leaving her hotel with some guy. She turned to her manager and asked, a man? Is she hiding a secret boyfriend? The manager replied that she doubted it, saying it was more like a bodyguard. Ara pointed out that she'd blacklisted Marin from hiring any mercenaries. So where did she dig this guy up? She asked. She needed to find out what he was made of. Her manager replied, understood. I'll send a couple of our best people to check him out. At that moment, the protagonist, the singer, and her manager were inspecting the stadium. At the Barron Stadium, the main character declared that the protective artifacts lining the auditorium's perimeter were flawless. He then said, I'll take the job. He took a few more steps and said, now, let's iron out the details of the contract. Marin immediately cheered, hooray. Evelyn replied, of course, the contract is all drawn up. Then Marin asked, wait, was that the whole rehearsal? Don't I need to do anything else? The protagonist replied that this was enough. This is more than enough for me to work with. She clasped her hands to her cheeks, delighted, and said, so I can just enjoy my free time now? He glanced at her, thinking, man, in public, she really plays the part of an angel. She beamed and thanked him, but he just turned away and said, hey, I'm just doing my job. As he spoke, he sensed a couple of unwelcome presences. 2 of them, he thought. With a quick snap of his fingers, he unleashed wind bullets and took them, both out in an instant. He turned back to the girls, thinking, no need to get these two worked up over nothing. A short time later, Ara, adjusting the towel on her head, asked in disbelief, they're gone? Her subordinate confirmed, yes, both of them. Ara mused that Marin had apparently hired a pretty competent bodyguard. How in the world? How did they die? She asked. The mercenary office's report said there were no signs of a struggle. Both bodies were found with holes clean through their heads. Word was that this bodyguard was unbelievably skilled, she mused. So that's the story. She ordered her subordinate to get the car ready. Her assistant looked surprised. Huh? But the rest of your schedule is empty today. Where are you going? She simply replied. To meet this bodyguard. Why? Her assistant asked. She just smiled and retorted. Why else? To hire him, of course. A short while later, inside a private dining room at the Grand Bon Hotel, Marin asked, so, what do you think? Pretty fancy place, huh? Bet you've never seen anything like this in your life, have you? Don't even worry about the bill. It's all on me. As he sat across from her, he thought to himself, this girl really drops all the formalities when she thinks no one's around. He then spoke up. You need to watch what you say in public places. Even this room is bugged. She asked in shock. Seriously? He nodded. I disabled it as soon as we came in, but you still need to be more careful when I'm not here. She leaned back in her chair and sighed. Whew, that was a close one. It was obvious she felt completely at ease with him. Mr. Killian, she snapped indignantly. What? It's not like that, he coolly replied. Changing the subject, Marin gestured to the food and asked, do you like it? It's mandu, a traditional dish from the Yan, the country. Yeah, it's been a long time, he confirmed. It's pretty tasty. He privately thought that even during the war, he'd grown sick of it because there was nothing else to eat. Then she asked, wait, you've had this before? I heard everyone from the White Tower was dirt poor. I guess that doesn't apply to everyone. He just stared at her for a moment before a knock came at the door. Come in, Marin called out. A man walked inside and bowed. She smiled at the newcomer and said, ah, manager, the food is as excellent as always. A new voice cut in. That's wonderful to hear. Please, eat as much as you like. I've already paid for everything. Marin asked, stunned. Isn't this a private room? The manager explained. Miss Ara insisted on saying hello. Recognizing her as Marin Sr., he bowed and said, please enjoy yourselves. The protagonist thought, Ara acts like she owns the place, even when she's just another guest. Marin shot to her feet and announced that they were leaving. She didn't want to eat anymore. Her appetite was ruined. Her rival smirked. If you're going to run off, at least leave your guard behind. Marin yelled back. What's that supposed to mean? Are you trying to poach him right in front of me? Ara replied with a grin. Oh my, you're absolutely right. You heard me correctly. Break your contract with Marin and come work for me. I'll cover your penalty fee and pay you 10 times what she's offering. On top of my initial offer. How does that sound? Marin screamed. My bodyguard would never agree to such a bribe. Then the MC calmly asked, 10 times more? That's right. Marin looked at him, completely baffled, and asked, what are you doing? He replied, my signing bonus was 1 million in cash. Can you really afford that? Ara scoffed, that's only 10 million. Marin screamed in disbelief. What? Ara coolly replied that she'd pay whatever was necessary. The protagonist then commented, I admire your directness, but hold on a second. I just remembered. The 1 million was just the advance. The full contract is for 10 million. So, you'd owe me 100 million. Are you sure you can transfer 100 million bells? Ara asked indignantly. Are you trying to make a joke out of me? He replied. This would be the second one. She seethed. You little punk. She then took off her glasses and demanded his name. Killian, the protagonist answered. She thought to herself, an amateur. In this business, you don't just give out your real name. With that, she walked to the exit, but turned back to add, I'm looking forward to our next meeting. Your life is about to get a lot more interesting. The MC shot back, sounds fun. My life is already pretty dynamic. After that, Ara shut the door behind her, pressing her back against it. The nerve of him, she thought furiously. Her manager hurried to her side and asked with concern, are you all right? She snapped, what do you think? Get the Wudok brothers on the phone. Now. Her manager quickly replied, right away, I'll call them. At that moment, a man named Win approached and said, there's no need. I've been watching for some time. It was the eldest of the brothers, an assassin from the Yan country. Ara approached him and, while adjusting her glasses, said, you're a capable one. How did you even get in here? He simply spread his arms and asked with a smirk, where can't I get in? Their esteemed client had even hooked him up with a pass. Then she cut to the chase, and Dugo? He shot back that Dugo was handling his own business. She coolly informed him that the plan had changed. He hit the elevator button, asking, so, we're supposed to take out the singer the second the concert starts and silence that voice for good, right? As the doors slid shut, she added, there's one more target. He asked, who? She replied, Marin's bodyguard, Killian Lockwood, and I want him to go out in the most painful way imaginable. He muttered, tough break for that guy, which earned him a glare for insulting the Princess Baron. Huh? She then demanded to know when he'd start the job. He laid out the plan. He'd slip into the stadium with the tech crew today and lay low overnight. Dugo would join the lighting crew tomorrow, on the day of the show. She told him the how was completely up to them. All that mattered were solid, reliable results. She added that he should just say the word if he needed anything. He smirked, saying he never gets tired of this part. He really admired how direct she was. Meanwhile, Ara was fuming, thinking, Marin, Killian, how dare they disrespect me in my own city? She vowed to show them exactly what that kind of disrespect costs. Just then, whispers of energy drifted to the protagonist's ear. He thought to himself, so, that's what's really going on. He was glad he'd managed to secretly let out some mana while talking with Ara, but it was still wild that this Woojun guy hadn't noticed a thing. It was a useful piece of intel. Mages were like birds of the night, hearing everything even in broad daylight. He stood up from his chair and suggested, should we call it a day? The concert's tomorrow. He said they needed to be in top form. Marin then asked why he hadn't just caved. He looked surprised. Huh? She clarified. The 10 million in cash. He followed up, asking if she seriously thought he only took the job for the money. She said yes, and he thought, well, she's not entirely wrong, but he still didn't appreciate the assumption. He reminded her, didn't you say you wanted to save your father? He genuinely hoped she'd succeed. In his past life, he never even got the chance to save his own mentor. He was never even given that opportunity, and he knew better than anyone how deeply regret can dig into your soul. He then asked, shouldn't we try everything we possibly can, so there's nothing left to regret? She stared at him, taken aback, then stepped closer and simply thanked him. The next day, the day of Marin Maria's concert had arrived. The crew was scrambling with equipment, their hurried voices echoing everywhere. Come on, people, the show's about to start. Where the hell is the new guy? We're already short-staffed as it is. Just then, Woojun, hiding out in a bathroom stall, stared at the protagonist's photo and thought, looks like it's showtime. He got up, thinking he couldn't believe he'd been stuck in a stall all day. It was time to head to the top floor and link up with his brother. It was room 403, right? If this contract wasn't worth a cool 5 million, he wouldn't be going through all this trouble. His brother should be in a staff uniform too, he figured. He wondered what kind of uniform he was wearing. Just then, he froze, spotting the protagonist by the sinks. He thought, Killian? What the hell is that freak doing here? He moved toward the exit, a thought flashing through his mind. Maybe I should just take him out right now. He ran through the intel on Killian Lockwood. First, he's a rising star from one of the top magic towers, the White Tower. Second, his specialty is martial arts, boosted by physical enhancement and acceleration magic. Third, his back is turned. This creates an opening for a sneak attack. Fourth, he's level 4, same as me, which makes a head-on fight unpredictable. He quickly decided, nah, no way. It's safer to strike together. We'll stick to the original plan. What if I can't catch him off guard? The whole situation could go south real fast. But in the next instant, the protagonist spoke without turning around. Calluses on your fingertips, but not your palms. That tells me you're a needle user. He froze in shock as the protagonist asked, so, you're an assassin, then? Killian then turned around, a calm look on his face. The assassin's mind raced. I've been made. Do I attack now, or do I bolt and regroup with Dugo? Before he could decide, the protagonist added, judging by your hesitation, I'd say I'm right. Then, with blinding speed, he flicked the bar of soap at him. The assassin thought, no time to dodge. As he instinctively threw his needles forward, his eyes widened as he realized, that's not just soap, it's a chunk of pure mana. He managed to react, but it cost him a dislocated shoulder, a small price to pay for the enemy's life, he thought. In that same instant, the needles shot towards the protagonist. The assassin was confident, thinking, even if you're 3 times the star of the White Tower, there's no way you can dodge hundreds of these. The dagger, coated in a lethal poison, was impossible to evade. The protagonist collapsed, his body starting to convulse, as Woojun looked on and said, it worked. Honestly, close-quarters combat was never his strong suit, but his target looked like some inexperienced punk, and just to be safe, it was better to finish him off for good. He swung the dagger down toward the protagonist's neck, but then he grunted, what? The blade wouldn't sink any deeper. What was stopping it? Was that the sound of the wind? Suddenly, needles were sticking out of his face. The next second, the MC pointed his weapon at him and said, looks like you're not a complete idiot after all. Woojun screamed in disbelief, how are you? The protagonist simply responded by covering his entire body in a thick aura that blocked everything. The assassin shrieked, what? That's impossible. It can't be. The protagonist shot back, oh, it's possible. A moment later, a gunshot rang out. After some time, the audience in the hall watching the stage started to murmur, only a minute left. Probably too late to hit the restroom, right? The guy next to him commented, you should have thought about that earlier. The very next second, Marin appeared on stage. She began to sing, her smile as blinding as a ray of sunshine. At that same moment, Doc Go was sitting near some crates, thinking, he's late. Did something happen? Are those his footsteps? Why is he so damn late? He then shot to his feet and went to the door, grabbing the handle. He thought in a panic, did he just walk past? Where did he go? That moron. How many times did I tell him we were meeting in room 407? He then peeked out from behind the door and shouted, hey, over here. The protagonist turned and said, so that's where you were hiding? Doc Go asked in surprise, you dared to mimic my brother's footsteps? The protagonist turned back and stated that when you're facing a professional killer, that's the bare minimum you should be capable of. Doc Go asked how his brother died. The protagonist answered, from a bullet to the head. Doc Go said at least it was quick. At least he didn't have time to feel the pain. He knew this day would come, but it still stung a little. This was supposed to be their last job together. The protagonist noted that for a guy whose brother just died, he seemed pretty calm. Doc Go replied that it was true, he was a killer, it was just part of the job. The protagonist asked, you said this is the last mission. Are you two really planning to retire? Doc Go scoffed, of course not. We're still way too young for that. I just got an offer from the top organization in the industry. The MC remarked, interesting. So, This is a showdown between an assassin and a mage from the best organizations in their respective fields. Go shot back. Since when is the White Tower the best? The protagonist declared that this was the year all of that would change. Go just laughed in response. When the protagonist asked what was so funny, Go began to unleash his aura, saying, "Maybe you didn't realize it, but being the best in your field means being at least on this level." With those words, he showed off the powerful streams of mana flowing from his body. The protagonist observed, "So you don't use throwing weapons, you use toxic chi." Go concentrated the energy in his hand and sneered, "Only amateurs who can't control toxic chi have to rely on hidden needles. Cool, right? And if you can control it like I can, this is what happens." With that, he launched a sphere of toxic chi toward the ceiling, where it flattened on impact. He asked, "What do you think would happen to a person if that hit them?" The next second, a drop of that toxic chi whizzed past the protagonist's back and bored a hole through the wall. He turned around in shock as the droplet suddenly flew back in the opposite direction. His opponent then added, "Oh, I forgot to mention that earlier. My poison takes effect with the slightest touch. You're already a dead man." The MC dropped to one knee, saying he already knew. It was obvious from the very beginning. Go demanded, "If you knew, then why the hell were you so calm?" The protagonist replied that it didn't concern him in the slightest. The killer asked what he meant, assuming he was immune to all poisons. He replied, that wasn't it. He simply coated his body in mana, completely isolating himself from the outside world. Go was shocked. "But then you shouldn't be able to breathe." The protagonist explained that he just creates his own clean air inside his lungs. It was no problem at all. His opponent asked if that was even possible, and our hero replied that you have to be at least on this level to be considered among the best in your field, right? Go yelled. "So my brother didn't die because of some stupid accident. You look pretty damn confident." The protagonist, looking right at him, thought, 4 condensed orbs filled with poison. All he needed to do was concentrate his mana into his eyes. Then his opponent screamed, "Then you should die. Try to dodge this." He unleashed a volley of shots, but the MC zipped past them using his acceleration, thinking he had to close the distance in one go. When he got close, his opponent yelled for him to stop. He actually dodged all of them? There's no way he's only level 4, right? Just then, our protagonist pressed the gun to his neck and pulled the trigger. Dissolved the bullet with his toxic chi, admitting it was actually pretty dangerous. The protagonist, shocked, thought that melting a bullet with toxic chi was some seriously impressive skill. Then grabbed him by the shirt, saying he finally got it. "So that's how your idiot brother bit the dust, huh?" He slammed a kick into Oscar's stomach, sending him flying. The MC crashed backstage, crying out in agony. Jumped down after him, sneering, "That's a taste of what he should have felt. But what are you gonna do? No one's even going to notice." Oscar grabbed the forearm of the hand holding the gun, saying, "It doesn't matter." Grunted, "You're a tough one, I'll give you that." He twisted Oscar's arm, but he didn't even flinch, just lie there and stop squirming. "This fight is over." The MC aimed the gun at him again, declared, "No, it's not over yet." Deflected the bullets with his mana, saying, "I already told you, it's useless to resist." He then began to melt the gun itself, and Oscar realized, this poison is so concentrated it's not just melting the bullets, but the entire gun. Said, "How many times do I have to say it? The outcome of this battle is already set. Alright, now it's really over." He paused, clenched his fist, and glanced behind him with a confused look. On stage, Marin Maria's performance was hitting its finale. Fireworks exploded as she screamed, "I can't hear you." Oscar thought, perfect. She had remembered everything perfectly. The sound capture spell activated, and screamed, "What the hell is this? No matter how hard I resist, it's not working." A deafening wave of sound crashed over and he started to roar, clutching his head. The MC thought, "I'll admit, he's tough." He had gathered the voices of thousands of people and focused them like a lightning strike on a single point. The sound waves should have already liquefied his insides, but he was still standing. Finally dropped to his knees, screaming his lungs out. Along with his hearing, he'd lost all sense of balance and direction. Oscar aimed another attack at him and asked, "This is painful, isn't it? I'll end your suffering right now." He fired a wind bullet that struck square in the chest, and he collapsed to the floor. The MC fell down, thinking, thank God Marine remembered the plan to the letter. They had gone over it just last night. Killian had told her they only needed to nail one specific cue. After she heard 2 gunshots, she was supposed to set off the fireworks and get the crowd to scream as loud as they possibly could. Marin had replied, "That seems simple enough. Will this really work?" Oscar had answered, "Yeah, for now, that'll be enough." He thought to himself that it really wasn't that difficult. The fireworks went off on stage again, and he was glad that it was all he needed. This, rookie, is the difference between a pro and an amateur. 3 days later, Marin was lounging on the couch, asking if he was sure he should be moving around already. "You're not just putting on a brave face, are you?" Oscar shot back. "And why would I need to show off?" She had even summoned the high priest for him, which was the reason he got back on his feet so quickly. Marin said it would have been a real problem if he died. "After all, I basically found you with one foot in the grave." Oscar thought to himself, come on, it wasn't that bad. Marin said that since he was there, it was time to settle up. Evelyn, the young girl, suddenly appeared beside the MC, which completely startled him. He wondered where on earth she had just popped out from. Marin explained that there was 1,100,000 in the envelope. She added another 100,000 as a personal thank you. "If it wasn't for you, I never would have gotten the chance to ask His Majesty for the elixir." The MC pushed the money back out of the envelope, told her that she earned this through her own unbreakable will. He added that he was sure her father would get better soon. Marin replied that she really hoped so. So, are you staying in town? I'm leaving today. Oscar confirmed that yes, he still had a few things to take care of. Marin warned him to be careful. Arasweet is probably losing her mind by now. Who knows what crazy idea will pop into her head next. The MC said he was about to tell her the same thing. Marin sighed, finding it all terrifying. You're clearly confident in yourself, but seriously, you're not even going to tell me your real name before you leave? Oscar cleared his throat and asked, what are you talking about? Marin pressed on. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the colored contacts? I've known the truth from the very beginning, asked in shock. So, she knew he was using an alias and hired him anyway? Marin just smiled and explained that when she started talking about saving her father, she noticed his eyes, and it was like looking into a mirror. Marin held up 2 fingers and said, so I decided to take a gamble. And how's that? The MC spread his arms wide and asked, Miss Marin, you really live for the moment, don't you? Marin shot back irritably. So, are you going to tell me or not? Oscar answered, you're one persistent woman. He revealed his real name was Oscar Crushen. Marin, surprised, said, I feel like I've heard that name somewhere before. Evelyn chimed in, isn't he that genius from the White Tower who developed the cure for the Caden flu? Right? Marin mentioned she'd read about him in the paper and that it turns out he's a total genius. Well, to be honest, for a genius, he seems way too normal, she mused. The MC retorted, Miss Marin, you look pretty average off stage, too. She cried out, annoyed. What? You think this is an ordinary face? Oscar then asked. And yet, on stage, you're an unparalleled diva, aren't you? Marin got a little flustered and said, you sure have a way with words. She stood up from the couch and thanked him, shaking his hand. She told him he was the best bodyguard she'd ever had. Meanwhile, in a hotel somewhere in Bonn, a subordinate burst into the room shouting, Boss. Kaya was just reading the newspaper and laughing to herself. The guy asked, good news or bad news first? Kaya looked up at him and said, it's always better to start with the good. Her subordinate then asked, do you remember that rookie's older brother, Woo Jun? Well, he's dead. Kaya smiled and replied, now that's some truly great news. She'd been planning on taking him out herself, but he was just getting in my way. Okay, so what's the bad news? She asked. Her subordinate replied, the rookie is dead, too. Kaya flew into a rage and screamed, how is any of that good news? Are you kidding me? Do you want to times become times the bad news? The man started waving his arms frantically, shouting, please, don't, it's not my fault. He explained that they were told it was her brother who took them out. Killian Lockwood? Kaya asked again, confused. What? The man replied, the target hired him as her bodyguard, code C. He showed her a photo and asked, her brother, right? Killian Lockwood. Kaya just laughed and asked, who the hell is this clown? The subordinate looked at the photo and asked, isn't that him? Kaya shot back, what? Do you think his face just changed while I wasn't looking? I need to see this guy's face for myself. K. Lockwood, a ringmaster for the Purple Brigade, wondered why this guy thought he could just pretend to be someone's brother. Meanwhile, a question was being discussed at the Sweet family estate. What's the situation with the Hoover family? They're hiring mercenaries, but so far, there's no one worth mentioning. Mark Sweet, the head of the Sweet family, remarked that since they'd lost, they should have just left with some dignity. Annoying pests. The servant replied, indeed, sir. Even though the Buzz Hoover family held the mayor's office once, they only lasted 2 years, and yet they still act like they own Barron City. Pathetic fools who couldn't even save their own patriarch. Mark then added that he was no less pathetic himself. The man apologized, and Mark asked about the progress on obtaining Buzz Hoover's classified documents. The man replied, it has been initiated, just as you ordered. Mark scoffed, what a worthless son Buzz has. He can't even break his own father's encryption magic. And how many months has it been already? The subordinate smiled and replied, and yet, thanks to his stupidity, the very existence of those documents has reached our ears. Mark laughed and said, it seems the heavens themselves are on our side. Everything will be ready within 2 days, correct? The man answered, of course. We've prepared quite a spectacular show. Mark then said, and one more thing, the ones who made my daughter cry. The subordinate asked, are you referring to Miss Arasu? Mark confirmed, yes, she's beside herself with stress right now. Who is it that's causing all this trouble? The man answered, that would be them. The singer, Marin Maria, and Killian Lockwood, from the White Tower. Mark replied, leave Marin Maria alone. She's now connected to His Majesty. We can't lay a finger on her. The subordinate then asked, and what should we do about Killian Lockwood? Mark ordered, keep an eye on him and report everything. We'll deal with him after we're finished with the Hoover family. How dare he upset my girl in the heart of my city? He's crossed the path of the Purple Brigade's ringmaster, the fearless fool. I'll make him regret it. At that moment, the real Killian was sipping from a cup, remarking on how good it was. Oscar dryly told him not to choke on it. Killian just grinned, thanking him for taking care of the job, so Oscar asked how he was feeling. Killian replied that the internal mess he'd been dealing with had completely cleared up. That's good to hear, Oscar said, but Killian insisted he take the payment for the gig. He explained that it wasn't in a forest warrior's nature to take credit for another's work. With a nod, Oscar simply said, seriously, man. Thanks. Killian then asked, so, where to now? Are you heading back to the White Tower? Oscar shot back, what if I'm not? You gonna try and drag me back by force? Killian shook his head. Nah, you're way more capable than me. Besides, I already sent word to the tower that there's nothing to worry about. Good, Oscar replied. Because I need to visit the Red Tower branch here in Baron. Killian's eyebrows shot up. The Red Tower? Yeah, Oscar confirmed. I've got to find someone. He then told Killian to try and be a little more careful for a while. A surprised Killian asked, why's that? Oscar cleared his throat, explaining, some girl named Arau, an influential guy's daughter, might have you in her sights now that you've revealed your name. Killian mulled this over. Yeah, there was one job I was thinking of taking, but if that's the situation, I'd better turn it down. Oscar noted his calm reaction and asked what the job was. Killian explained, they were looking for someone who was able to analyze some encrypted data. The pay was 500,000, straight cash. Oscar admitted that was a pretty sweet deal, but not worth risking your life over. Killian nodded in agreement. You're right about that, Oscar then asked. So, are you heading back to the White Tower? If you've got time, I can wait and we could go together. Killian looked genuinely surprised. Coming from you, of all people, I never expected an offer that friendly. Did something happen while we were apart? Oscar wondered what kind of a reaction that was. Killian admitted it would be nice to travel back with him, but he had to stick around Baron for a bit. Turns out, a different job had just landed in his lap. Naturally, Oscar asked why. Killian's expression darkened as he replied, I have to hunt down the worst traitor in the history of the Forest Tribe. Word is, he's operating in this city. That's the real reason I'm here. Oscar realized things were way more serious than he'd thought. Killian added that he couldn't share the details with an outsider, but that was the gist of it. Oscar placed a fist over his chest, saying he hoped Killian would catch the traitorous bastard. I'll see you back at the White Tower, then. He then held out his fist, prompting a surprised Killian to ask how he knew the traditional Forest Tribe greeting, admitting he never figured Oscar for someone interested in their culture. Oscar internally groaned at how awful his past self's personality must have been. Literally everyone said so. He sighed. Not interested? That's not true. Are you really gonna leave me hanging? Killian put his own fist to his chest and replied, of course not. He then bumped his fist against Oscar's, saying they'd see each other, back at the tower. A little later, Oscar was walking down the street, feeling a knot of anxiety about approaching the Red Tower. What if Edna was intentionally hiding from him? You could track a demon with just a drop of blood, but if a dragon truly wanted to hide, he wasn't so confident. Suddenly, his eyes shot wide as he wondered why he was sensing energy signature of at least the 7th level. He spotted Kaya just ahead and immediately thought, she's powerful. As Oscar stared, a stream of cars suddenly cut between them. Once the cars had passed, Kaya was gone. Elsewhere, her assistant asked, don't you think you're being a little too lenient with him, just because he's friends with your brother? We just saw them having lunch. Shouldn't we make him answer for what he did to that rookie? Kaya's order was blunt. Take him out. It's not like we officially accepted him into our ranks. If anything, it's better this way. We don't need some fool who can get taken down by a 3rd-level mage. That's not what's important right now, Kaya mused. If he had actively tried to find me while I was concealing my presence, could he have done it? The assistant scoffed. Him? I doubt it. He'd be lucky to even sense someone was nearby. But Kaya pressed. Do you really think there's a 3rd-level mage capable of that, anywhere in this city? The assistant asked, clearly annoyed. What is this, 20 questions? You probably couldn't find a mage like that on the entire continent, let alone in a backwater like Baron. Kaya remained unconvinced. Then why can't I shake this feeling that our eyes met? Her assistant just laughed it off. Nah, you were just seeing things. No, it wasn't that, Kaya insisted. What's his name again? The assistant replied. Oscar Crushen, the famous geniuses from the White Tower. Lately, all the papers. The headlines were all about him. Ka mused. How curious, wondering what the future had in store for him. After a while, our hero arrived, thinking he'd finally made it. A sign read, Red Tower, Burn Branch. Oscar stepped inside, where a young woman at the counter asked how she could help him. He simply replied that he was looking for someone. The receptionist asked if he'd brought a blood sample of the person he was searching for. Yes, Oscar confirmed. She told him that in that case, he could go to the designated room and place it in the prepared test tube. He entered the room, glancing around before thinking, all right, Edna's blood. He then pricked his own finger with a needle, thinking, this should do it. He recalled that even though her blood was artificial dragon's blood made from his own, by using its parameters to alter the composition and structure, it might lack the unique properties of true dragon's blood, but it should be more than enough for them to track her down. Oscar stepped out of the room and announced that he was leaving the test tube on the counter. He set it down with a quick, thank you. But the girl suddenly called out, sir, wait a second, as she rushed out from behind her desk. You can't just leave, she explained. First, you need to select a service plan and pay for it in advance. Oscar stared at her, completely baffled, and asked, what? I have to pay. The receptionist replied, well, of course you do. This is a business. Oscar paused, thinking it over. He'd used their services just like this 100 times before, 26 years ago. When did all this change? He wondered. The girl presented him with a price list, detailing options like premium tracking, 1st rank tracking, 2nd rank tracking, and 3rd rank tracking, as well as 4th and 5th rank tracking. Oscar told her he'd take the ultra-wide radius, continent-wide search, the premium plan. He couldn't help but add that the service used to be free, but he could see things were different now. What? The girl asked, thinking he must be confused. The Red Tower's tracking services have never been free. Oscar insisted that was the case, or at least, he'd heard the premium plan used to be complimentary for the head of the White Tower. The girl cut him off, her eyes widening slightly. The head of the White Tower? You're not from the White Tower, are you? Oscar gave a slight smile and said, no, I have no connection to them. The girl let out a sigh of relief. Oh, that's good. We were instructed to add a 30% surcharge for all mages from the White Tower. Oscar raised an eyebrow. Just the White Tower? Why's that? The girl explained. It's because of the previous head of the White Tower, a man named Oscar Sage. He used the premium service 108 times, she continued, taking full advantage of his privileges as the tower head. It put us through some really tough times, and the Red Tower's finances took a serious hit. The elders here still grind their teeth whenever his name is mentioned. Turns out he was a lot less pleasant than the stories make him out to be. I doubt he even knew how much the ingredients for that service cost. If the royal family hadn't settled his debts after the war, the Red Tower would have gone under. It would have been ancient history. Decades ago, the heads of the mage towers and members of the royal family did receive complimentary services, but those privileges were revoked entirely because of him. Oscar's mind reeled. Because of me, he thought. He reached into his coat pocket and asked, "So, how much is the premium plan?" The girl replied, 1.5 million. Oscar's face paled in shock. What? Can I pay in installments? The receptionist shook her head. Of course not. Our hero countered that he could pay 1,100,000 right now, and the remaining 400,000 in a few days. Would that work? He asked. The girl replied that if he failed to pay the balance on time, his initial deposit would be non-refundable, and, of course, they wouldn't be able to provide him with the search results. Oscar quickly agreed, saying that was fine with him. The receptionist took the envelope of cash from him and said, "If you agree to the terms, please sign this contract. The search and processing of the results will take at least 1 day, and a maximum of 3. Oscar signed the contract, said, "Okay, thank you," and left the building with a wry smile. A short time later, he was pounding on a door and shouting, "Killian!" The door swung open to reveal his friend, who asked, "Oscar, what brings you here?" Oscar, breathing heavily, immediately asked him to tell him about that job he'd mentioned earlier. Sometime later, at the Hoover family estate, our hero confirmed. "So, let me get this straight. The client is the son of the former mayor of Barron? So, what's the deal?" he asked. "You said you'd fill us in before we met him in person, and is it really okay for us to show up in the middle of the night?" Apparently, it was, as the matter was urgent. Killian replied that they were told the client was looking for contractors as soon as possible, but because the job requires some very specific qualifications, they've apparently been having some trouble finding the right people. Oscar surmised, "It's probably related to data decryption. One wrong move, and the whole thing could be ruined." Killian said that before getting into the job specifics, he needed to give them some background, asking if the MC knew who the former mayor of Byron was. "Buzz Hoover?" the MC asked. Killian confirmed. Yes, Buzz Hoover wanted to turn Byron around. This city might look perfect, but a lot of its residents are dealing with the fallout from gambling, illicit substances, and alcohol problems. Corrupt corporations just conveniently ignore this dark side of the city. In fact, they only help it thrive, Oscar chimed in. So this vicious cycle just lines their pockets. Exactly, Killian agreed. And Buzz Hoover decided to purge the city of these issues, declaring all-out war on anything that clouded the mind. The MC asked, "And what was the result?" Killian replied simply, "Victory. In 2 years, the presence of illicit substances dropped by 86%. "That's incredible," Oscar remarked. Killian's tone turned grim. It was. However, Buzz Hoover was then found dead in his own estate, right before the grand opening of a new rehabilitation center for addicts. The MC pressed, "In his own home? That sounds really shady." Killian said that. Some say the mob took him out, while other rumors claim some powerful user put a hit on him through the Purple Brigade. But nobody knows the real story. "So, what exactly do we need to decrypt?" the MC asked. Killian replied, "The files are locked with Hoover's personal encryption spell. Apparently, it's the most confidential information he left behind." Oscar figured there was a high probability that someone close to Hoover had been the one to take him out. He thought for a second and asked, "What, about the Sweet family? Did they have some kind of beef with Hoover, or something?" Killian clarified, "You're talking about Marku?" On the contrary, Marku was one of Buzz's biggest supporters. He personally led the campaign to get the junk off the streets. Thanks to that, he gained a massive amount of public support and became the front-runner for the next mayoral election. "For real?" the MC asked, wondering if her dad was actually a stand-up guy. Just then, the door behind Killian opened and a young man walked in, greeting them and asking if they were the mages from the White Tower. The MC sized him up, thinking, he's just a kid? The young man introduced himself. "I am the eldest son of the Hoover family, Jake Hoover." Oscar gave a wave and jumped in. "Allow me to introduce us. I'm a third-level mage, Oscar Crucian. And this is..." Killian cut in, introducing himself as Killian Lockwood, a fourth-level mage. Jake gasped in shock. "Killian Lockwood, the one who protected Marin Maria?" The MC grinned and answered for him. "Yep, that's him. He's the rising star of the White Tower, the one who took down the notorious Udo brothers." Jake was stunned, saying he couldn't believe someone so amazing was here to see him. "I assume you already know why I'm hiring mages, right?" Killian shot the MC an annoyed look, thinking, "All right, Oscar, what now?" The MC thought back. Why is he making that face at me? Apparently, Jake thought Killian was the one in charge. To be fair, Killian probably thought so too and figured he could have handled it himself. Regardless, Oscar spoke up, saying he'd heard Jake was looking for someone capable of deciphering some information. Jake looked at him and confirmed, "Yes, my father told me he'd collected some explosive data, but I've never been able to crack anything so important." Oscar asked, "Do you think your father's death is connected to this information?" Jake replied firmly, "Yes, I wasn't sure at first, but after recent events, I have no doubt." The MC found it interesting that he'd only recently become certain and asked, "And why is that?" Jake looked down and explained that after his father's death, he immediately sent invitations to every renowned cryptography mage in the world. But on their way to Byron, something bizarre happened to every single one of them. One guy fell off his horse, another's engine exploded, and an entire bridge collapsed just as they were crossing it. Some were even jumped by bandits, which is practically unheard of on the roads these days. As a result, not one of them ever made it to Byron. Jake waved his hand for emphasis and asked, "Isn't that strange? I'm sure someone is deliberately trying to keep this information from ever seeing the light of day." "That's definitely unusual," Oscar replied. Jake said, "So, I need to ask you to go through a small procedure before you can accept the job. Namely, signing the Alterara Order Pact. You know how it works, right?" Oscar reached for it and replied, "Of course." He thought to himself that while such a thing was rare, this was a seriously harsh contract. Breaking it could cost you your life. And this kid actually got one. The pact specified that the contractor was forbidden from damaging the encrypted data under any circumstances. The contractor is forbidden from disclosing any details of this order to a third party. These conditions can only be waived with the express consent of Jake Hoover. Upon completion of the job, all terms and conditions on this contract will be considered null and void. The MC paused, considering how he was trying to fulfill his duties as both the eldest heir and a devoted son. Before signing, Oscar posed a question. "Did everyone else in this room sign one of these too?" Jake replied, "Of course." He insisted that safety was his top priority, so there was no need for concern. The MC glanced at the men standing behind Jake, sizing them up. They were all level 4s. Oscar stated that it wasn't his place to judge, but requested, "Please provide the contracts they signed." One of the goons shouted in frustration, "This guy's a moron. How dare a level 3 talk to us like that?" Suddenly, the mercenaries' bodies were constricted by mana, and they realized they couldn't move. The MC mused that all he had to do was apply the wind just right, and he could fool these simpletons by faking an energy pressure far beyond their own. Against level 4 mercenaries, it was almost too easy. One of them clutched his throat, gasping, "What is this? From a mere level 3? The MC snapped his fingers, coolly stating, "This is the basis of trust, and, personally, I don't see any problem with my request." Jake waved his hand dismissively, signaling his understanding. "Gentlemen, stop getting in his way." He then rang a bell and ordered the other contracts to be brought in. A moment later, Oscar was on the couch, flipping through the documents. He read 2 names aloud, Tonfrank and Cokeberry. One of the named men scowled. "What now? What else could you possibly want?" In that instant, the MC unleashed a stream of wind, slamming the man to the floor. The other mercenaries cried out in shock. "Bry," Jake yelled, completely baffled. "What are you doing? Who gave you those contracts?" The MC calmly replied, "One of your official employees," as he tore the contract in half. "Detain this one, too. It's a forgery. They handed me plain paper that doesn't contain a single trace of Alterara's divine power." Jake was stunned. "What?" The MC explained. "A contract infused with divine power isn't so easy to tear. These two aren't bound by any pact. Which most likely means they're the ones who leaked the information." One of the knights drew his sword and shouted, "Are you really going to listen to this charlatan?" Killian shot him a look of pure disdain before lunging forward, kicking the sword from his grasp. He slammed the knight to the floor and pinned his head with his boot. The man immediately started begging for his life. "I don't know anything," Killian demanded. "Who do you work for?" The knight shrieked, "I don't know. I was hired through a third party." Killian remained silent, knowing full well what his employers knew because he was the one who told them. The knight screamed, "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything, the number of mercenaries, their levels, all of it. That's everything we know. Just let me go." The MC interjected, stating that their employer would soon arrive with a force much stronger than these mercenaries, intending to seize the data. A terrified Jake stammered, "That can't be." The MC calmly told him it was too soon to give up. "I'll take 500,000 to decrypt the data, and another 500,000 for me and Killian to act as your security. That brings the total to 1 million. How does that sound?" Jake yelled, "I agree," and offered to sign the contract on the spot. Oscar smiled, assuring him he wouldn't regret it. A short time later, Jake revealed he had hidden the data in his personal safe room. The MC repeated, "Your own safe room. That's good. I have one myself." Jake seemed pleased by this, asking, "You do, right?" He then pressed a specific brick in the wall, and a hidden passage opened before them. Jake mentioned it was the first time he'd ever brought anyone else in here. "The data is in this briefcase. I found it in my father's personal safe." Oscar looked at it thoughtfully before commenting. Even with a quick glance, it's obvious. An impressive number of spells have been layered onto this. Specifically, 3 distinct spells, triple encryption, resistance, and an explosion curse. If anyone unauthorized tries to open it, the briefcase will detonate, and the contents will be completely destroyed. It's a good thing you didn't try to force it. Fear crept into Jake's voice. "I had no idea it was that dangerous." "So, does this mean you can actually crack it?" The MC simply replied, "Of course." He thought to himself that compared to military-grade encryption, this was just child's play. He added aloud, "For me, this is an elementary task." A few moments later, he successfully opened the briefcase, and Jake exclaimed in astonishment, "It's open. You actually did it." The MC just nodded. "Yeah, take a look, for yourself." Killian then commented, "Some might write that off as a simple trick, but I, for one, couldn't do that. It's a truly remarkable skill." He read through the documents, and with tears welling up, said, "Tell him thank you so much. The MC then asked, "So, does he have any leads?" Jake shook his head. No, apparently, even though the documents detailed the corrupt dealings of various politicians and corporations, that kind of graft is just business as usual in Barron. Taking out his father over something so common just wouldn't have been a profitable move for any of them. Oscar watched him, wondering if all the kids in Barron were forced to grow up this fast, though he remembered Lloyd had matured quickly too. The MC suggested that, since the accounting ledgers were a dead end, they should check out the diary. Jake opened the diary, his hands trembling slightly as he began to read aloud. June 10th. It's been almost 2 years since I became the mayor of Barron. The newspaper headline from the other day called Barron a city of booze and gambling. When you compare that to the old days, when it was known for booze, gambling, and illicit substances, this is a huge success. And it's all thanks to the hard work of the people of this city, including myself and Mark. With 2 years left in my term, I know Barron will become an even better place. July 2nd. Even though we broke up the biggest gang in the city, the volume of illicit substances on the streets isn't going down. I'm more than certain that small-time dealers can't be moving this much product on their own. There has to be an organized group pulling the strings. August 22nd. I arrested and interrogated about 100 dealers. What they told me was shocking. None of them even knew who their suppliers were. Just how big is this operation? I can't even begin to guess how deep their connections go. At the very least, there has to be a corporation or a powerful politician backing them. Jake lowered his gaze, saying his father thought he should discuss this with Mark. August 24th. Last night, I brought this up with Mark. Something feels off. It was like he already knew every detail of my private investigation. I hate to do it, but I'm going to have to keep an eye on him, too. He sighed heavily, and the MC asked, "What is it?" Jake's voice was shaky. "There's more." Oscar gently took the diary from his hands, saying, "If this is too hard for you, I'll read." September 1st. Mark Sweet turned out to be a total snake. He's actually a lieutenant in the biggest illicit substances cartel in the entire Happy Ending Empire. I wanted to grab him by this collar and demand answers right then and there, but I have to be patient. The future of 600,000 Barron residents is riding on my next move. Jake stood beside them, his fists clenched in anger. The MC continued reading. The next entry is September 18th. Tomorrow's the grand opening of the Addiction Rehabilitation Center, and today I have a meeting scheduled with a government official tied to the Imperial family. If this goes according to plan, I'll be able to take down Happy Ending without much trouble, all for the sake of Barron's future. And that's the last entry. Jake broke down, pressing his fist to his chest and choking out. September 18th. That was the day his father died. He remembered Mark promising he would personally find the killer and that he would continue his father's work, telling him not to worry. He said all of that right at my dad's grave. And that man, he's a lieutenant in the narcotics cartel. Jake sobbed, asking, How could he do that to us? Oscar placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He's going to pay for what he's done. But Jake just cried. That's impossible in this city. The MC told him not to give up hope. We'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's punished. Jake looked up, a sliver of hope in his eyes. Really? The MC smirked. You think we became mages of one of the 4 great towers for nothing? Oscar, this situation is way more serious than we thought. Barron could, Killian said, end up completely under the control of a narcotics cartel. The MC replied, This isn't just Barron's problem anymore. The city has a population of 600,000, but besides, the residents, about 30 million tourists come through here every year, and that number is only getting bigger. What do you think happens when the new mayor, Mark Sweet, gets all those tourists hooked on their product? Killian answered grimly. They'll all go home addicted, and the cartel will suddenly have a new customer base spread across the entire nation. So this diary is our only shot at stopping his election? The MC nodded. Looks like it. The real question is, when is Mark going to make his move? Killian reasoned that if Mark was planning to run for mayor, he'd never let the contents of this diary see the light of day, and he'd pick a time when all the residents' attention was focused elsewhere, so nobody would have a clue what was going down at the estate. Oscar asked, What kind of moment are we talking about? Like a huge celebration or something? Jake confirmed, Exactly. There's a festival downtown tonight. The MC and Killian shared a look, as Jake added, They're also planning to put on a really elaborate fireworks display. So, it's happening tonight, Killian stated. Oscar agreed, saying they had to start preparing their counterplan immediately. Killian then asked, Oscar, we need to get Jake out of here, right? They were already in way over their heads and would have to call for backup. Seriously, does he have any common sense? Oscar asked, to which Killian replied with clear annoyance. He's just a regular guy, actually. But Jake suddenly cut in. No, I'm not running. If I back down now, when will I ever get another chance to avenge my father's killer? Not in this lifetime. If you guys think it's too dangerous, then I'll just break our contract and handle this myself. Oscar studied him for a moment and said, You know, I'm actually a little offended. Killian quickly added, We're not abandoning you, Jake. The MC asked, But you trusted us, right? Jake looked at them and said, Killian, Oscar, thank you. Really? Oscar quipped, Save the thanks for after we pull this off. Okay, right now we need a plan. Is there any kind of communication device on the estate? Jake answered, Yes, but we can't contact the outside world right now. Security measures have been beefed up all over Barron since yesterday. I realize now this was all part of their plan. The MC asked, Do you have a transmitting crystal ball? Jake replied, My father was an antique collector, so yeah, I have one. But why do you need it? Oscar answered, It's essential. Where is it? We have to get a message out. Jake opened a closet, revealing the item. Seriously? This thing? It's right here, actually. I liked it, so my father gave it to me. It's kind of embarrassing. Killian suddenly remarked, there's a piano in the bushes. The MC just face-palmed and told him to shut up. Oscar looked at the crystal ball and said, perfect. He asked if he could use it, and Jake handed it over. Oscar activated it, remarking, good, it still works. Killian asked, when did you figure out how to use that? I've only ever read about these ancient relics in books. Oscar just shrugged. I was bored, so I looked into how it works. He thought to himself, an ancient relic? This thing is only a couple of decades old. Back then, it was considered cutting-edge technology. Oscar waved his hand, deactivating the ball. Did you manage to send the message? Killian asked. Yep, Oscar confirmed. Killian sighed. I just hope the elders don't show up late. The elders? Oscar replied. Yeah, don't worry. They should get here, just in time. Later, in the control room for the transmitting crystal balls, the dispatch manager was at his post. He let out a loud yawn as he stretched. The new junior, who was also the department's only other employee, called out, boss. The manager replied, yeah, what is it? The new guy asked. So, what exactly do we do here, anyway? The manager stretched again. What do we do? The guy pressed on. Yeah, you haven't really explained anything to me. He thought to himself that it had been 3 days since he was hired, and all his boss ever did was yawn. He knew civil service jobs were cushy, but this was ridiculous. The manager finally turned to him. Haven't I told you yet? Man, you're full of energy. Do you even know anything about this department? The kid piped up, saying he was told that hundreds of people used to work here and that it was an honor for him to be in a department with such a rich history. The manager grumbled to himself. What an idiot, spouting all that nonsense. He then explained, look, when one of those balls starts to glow, numbers will appear. Our job is to write them down and decode the message. The new guy sounded underwhelmed. That's it? The boss sighed. Yeah, these days. But before they invented the technomagical communication device, this very ball was what connected the entire world. Man, those were the days. Back then, everyone had a pocket-sized version of one of these crystal balls. Back then, to contact someone, you'd send them your unique number, and on the other end, they'd instantly know you were trying to reach them. The kid's eyes widened. A pocket crystal ball? So you could just carry it around with you? The boss nodded. Yep. The pocket version had a limit on how long the number you sent could be, though. But this high-tech version right here has no such limit. The new guy asked, so, if you're just sending a number, it's just an identification number, the length shouldn't matter. The man scoffed, you're just a kid, born in peacetime. Have you ever even heard of a cipher? The younger man clenched his fists, insisting, yes, I have. The boss crossed his arms and explained, the numbers we get from the crystal ball can be combined to form complete sentences. During the war, this was precisely how we transmitted urgent intelligence. The employee asked, so, our job is just to relay information? The man confirmed, exactly. When a number comes in, we have to analyze it, decode it into text, and report it to the higher-ups. This office is under the direct authority of the imperial family, which means the code itself is top secret. Only the heads of the magic, towers, the dukes, and the patriarchs of the great sword clans even have access to our department's line. The younger man noticed a ball light up behind his boss and stared at it in shock. The boss continued, it might sound a bit over the top, but nobody has contacted us in 18 years. That's why they've downsized the staff so much. Honestly, I didn't even think they'd hire anyone new. The subordinate cut him off, shouting, boss. The man asked, what is it? The employee yelled, pointing as the crystal ball behind him glowed brightly. The boss smirked, what? Trying to pull a prank on me, are you? He turned around and his face dropped. The man screamed, what? Why now, of all times? The younger man yelled that he thought he saw numbers appearing. The boss shot back, I can see that myself, you idiot. He squinted at the numbers and said, Baron, this isn't a happy ending. You, write down the numbers. I'll handle the decryption. The subordinate replied, yes, sir. After a few minutes, they were huddled over the table, decoding the message. The chief read aloud, the city of Baron is in danger of being seized by the Empire's largest syndicate, happy ending. Their plan is to flood the entire nation with illicit substances, and it all starts today. The employee asked in shock, isn't this a massive deal? The boss yelled, contact the National Security Bureau immediately. Right now. Meanwhile, in the forest near the Buzz, Hoover Estate, a voice confirmed. The cameras are offline. Omar, the leader of the Level 4 Mercenary Alliance, stated, excellent. We have 5 hours. We need to retrieve the encrypted data within that window. Samuel, a captain of another Level 4 mercenary group, scoffed, the cameras are already down, so what are we waiting for? Omar turned and replied coolly, we have a plan. We're following it. Samuel sneered, who made you the boss of me? We'll handle this, our own way. Jackson, another Level 4 mercenary captain, chimed in. In that case, Jackson's mercenaries will be moving out separately, too. Omar sighed and thought to himself, what was the point of gathering 152 mercenaries? We've hired 10 different companies that have never worked together, so of course there's no cohesion. The real problem is these Level 4 captains. Their egos are completely out of control. Someone shouted, who cares who turned off the cameras? Are they just gonna let us push forward? One of Omar's men suggested he teach the others a lesson first. Omar replied, no, it's fine. I expected this from the beginning. Our employer's daughter put a 300,000 bell bounty on a magician named Killian, so it's no surprise they're acting this greedy. His subordinate asked, is that a sweet deal? Then we need to be the first ones in there, even more so now. Another mercenary urged, boss, We should get moving before it's too late. At this rate, they're gonna snatch up all the profit. Omar finally nodded and said, "All right, go ahead." The men cheered, but suddenly, one of the mercenaries stepped on something. Omar yelled, "What happened?" The man was on the ground, clutching his leg and screaming, "My leg!" Omar threw up his hand and shouted, "There are traps!" He ordered everyone to watch their footing. A mercenary cried out in fear, "Boss." Omar yelled, "Now what's wrong?" The man stammered, "Jackson's dead." Omar rushed over to him and saw the body. Just then, panicked shouts erupted from the mercenaries behind them. What kind of clumsy fool doesn't watch where he's going? The mine went off. If you step on one, don't lift your foot. Don't step on anything. They activate on their own. The men were suddenly assaulted by streams of mana, and Omar ordered, "Everyone, run for the estate. Get out of the forest." The men screamed, "We need to stay behind cover. That way, they can't pinpoint our location." Just as he said that, a blast of magic pierced him through the back. The mercenaries scattered in terror, screaming for someone to save them. At that moment, Killian was perched in a tree before dropping down and remarking, "They were just wandering through the forest without a care in the world. It was like they were begging me to take them out." In a flash, he wiped out every mercenary within his mana's reach. A lone survivor hid behind a tree, clamping a hand over his mouth, thinking, "This is a massacre. He's begging for his life. Just let him go." When the forest fell silent, he let out a shaky sigh. The man clutched his gun, peering out from behind the tree. He thought, "He's gone, right? He's gotta be. I'm not gonna die like this." Something wet dripped down his face, and for a second, he hoped it was just water. But when the guy looked up, he saw Killian standing right in front of him. He let out a blood-curdling scream and started blasting away with his gun, yelling for Killian to die, but not a single bullet even touched him. That's when Killian said something he truly detests. The man shrieked in terror, "What the hell? Why won't you die?" Killian swung his weapon and answered, "It's the reek of gunpowder in the sacred forest." At that very moment, our MC was sitting on a rooftop, thinking to himself, "This is burning through a lot of my mana." To pinpoint enemies hiding in the woods, he was casting thermal image recognition magic on his eyes. And to take them down, he was using a special wind bullet crafted for ultra-long-range engagements, what you could call a wind sniper rifle. It's definitely potent, but each shot costs a ton of mana. Still, he'd already neutralized 67 targets, which was more than enough for now. Oscar then commanded, "Scan." A mana detection sweep began, giving him a bird's-eye view. He glanced at the radar and thought, "That's Killian, and those two are our allied mercs. The rest are protecting Jake and the estate." About 50 of the remaining enemies were in full retreat. Is the battle really over this quickly? Our hero wondered, just as he noticed the targets suddenly turning back. Oscar wondered, why are they heading back to the estate? Are they really going to continue the plan after the thrashing they just got in the forest? And the speed they were moving at was completely unnatural. By all rights, they should be totally exhausted. Our protagonist realized something was seriously wrong. At the same time, Killian glanced at the sky, thinking, the smell of gunpowder had faded. Did they all escape? Just then, two men ran out of the woods, yelling, "Sir Killian?" he asked, surprised. "Are you both okay?" One of the mercenaries yelled back, "Yeah, we did it. Can you believe it? The four of us fought off an army of 150 men. They're gonna write books about this epic victory." Suddenly, Killian's eyes widened as he shouted, "Stop!" He ordered them to prepare for battle. The enemy is coming back. A savage cry echoed as the returning mercenaries charged forward, growling like wild animals. Killian watched them, thinking, no one in their right mind would come back here. He slugged one of the men in the face, only for the guy to suddenly sink his teeth into his thigh. Killian clenched his fist and slammed it into the mercenary's head. Looking around, he thought, this condition. It looks just like the result of the technique that traitor used on our tribe's chieftain. One of his men was struggling to hold an enemy back and screamed for help. There was clearly something very wrong with them. Killian shouted, "He's coming." But then he froze, his eyes widening in shock. A voice echoed from behind him, "Long time no see." Killian whipped his head to the side and gasped, "Kaya Lockwood?" She mused, "Something like 4 years, right?" Killian snarled, "What is a traitor like you doing here?" Kaya put a finger to her lips playfully and asked, "Traitor? That's a bit harsh, don't you think?" Killian demanded, "Is it true?" Kaya replied, "Is what true?" Killian roared that she had stolen the king's tattoo from the forest temple and driven the chieftain insane when he tried to stop her. "Was it really you?" He clenched his fists, his voice cracking. He needed to hear it from her own lips. The Kaya Lockwood he knew. She might have had a nasty temper, but she was the most powerful and respected warrior, rising to the rank of warrior chieftain at the young age of 18. She was his idol. Someone who understood perfectly which traditions were worth fighting for. That's the person he remembered. So why? Why would she corrupt the chieftain's mind, turning him into a battle-crazed monster, just so he would fall at the hands of the very forest warriors he loved? Silently, Killian begged her to deny it, to tell him it was all some terrible misunderstanding. If she just told him that, even if it took time, one day he would be able to. Kaya cut his thoughts short and said, "Yeah, it was me. So what?" Killian stared at her in disbelief and asked, "No excuses?" Kaya just smiled and said, "Why would I need to make one up?" He let out a scream of pure agony. The chieftain she drove. It was a cruel fate, meeting a disgraceful end at the hands of those he cherished most, rather than on a proper battlefield. Kaya just smiled and said, "What a total shame." Killian's anger flared as he snapped into a fighting stance. Kaya mused aloud, "Does he really want to throw down? Surely he's not blind to the massive gap in our power." Killian shot back, "That means nothing. A warrior of the forest never retreats." Kaya chuckled, "My idiotic brother, sometimes it pays to fall back and run. It's the smart play, if you want to survive in this world a little longer. Killian declared that his father and the chief never taught him to live smartly. They taught me the life of a warrior, he finished. Kaya sighed. You really are a forest simpleton. Do you honestly think your friend can hold out if you don't get back to him now? Killian swung his fists wildly and yelled, Oscar is strong. He won't lose to a bunch of pathetic puppets. A short while later, the mercenaries were battling for their lives, gasping for air. One of the men reached out a hand, begging for help. His comrade froze, a dark thought crossing his mind. Hold on. What if I just use him as a decoy? I could escape. He suddenly remembered the man from a while back, showing him a picture and asking, He's a cute kid, isn't he? That's my son. He had promised to take him on a trip with him right after this mission was over. The mercenary squeezed his eyes shut, let out a battle cry, and charged back toward his friend. He glanced aside just in time to see an enemy bearing down on him. The man thought with grim irony, and this is exactly why you shouldn't get ahead of yourself.